Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley, Chapter 1. I swallowed the anchor and came ashore in 1954, and since then I've been cruising alone in a two-compartment galleon-head lash-up in that part of New York City they call Peter Cooper Village. It's a pretty snug harbor. It's tidy and ship-shape, and that's for me. If you can't understand exactly what I mean, it's because I still talk sailor talk, and probably always will. What I mean to say is that I gave up going to sea and came on to dry land in 1954. Since then, I've been living alone in a two-room kitchen and bath apartment in Peter Cooper Village, which is a section of New York City. Tidy and ship-shape means tidy and ship-shape. The treasures I've collected during 24 years in the United States Navy, and every kind of ship from the old four-stack destroyers to the big battle wagons and the carriers, are crammed into that apartment. It's full of a sailor's memories, which is what a sailor has more of than almost anybody, I guess. There's the picture of me in recruit training camp in 1930, for instance. 18 years old and looking about 12 in my first dress blues and flat hat. I was too old to cry and not old enough to shave every day. I sure was a country boy back in 1930, from Conway, Arkansas, to be exact. It's a wonder I lived the way I looked then. I'd never even seen salt water. On another wall, there's a picture of me and the gang from the 1st Division on the old Black Hawk, when I was a coxswain, or what they call a third-class bosun's mate under the system they have now. That was out in the old Asiatic Squadron, which was the best duty in all the world, we thought. We hung around Manila and Cavite and went up to China in the springtime, and we sang, "We Won't Go Back to Subic Anymore." That long skinny flag is the commissioning pennant from the Daily. The first commissioning pennant usually goes to the skipper who puts the ship in commission when she's brand new. We gave it to Captain Frey as usual, and he gave it to me, privately, and in his cabin, about a month after that. Only a few of us know why I have it. The captain and the quartermaster of the watch and the guy I knocked down when he froze on the wheel in a tight maneuver. On the table there is the gold cup I won with the light heavyweight championship of the Pacific Fleet in 1938. I weighed 170 pounds then, 10 pounds less than I do now. The picture of the red-faced guy standing in front of an admiral is me. The admiral is Halsey. Some combat artist we had with us off the Philippine Sea painted it when the admiral gave me my Navy Cross for helping out around an ammunition fire. My face turned red the first week I went to sea and has been that color ever since. So that's what the room looks like when you come in. Actually, you might say it looks like something that has come through a bad destroyer crossing of the North Atlantic. But I like it. On the particular afternoon in the middle of June when this story begins, there was a lot of bright sunshine streaming in the living room window as I opened the door. It brought out the dust on the tabletop, and I ran my hand over it and tried to clean it off. But what I needed was a swab. It really wasn't that dirty, I'm just fussy. I opened the window and the city air was cool and clean after the rain that had washed it during the forenoon watch. That's between 8 and 12 o'clock in the morning. One of the reasons I like this particular apartment is that you can look out the window and see the stacks and the big traveling cranes over in the Navy Yard in Brooklyn. You can watch the ships go up and down the East River and hear the tugs tooting at their work. At the time, they were building a huge aircraft carrier in the graving dock in the Navy Yard, and her superstructure was as large as some of the buildings around the yard. It was a great day. I glanced at my mail. There was a letter announcing a reunion of all the people who had ever served on the Boxer. It would be in the San Francisco in November. I figured I might go. There was a letter from a girl in San Francisco, too. I read it and figured that I'd stay right where I was. The Navy YMCA needed money as usual, and I put their letter aside to remind me to send them some. While I was reading all this junk, I took off my linen sport jacket and my bow tie and put my foot up on the desk so I could scratch under my knee, which itched. Then I picked up the telephone and dialed the answering service. "Hello?" I said. "This is Rex Howard. You got any calls for me?"
"A Mrs. Gillian called you, Mr. Howard," the voice said. "Wanted you to call her at El Dorado 53000 as soon as possible."
"The Waldorf," I said. "What did Mrs. Gillian want, did she say?"
"Only for you to call her as soon as possible."
"Thanks," I said. "Goodbye." I couldn't think of anybody by the name of Gillian, either Mr. or Mrs. that I might know, but in my business you can never tell what's behind the names people give to answering service operators. And you'll find customers in the Waldorf Astoria, too. So I dialed the hotel and asked for Mrs. Gillian, and pretty soon the switchboard had me plugged through to the room and a woman's voice said hello. "Hello," I said. "This is Rex Howard. Is this Mrs. Gillian?"
Rex,
the voice called back, and I recognized it immediately. Janice, I answered. Jan, you old bum, what are you doing in New York, and what's this Mrs. Gillian stuff?
That's my new name, Rex. Mrs. Joseph Gillian. Isn't it wonderful?
Since when? I asked. When did all this happen?
2 weeks ago in Hot Springs, she said. But I can't tell you all about it on the phone. Rex, you must come up here and meet Joe, and we'll all have dinner or something together. Now, don't say no, but get in a taxi and come up. I'm at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Do you know where that is?
I know where it is.
Well, hurry up here as soon as you can. Joe isn't here now, but he will be any minute, and I want you to meet him. And I want to see you, too, Rex. It's been almost 5 years, hasn't it?
4 years and a butt, anyhow, I said. That's too long. You just sit tight and I'll be up. Call room service and tell them to send up a bottle of bourbon and a bowl of ice for me, and whatever you're drinking now that you're all married and settled down. What's your room number, Jan? She told me, and I hung up and went into the bathroom and grabbed an electric razor to hack off some of my whiskers. My homely red face smiled back at me as I thought of Jan and the fun we'd had together years before. Then I washed my face and hands, ran a comb through my snarled hair, a useless habit, put my coat back on, and left. She was there in the room when I knocked, and I gave her a great big kiss and a hug and lifted her up in the air and sat her on top of the dresser.
"Take me down, Rex," she laughed at me. "This isn't dignified, and I'm a dignified married lady now."
"You just sit up there and tell me all about it," I said. "That's a huge rock you got on your left hand. Is it real?"
"Of course it's real," she said. "Joe gave it to me."
"He must be a great guy," I said. "And in the chips as well. What does he look like, and where is he, and how long have you been here in town, and how about a drink?"
"Lift me down first," she said, "and I'll have some bourbon and tap water. Joe is a better-looking guy than you are, and he's 37 years old, and he'll be here any minute."
"Here's your drink." I tapped the rims of the glasses together. "Best wishes for a happy married life and all that. Where did you meet this guy?"
"I was working in a bookstore in Hot Springs, and he came in to buy a book, and we got talking, and we had a few dates, and then we got married."
"Kinda quick, wasn't it?"
"Well, it took 3 months," she said, "but I knew it was going to happen after the first week. You'll like him, Rex. He isn't quite as big as you are, and he has brown eyes and black hair, and you'll like him. Now lift me down, please."
I lifted her down. "Sure, I'll like him. I'm always nuts about guys who marry my best girl right out from under my nose without telling me anything about it. What are you doing here alone, though? I don't exactly dig it."
"We weren't going to come back here to New York until next week, Rex," she explained. "But then Joe got this phone call from his business partner, and he had to go to Canada. So he told me to take the train and come east, and he would have a room reserved here for me, and he'd be back this evening. So I came, and here I am."
"Have another drink," I said, pouring one for myself. "What does Joe do for a living?"
"He's a commission agent," she said proudly. "He travels a lot."
"And makes a lot of money, too, I see," I said, glancing again at the diamond she was wearing. "Well, I guess you've gone and done it good, Janice."
"Are you happy about it, Rex?"
"I'm happy if you're happy, kid."
"Oh, I'm happy, Rex. Happier than I've ever been in all my life. And I'm going to keep on this way as long as I live. Joe is a wonderful guy, and I love him, and—"
The telephone rang, and she reached for it.
"This must be Joe now. Hello? Hello? Yes, this is Jan Gillian. Hello, Joe, where are you? Where?"
Her face fell, and she stuck her lower lip out in a pout.
"All right," she said. "But hurry. Not 1 minute later than tomorrow morning. You promise? Oh, Joe, I miss you so, darling."
She looked at me and blushed.
"Good night, dear. Hurry back as soon as you can."
"Maybe I should have left the room," I said.
"He's stuck in Boston and won't be back until tomorrow."
"That's not the end of the world," I told her. "Now have another drink, and you and I will go out and enjoy ourselves without having to put up with your husband. You've never been to New York before, have you?"
"No, this is my first time, and all I have is you. What a honeymoon."
"It could be worse. Put your face back on, and we'll go get something to eat. Do you want to go to a show or anything, or night clubbing?"
"I just want to see Joe."
"Come on and eat, and then I'll take you for a ride in the park or a walk down Fifth Avenue or something." She disappeared into the bathroom, and I took another small shot of the bourbon. Then she came back with a new paint job, looking like $1,000,000. Since she had never been to New York before, we didn't even leave the hotel, but took the elevator to the Starlight Roof for dinner and dancing. We had a pretty wonderful time. Jan and I had always had wonderful times together, ever since we were kids back in Conway, and the long years we had spent without seeing each other when I was off at sea hadn't harmed our warm affection at all.
Is it true that you're a private eye, or whatever the name is?" she asked me as she stirred her coffee. "Don't use that nasty word," I said. "Here's my card. Rex Howard, Security Advisor. High-class stuff." "What does a security advisor do? Are you a broker or something?" "No, a security advisor tells you how to keep from getting robbed and things like that. Say, for example, that you own a big factory and things kept getting stolen. Your insurance company gets tired of paying you all the time and tells you that either you get the stealing rate lowered or your insurance premium gets raised. What do? You send for Rex Howard, Security Advisor, and I tell you what to do." "Go on, advisor," she smiled. "What do you tell me to do?" "I look the joint over, see where things look tempting, like at the end of an assembly or packing line where they're easy to steal, and tell you to put a fence around it, or I tell you to hire guards if you need them. I also help you hire them if you don't know how, and I train them and write the rules after they're hired. This is a respectable and legitimate business. I get most of my clients by being recommended by the insurance companies. Sometimes I also take special guard jobs, like substituting for the guards in armored trucks when someone's sick or on vacation, but that's just for peanuts." "You make much money doing this?" "I make some. Not too much, but enough to keep the sharks away. I've got my pension, and I own a few shares of General Motors and Jersey Standard stock, and some real estate out on the West Coast. I make out all right." "Let's go," she said, suddenly impatient. "Maybe there's a message for me down in the lobby." There wasn't, but the evening was still young, so we went walking down Park Avenue to New York Central Building, and then over to Fifth Avenue, and window shopped all the way up to 57th Street. We headed east on 57th Street until we got to 3rd Avenue, and then turned south. "The elevated railway ran over here up to a year or so ago," I told her, "but they tore it down. This is a pretty good street now." We came to Cunahan's Bar and Grill. "Come on in here and meet a friend of mine," I said. "I haven't seen him for an age." "I ought to be getting back to the hotel, Rex," she said. "Joe might call and—" "Come in and have a nightcap, and I'll take you right back to the hotel. I want to talk to the bartender for just a minute." "All right," she said. "Just one." The place was practically empty, as it usually is at that time. Cunahan gets the after-office crowd, but they fade away at about 7:30. Then he gets an after-the-theater gang. In between, a guy like me can get a peaceful drink. Cookie Slack was behind the bar, bald and fat and moon-faced.
"Rex!" he shouted when he saw me. "Where you been, Rexy, old boy? Thought maybe they got you back in the sailor suit. I heard they was digging the bottom of the barrel. Guess you couldn't make it, could you? What can I do for you, shipmate?"
We came for a drink. "Jan, this is old Cookie Slack, the worst mess robber we ever had in the Navy. I ate his cooking for 2 hitches on the Black Hawk, and it darn near ruined me for life. Cookie, this is Miss Gillian, the most wonderful girl in the world, as far as I'm concerned."
"Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Gillian," Cookie said.
He looked at me and raised his eyebrows.
"What will you have, ma'am?"
"Irish whiskey on the rocks," she said. "Tooley's if you have it."
"Bourbon for me." He put the glasses filled with ice in front of us, as we sat on the stools at the bar, and handed me a bottle of bourbon whiskey.
"Pour your own, Rex. I don't want no complaining old Chief Bosun's mates around this place. Tooley's Irish, you said, ma'am?"
He looked in at the cupboard behind the bar.
"Don't seem to have a bottle of Tooley's out right now, but I know there's some around here someplace."
"Any other kind will do," Janice said.
"No, it won't," Cookie corrected her. "Any friend of Rex Howard's comes in here and asks for Tooley's or Fooley's or even Schmooley's, she gets it. Aha! I see you back there in the corner."
He pulled out a bottle of Tooley's and displayed it proudly.
"Here we are."
He broke the seal and twisted the cork out.
"Shall I pour it for you, ma'am?"
"Please,"
she said. "Won't you have a drop yourself, Cookie?" I invited. "Bourbon or Irish, or name your own."
"No, I might have a little sip of gin," he smiled. "Just happens I have a bottle of my own handy here."
He filled a jigger for himself. "Well," I said, raising my glass, "Mrs. Gillian here is practically a brand-new bride, Cookie. So here's to marriage, which is a wonderful institution that you and I have so far avoided." I took a drink of my bourbon, and Cookie drained his gin. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jan sniff at her drink. "What's the matter?" I asked. "You got a fly in it or something?"
"It's all right," she smiled. "This is the funniest smelling Irish whiskey I ever had. But I guess it won't kill me."
It killed her. It killed her dead, right there at Cunahan's bar. She took one swallow of the whiskey, gasped, dropped the glass, and grabbed at her mouth. She tried to say something as she turned toward me, and fell backward off the bar stool. I almost caught her as she fell and was on the floor beside her immediately. "Jan!" I cried. "Jan, what's the matter?" She breathed twice, long deep breaths that sort of jerked as she exhaled. Then her body began to tremble terribly, convulsively, and a white froth formed at her lips. And then she was dead. And then I smelled the faint odor of bitter almonds and knew that it was one of the cyanides. Cookie Slack came around from behind the bar as I lowered her head back on the floor, straightened out her body, and put my handkerchief over her face.
"What the hell happened, Rex? She ain't—"
"She's dead," I said. "Call the cops, Cookie."
"Dead?"
His face was pasty white. "I said dead. Call the cops." He stood there, and I slapped him across the face. "Don't you drop dead too, pal. I may be needing you before the evening's over. Go call the cops."
"On the phone?" he asked. "Rex, what happened to her, for God's sake? She just
dropped over dead," I said, "from drinking poisoned whiskey." I looked at Cookie, and he was still standing there. I tried to raise my hand to slap him again and couldn't move it. I was in a worse shock than he was. I've seen many a man die in my time, but this was different. This was Jan, and I loved Jan more than anything in the world. I dropped my head on the bar. "Oh, my God," I said. "How did this ever happen?" And then a great series of sobs came up inside me, dry, racking sobs that I couldn't control. They lasted maybe 30 seconds, long enough for Cookie to get to the street and start hollering for the police. I wish he had used the phone, but it was too late. He had a crowd outside the door in another 30 seconds and a cop in half a minute more. It was a young fellow that I didn't know.
"What's the trouble here?" he asked. "What happened to the dame?"
"She's dead," I told him.
"How do you know she's dead? She looked drunk to me."
He took the handkerchief off her face and then put it back.
"Don't touch anything," he said. "Keep these people outside. Where's your telephone?"
Cookie showed him the telephone, and he put a dime in it and started talking to someone. Then he came back.
"How did this happen?"
"We came in here for a drink together," I told him. "She asked for Tooley's Irish on the rocks. She smelled it and said it smelled funny. She drank it and fell off the stool and was practically dead when she hit the floor." The cop wrote it all down.
"You know her?"
"Yes, I know her. Her name is Mrs. Joseph Gillian."
"Where does she live?"
"I don't know."
"What's your name?"
"Rex Howard." There was no telling how long he might have gone on if a police car and an ambulance hadn't come screaming down 3rd Avenue. They stopped in front of the saloon. 2 cops got out of the police car and shouldered their way through the little crowd at the door. A guy in a white coat got out of the ambulance and came in behind them. I knew one of the new cops. Stoddard, his name was, and he knew me.
"Hi, Howard," he said. "What are you doing here? Haven't seen you for a month or so. You want a case?"
"No," I told him. "I just dropped in for a drink with—" I broke off as he started to pat me around the armpits and pockets.
"What the hell?"
"Just wanted to see if you were packing a gun, Howard. The only thing I hate worse than private dicks is private dicks with guns. What happened to you?"
He didn't wait for an answer.
"What's the score, Doc? Drunk?"
"She's dead," the ambulance attendant said. "I'd say she had been poisoned. You better get a medical examiner."
"Nuts," Stoddard said. "Okay, get those people moving along outside there, and don't let anybody in except if they're official. Don't touch nothing. We got all day. One of you guys get on the telephone and let the precinct have the dope according to the manual." "Let me tell you how this happened, Stoddard," I began. "This girl was—"
"Save it, Howard. You'll just have to tell it over again when the brass gets here."
I lit one cigarette from the end of another and watched the ashes pile up in a tray on the bar. The bottle of Tooley's Irish still stood there. Jan's bar stool still lay on the floor beside the glass she had dropped. The ice cubes had melted into little streams that stretched out on the floor like dirty, knotted veins. It must have been no more than 10 minutes before some police photographers and detectives from the 17th Squad down on 51st Street came in and the questioning began. I knew the detective in charge, a first grade named Eddie Zimmer, who had been a quartermaster on the Bentley and in the same destroyer division with me when I was on the Daily. But I didn't know him very well, so we just nodded at each other, and then he went to work. First he asked Cookie to tell his story, and Cookie gave it to him just as it happened.
"Is this the bottle you poured the drink out of?"
"Yes, sir."
"You got many calls for Tooley's here?"
"This is the first in a couple of weeks."
Zimmer sniffed the top of the bottle.
"Cyanide," he said. "Prussic acid. Bet you $1."
He spoke to Cookie again.
"Whose idea was it to ask for Tooley's?"
"It was the lady's. She just asked for it."
"Where'd you get this bottle?"
"Out of the closet. I just opened it when the...
Yeah, I know, Zimmer said. What I mean is, who did you buy it from?
Oh, I don't know, Cookie said. Conan handles all that.
Well, ask him. Zimmer made a note in his notebook, and then he went on, questioning the bartender about every detail of everything that had happened from the time Jan and I walked in. After that, he turned to me. It's your turn now, Howard. Start at the beginning. Who was this girl, and where did you meet her?
Howard here's quite a guy with the dames, Stoddard interrupted. I bet you got this one in trouble and slipped her that Mickey himself.
I hit him across the face with the side of my hand and knocked him down. He reached for his gun, and Zimmer and another cop grabbed me. Stoddard, you mangy-mouthed son of a bitch, I said. That girl was my sister. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2.
Why the hell didn't you say she was your sister in the first place?
Stoddard growled, getting to his feet and rubbing his face.
You might have broken my jaw, you ham-handed gob.
You had it coming to you, I said. You're lucky I didn't hit you higher, lower, or harder, Zimmer told him, or you'd be dead. I saw this guy clean out a bar in Cebu City once, when he was on shore patrol, and I wouldn't tangle with him. You remember that, Chief? I remembered it. I was beginning to remember Eddie Zimmer, too. He had been a first-class quartermaster when he was on the Bentley, and was a good man with flashing light signals and for navigating. He must have been in his early 20s then, which would have made him sneaking up on 40 pretty soon. He had been a pretty serious, plugging kind of sailor, and he looked as if he hadn't changed. Maybe he was 6 feet tall or about 2 inches shorter than me, and I bet he didn't weigh more than 150 pounds. And that was when he was soaking wet. He looked kind of like Abraham Lincoln without a beard, and had deep circles under his grayish eyes. That was quite an evening, I smiled. I was younger then, too. You want to tell me about your sister now? He asked. Sure, I said. Where do we start? Name and occupation, just for the record. Rex Howard, Chief Bosun's Mate, U.S. Navy, retired. I have a private detective's license, but my work is confined to plant security and special guard assignments. I live in Peter Cooper Village, and I gave him my apartment and telephone numbers. What was your sister's name? Janice. Janice Howard was her maiden name, but she told me this evening that she was married about 2 weeks ago to a Joseph Gillian, so her name is Janice Howard Gillian now, I guess. Where does she live? She was living at the Waldorf, I said. She just came in from Hot Springs, Arkansas this morning, she told me. She expected her husband to meet her at the hotel, but he called from Boston while I was there and said he wouldn't be able to get here before tomorrow. Does Gillian have a residence in New York? I don't know. I don't see how he would and his wife not know about it and go to a hotel and wait for him. Maybe we better find out, Jack, he called to another detective. Get on the phone and call the Waldorf. See if they can tell you the address of a Joseph Gillian who reserved a room for his wife, and maybe for himself, too. His wife moved in today. What was the room number, Chief? I told him, and the detective hurried off to the phone. Zimmer asked me some more questions, and then the detective came back.
He gave his address as the Hot Springs Hotel, Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Didn't you say they were married in Hot Springs? Zimmer asked me. That's what Jan said. I smell something awfully funny, Rex, Zimmer said. Something's rotten somewhere. Something stinks on ice, I said, and then I banged my fist on the bar so hard it shook the windows in front of the saloon. God damn it, Eddie, I said fiercely. Let's get underway and find the son of a bitch who killed that poor kid lying there. Let's stop asking me and Cookie about it and get going. Let's find this Joe Gillian. He's somewhere in Boston, and ask him what the score is. Let's get to work on that bottle of whiskey and see where the hell it came from. Let's knock off... Easy, Chief, Zimmer said. We'll do all those things, but we can't do it all in half an hour. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw them lifting Jan's body onto a stretcher. They were taking her to the morgue, I knew, for an autopsy. I buried my head and my arms on the bar. I couldn't bear to see her go like that. But there wasn't anything I could do about it. Nothing except to find out how it happened, and make sure that justice fell quickly and surely on whoever poisoned the whiskey that she had drunk. Poisoned whiskey very seldom happens accidentally. Zimmer tapped me on the shoulder. Let's go down to the office, Chief, he said. We can't do anything more here. Jack, you hang around and see that nothing is disturbed. Have somebody call Conahan. Tell him the place is temporarily closed, but get him down here and find out where that Tooley's whiskey came from. I want to report to the lieutenant and the DA's man back at the office, and then there'll probably be a bunch of Homicide East guys come down here. You take charge. Come on, Rex, let's get to work, you and me." "That's better than sitting around here doing nothing," I said, "and that's for damn sure." We walked down to East 51st Street in the 17th Detective Squad headquarters and into the squad room. The assistant district attorney had just arrived, and we went through a long and involved period of questioning again. It must have been after midnight when we finished, and along about that time some cops from Homicide East walked in. "You guys find out anything?" a homicide man who introduced himself as Nick Gardella asked. "We found out that Mrs. Gillian's husband don't seem to have any house except his hat," Zimmer told him. "He registered into that hotel in Hot Springs as being from the Statler in Buffalo, and he lived in Hot Springs for almost 6 months, doing nothing at all as far as we can find out. The Statler in Buffalo has no record of him." "Sounds to me like he might be on the lam," Gardella ventured. "Somebody ought to know who he is if he lived in Hot Springs for 6 months. "The only person we got who seems to know him is his wife, and she's, Did you find any trace of him in Boston?" "We traced the call he made to the Waldorf this evening, and that came from a saloon. Nobody there remembers him. He made the room reservation at the Waldorf the day before yesterday. Reserved it for a week and paid cash in advance. The desk clerk remembers him a little, but not enough to do us any good. We got the Boston cops calling the hotels around there to see if a Joseph Gillian has checked in anywhere, but we got no dope yet." Zimmer shrugged his shoulders and lit a cigarette. The telephone rang and the lieutenant at the desk picked it up. "17th Squad," he said. "Oh, hi, Doc. You got what? Hydrocyanic acid? You got it for sure, Doc? That's what killed her, huh? Okay, Doc, thanks a lot. What? Wait, I'll ask him." He turned to me. "The morgue is finished with the autopsy on your sister, Howard. What do you want to do with the body?" "Tell him I'll come down and take care of it," I said. I took Janice back to Conway, Arkansas, where we were born, and buried her in the little cemetery beside the old church next to Mother and Dad. Then I took the first plane back to New York and called Eddie Zimmer from the airport. I'd been gone a week. "Come on up here, Chief," Zimmer told me. "I'll tell you what we've found out." "How much do you know? Did you locate Joe Gillian yet?" "Well, we don't know a hell of a lot," he admitted. "It won't take long to tell you." He was right. Gillian hadn't been found, and in spite of headlines in the papers, he hadn't shown up anywhere. Lots of people in Hot Springs remembered him, but they didn't know anything about him. It was as though he had never existed before he went to Hot Springs or after he had called Jan from Boston. The bottle of Tooley's Irish whiskey was stuffed with enough hydrocyanic acid to kill a regiment. Investigation of the bottle and cork disclosed a small hole in the cork, almost too small to see, but it could have been made by a hypodermic needle in a syringe full of poison. Cunahan had bought a case of Tooley's, had used 3 bottles before this one was opened. The other 8 bottles in the case were perfectly all right. The case itself had been broken and discarded before Jan's death, so they couldn't check it for tampering. "Where the hell did Cunahan buy the whiskey?" I asked. "That's a good question," Zimmer said, "because it's one of the few we can answer. He bought it from an importing and distributing outfit called Wirtz & Company, over on West 50th Street. They handle a pretty good list of Scotch and Irish whiskeys and foreign wines and cordials. A guy by the name of Caesar Wirtz is the head of the outfit. He doesn't seem to know how 1 bottle out of a case got poisoned, and all his invoices and records are in order." "Does he have a record of any kind?" I wondered. "Clean as a whistle," Zimmer told me. "He's a nervous little jerk, but I can't arrest him on that." "What else do you know?" "Here's your sister's stuff that I got back from the property clerk." He opened a drawer and took out a package. "You can check it against the inventory. I got a suit full of her clothes and the other gear that were in the hotel. It's in the other room. You can get it when you leave." "No clues about her husband and any of her things?" I asked. "No photographs? No letters?" "Nary a one. There was a phone number on the registration slip that Mr. Gillian made out when he reserved the room. We called it, and it turned out to be a saloon away on West 54th Street, practically in the Hudson River. Nobody there ever heard of Joseph Gillian." "You think he could have killed his wife?" "Now how the hell could he have done that, Rex? We have your sister's word that he called her from Boston 3 hours before she was killed. We traced the call, and it did come from Boston. Now, it's granted that a man can get down from Boston in less than 3 hours, but I can't figure out how he could know that you were going to drop in Cunahan's and that your sister would ask for a fresh bottle of whiskey. And even if he could figure it, what was he doing? Hiding in the booze closet with a hypo full of hydrocyanic acid? And what was his motive, anyhow?" "I don't know, damn it!" I exploded. "You're the detective. I'm just a retired chief's bosun's mate that spent half his life as a master-at-arms. But by God, somebody put the poison in that bottle, and that's the guy who murdered my sister, and I'm going to see him burn for it. Now take it easy, Chief. You can't even call it murder at this stage of the game. Horse collar, I said. Anybody who pumps poison into a whiskey bottle expects it to kill somebody. And that kind of killing's murder in my book. And murder makes me pretty goddamn mad, Eddie. I picked up the package of Jan's things from his desk. Where's the suitcase? I know you're doing your best, Eddie, but I don't have time to wait for the cops to do my work for me. You don't mind if I do a little investigating myself, do you? Yes, damn it, we do. You go banging around like a recruit in a flag bag and you'll have us all fouled because I don't care if you do or don't, I told him. I'm sounding general quarters right now and going to my battle station. When you hear me piping secure, you'll know this case is solved to my satisfaction. I just hope I get the bastard before you do. I'll save you some money. You'll get yourself in jail if you're not careful, Zimmer warned me, but there was a friendly light in his eyes. Oh, I'll be careful, I promised. There wasn't much I could do but be careful when I came right down to it. I went down to my apartment and tried to think. But what did I have to think about? Only about Jan and that she was dead. Senselessly dead from a drink of poisoned booze. A drink she really didn't want. A drink I had talked her into having, just because I wanted to drop into Cunahan's and shoot the breeze with Cookie Slack. But I had gone over all that in my mind before and knew it was no good to think that way. It wasn't good for me, and it wouldn't bring Jan back to life or her murderer to justice. I went out to the galley and started some chow, and while it was cooking, I built myself a couple of good-sized drinks of bourbon and drank them. That made me hungry, and I ate more than I intended. I had a couple more drinks after chow while I was washing the dishes and securing the scullery, and little by little the strain of the week fell away. But that didn't make my problem any easier. I had only the little information Eddie Zimmer had given me. I went through all Jan's gear with a fine-toothed comb, and then I got an idea and called Eddie. Who paid for all these new clothes of Jan's? I asked him. Who paid for that big engagement ring? She did, and he did, Eddie told me warily. He paid cash for everything, and so did she. We checked back on her bank account, and she probably paid her own cash for everything except the rings. That's the way it should be, I understand. Why don't you go to bed? I'm figuring, I said. Good night. Then I checked the phone book for the name and address I wanted, wrote it down on a piece of paper, and went into the bathroom to take a shower. There wasn't anything I could do that night, so, like Eddie Zimmer said, I might as well hit the old sack. The scales in the bathroom told me I still weighed in at 180 pounds, and I guess I was still a couple inches over 6 feet tall. My eyes were still blue, and my hair still looked the same old manila cordage I had been carrying on my dome since 1912. I stood in front of the mirror and took my old boxing stance and smacked my left fist in the palm of my right hand. That's for you, you poisoning bastard, I said. And then I stepped under the shower and let it run as hard as it could. I felt better. The next morning I got up and fried myself a mess of bacon and eggs, made a pot of hot black java, and kind of got back into the swing of being alive. The address I had written down the night before was that of Wirtz and Company on West 50th Street over near 10th Avenue. As soon as I figured the joint would be open, I gave them a call and asked for Mr. Wirtz. Some dame answered the phone, and she wanted to know what I wanted to see Mr. Wirtz about. I'm thinking of opening a bar and grill, I told her. I don't have the license yet, but I expect to get it in about a month. Right now I'm trying to line up some wholesalers, especially for my imported stuff.
And what did you say your name was?
She asked. She had a soft, deep voice. Rex Howard, I said.
Mr. Wirtz isn't in right now, Mr. Howard, she said. But I know he'd be glad to see you. Why don't you come up here about 10 this morning? He should be here, and he doesn't have any other appointments scheduled in. Will that be all right?
That'll be fine, honey, I said. I'll be there. The bus took me up to 50th, and I walked over to Wirtz's address. I climbed a couple of ladders to the second deck, flights of stairs to the second floor to you, and knocked on a locked door that said walk in. The voice I heard over the telephone called, "Wait a minute," and then the door opened. "I'm sorry," she said. "I forgot to throw the latch this morning. You're Mr. "Howard," I said. "Rex Howard." I couldn't say much more because I was too busy looking at her, and there was a lot to look at. A little sign on the desk that she went back to after fixing the door said D. Ames, and that was an awful short name for so much wonderful woman. She was a decided brunette, and she wasn't a kid, but she certainly was well put together. When she had been standing up, I had the impression that most of her was long, slim legs, and I love long, slim legs. When she sat down, I got the impression that most of her might be pectoral development under the tight white sweater she was wearing. Her face was almost too perfect, like a model's or a showgirl's. It wasn't artificial, but you could see she had been around for a while. There were no rings on her fingers.
"Oh, yes, Mr. Howard," she smiled. "Mr. Wertz was anxious to see you, but he got a telephone call from the trucking agency and had to hurry over to the ship. Some kind of trouble or other."
She took the cigarette I offered her, touched her hand against mine to bring the match up to it, and took a long drag. "When will he be back?" I asked. "I sure would like to talk to him."
"Probably after lunch. Could you come back then?"
"I've got all day with nothing to do but talk to Mr. Wertz. I might as well wait here. I'm the patient type."
"You don't want to spend all day here," she said. "You'd be bored stiff."
"This feels like a comfortable chair to me." And I settled into a leather affair. Must have bought for people to sit in, and I'm a great guy for sitting. Is this your office?
"This is kind of my office in the reception room."
"Where does Mr. Wertz hang out?"
"In there."
And she pointed through an open door to where I could see a littered desk and some filing cabinets. "Where are all the rest of Wertz and company? Where's company?"
"You're rather curious, Mr. Howard, aren't you?"
She wasn't too friendly. "I just like to know what kind of outfit I'm dealing with. One man and a girl doesn't seem like very much. Some of the other distributors seem to have dozens of people in their offices."
"Who, for instance?"
She had me there for a minute. Then I remembered that I had done some warehouse security recommendations for Bonded Brands Corporation and mentioned them. It seemed to satisfy her, but she insisted there was no need for me to sit and wait all day. "What's wrong with me?" I said. "Am I in the way here? Once in every 3 or 4 hitches, I get to see a girl as good-looking as you, and then she wants to throw me out in the street. You might at least give me some price lists to look at and a little sales talk. What's that D stand for, if you are D. Ames?"
"Deborah," she told me, "but most people call me Debbie."
"If old Caesar isn't back for lunch, can we go out and have lunch together, Debbie? Or how about lunch even if he is back? I feed pretty well."
"I have lunch sent in, and so does Mr. Wertz."
"I'll bet you have to," I said, "seeing as there are only 2 of you. Where did you say the rest of the company is?"
"Out in the field selling, and over at the warehouse."
She snapped at me. She got up and walked into the other office and came back with a handful of circulars.
"Here's our line of stuff. Those prices, as you undoubtedly know, are the fixed retail prices. You get the regular wholesale price, of course, and I'm sure you know how to figure that."
Of course I didn't know anything of the kind, and I had the feeling she knew it too. I sat there in the chair making little additions and subtractions in my notebook, and making check marks against certain items on the list she had given me, but they didn't mean anything. Deborah Ames seemed to be busy transcribing a notebook full of dictation. The telephone rang, and she grabbed it like it was hot.
"Wertz and Company,"
she said, and her voice made me shiver a little. The voice at the other end said something, and she gave me a quick look.
"I'm sorry Mr. Wertz isn't here." I said, "Mr. Wertz isn't here. I expect him back after lunch." "After lunch. Thank you. Goodbye."
Somebody was still trying to talk as she hung up. "Who was that?" I asked. "Mr. Wertz?"
"Why don't you go to hell?" She frowned at me. "How can I get my work done with you sitting there acting wise? You give me the fidgets. You heard me say that Mr. Wertz wouldn't be back until after lunch."
"Okay, Debbie." I smiled sweetly. "I can take a hint. I go, but I shall return, as old Doug used to say. I shall return at 4 bells in the afternoon watch, or 1400, or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, no matter how you say it. You will please tell Mr. Wertz that I will be here and hope to see him. Thank you for a wonderful half hour. I hope to see more of you sometime, preferably somewhere else. Would you like to make a date now, say perhaps for this evening? Where do you live?"
"If I hear from Mr. Wertz, I will tell him that you will be here at 2. Thank you very much for leaving."
I allowed to myself that I would get after that as soon as I could and walk down and across the street to a little beanery, where I sat at the counter and ordered a cup of joe. As I was stirring it, the telephone rang and the counterman answered it, then passed it across the counter to a little old geezer with no hair who was nursing a roll and a glass of milk about 4 seats down from me. He took the phone, said hello, and I thought I caught the tone of voice on the other end. Then he said thanks and hung up, gave the counterman $1, got 30 cents change, and left. I watched him cross the street and go in the door that marked the entrance to Wertz and Company. "Who was the old guy?" I asked the counterman. "Oh, that's old man Wertz, Caesar Wertz. He runs a importing outfit across the street, distributes whiskey and stuff. Now here he's just about broke." End of chapter 2. Chapter 3. If Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.
If you're gonna stay here all day, mister,
the counterman said,
I'll make a fresh batch of coffee.
I got an appointment at 2 o'clock, I said. Right across the street with Mr. Wirtz, and I don't want him to get away this time.
Why?
The man said.
He was sitting right here when you walked in, and I told you who he was. You could have followed him right back to his office instead of staying here drinking coffee for the last 3 hours. Say, he whispered, could I ask you a personal kind of question?
The answer is, son, that I only go in the morning when I get up and in the evening before I go to bed. Many years ago, when I sailed around the world with the Great White Fleet and the Armored Cruiser Squadron, we made a liberty in Calcutta. That's in India. There I learned the secret of preparing a potion from an old Indian fakir who hadn't gone for more than 3 years, and I still use it. I can drink 17 pints of coffee a day, lad, and it never bothers me at all.
Don't you sweat heavy?
No more than anybody else. Lend me your phone a minute. He handed it to me, and I dialed Wirtz and Company. Hello, Debbie. This is Rex Howard. I'm just about to leave my place to come up, but I wanted to make sure Mr. Wirtz is there. He is? Thanks, sweetheart. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. I gave the boy $1 and left. When I got to the first deck of the building, I sat down on the steps and lit a cigarette. It was dark there, so Mr. Wirtz didn't see me when he started down from his office. He almost stepped on me before I stood up. Hello, Caesar, I said. I'm Rex Howard. I was just on my way up to your office.
You're early, he said accusingly,
as though I had done something wrong. Then he squinted at me through his heavy glasses.
You came in the restaurant this morning. You're spying on me.
He tried to push his way past me on the landing.
I don't want any of your business, Mr. Howard. Go away and don't bother me. I don't want your business.
Come across the street anyhow, and I'll buy you some lunch. I know you haven't had any because I've been watching you.
I never eat lunch, Mr. Howard. Never. Now go away. I know what you want, and I won't talk about it. I won't talk about it at all.
My hand crept around his wrist and locked. How do you know what I want, Caesar? I demanded. Tell me just that one little thing, and I'll let you go. But if you don't tell me, I may get suspicious and never let you go.
I know who you are, he said. You're the brother of that Gillian girl that got poisoned. The police have already talked to me about that, and they know I didn't have anything to do with it. Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing.
Then why are you trying so hard to avoid me, Caesar? Let's go back up to your office and sit down and talk this over. I don't believe you poisoned my sister. If I did, I'd break your arm right here to begin with, instead of just holding your wrist. But I want to know where and how you got that case of whiskey. Let's go back up and talk about it.
I will not, he sputtered. Take your hands off me.
Salty little feller, aren't you? I said, picking him up in my arms like a child and carrying him up the steps and into his office. Hi, Debbie, I said to the brunette. It's just about 2 o'clock. As you can plainly see, Mr. Wirtz is in, right here in my ever-loving arms.
Put me down, Howard, Wirtz shrilled. Miss Ames, call the police and tell them to come over here right away.
She reached for the phone, but the twinkle in her eyes told me she was getting a big kick out of the whole affair. It was the first sign of ordinary human sympathy that I had noticed around the joint. Don't bother, I said. I dumped Wirtz into the leather chair. Think it over, Caesar. I don't believe for a minute you put the poison in the bottle, or that you even knew there was poison in the bottle. But I do think you know more than you've told the cops. I got good reasons for thinking that. Here's my card. When you get ready to talk to me, call me up. I'll be at home after 6 tonight. Call me before 12. Goodbye, Debbie. I'll be seeing you. The only thing to do was to wait and see if my bluff would work. If he called, I would know that he did know more than he had told the police. If he didn't call, or if his lawyer called and threatened to slap an assault suit on me, all I could do was come about and head up on a new course. But at least I wasn't just sitting on my duff. The phone rang at 11 minutes after 6, and it was Debbie. Calling for Mr. Wirtz, I presume?
He's left to go to the Importers Club, Mr. Howard. He didn't want to see you, but I told him I thought he should. So just before he went out, he told me to call you.
And what are you supposed to tell me?
If you'd like to join Mr. Wirtz for a drink, he will be at the Importers Club until 7:30.
He ought to be safe from my wrath there, surrounded by those other rugged importers. Tell Mr. Wirtz, and I bet you he is right there beside you, that I will be at the Importers Club at 7:15. I'll just have time to change my shirt. She laughed.
You lose your bet, Mr. Howard. I'm right here in my own apartment, just about ready to step into the shower. Mr. Wirt certainly isn't here beside me.
I heard her giggle.
I bet he wouldn't know what to do if he was.
She hung up. The Importers Club is a swell place on a small scale, a little shabbier than it was 20 years ago. It's over in the West 30s. My taxi came up against a one-way street, and rather than run around the block, I paid him off on the corner and started to walk toward the club. A red Ford convertible pulled away from the curb at the other end of the street and came alongside before I got to the club. The horn gave a kind of provocative toot at me, and I looked up. Debbie Ames was driving.
"Come on, Rex,"
she said in that voice that nearly killed me.
"Let's get out of this fire trap."
I walked over and leaned against the door. "I have to go in here and see Caesar," I said. "Why don't you be a good girl and go home and wait for me? Where do you live?"
"You'll find out in time," she said. "What makes you think Caesar's in that old club?"
"You said he was."
"He changed his mind. He told me to meet you and see what you had on your mind."
"Look, Debbie," I said, "I'm a big boy now. You're a big girl. As far as you're concerned, there's just one thing on my mind. As far as Mr. Caesar Wirtz is concerned, I've got the murder of my sister on my mind. I can't think of a single solitary thing you can do, short of killing me, that will take murder off my mind. So where do we go from here?" She slid over to the right-hand part of the seat.
"You drive. Talk later."
"Oh, for the love of Mike," I said, getting in and slipping the transmission into gear. "Who do you think you are, somebody out of a spy story with that ever-loving voice and that low-cut outfit you're wearing?"
"Why don't we go get a couple of drinks and something to eat?" she said. "And why don't you stop being so goddamn sarcastic and wise? You were asking for a date this morning, and now you've got it. If you've changed your mind, get the hell out and I'll drive."
"Okay," I said. "That's more like it. Let's run out on the island and scout up a joint where we can drink, dine, and maybe dance."
"Don't tell me you dance," she said. "I'll bet you know how to make music with a comb and how to make dirty shadow pictures with your hands."
"All right," I said. "You win. I'll behave. I'll be nice and we'll have a good time and won't even think about Mr. Wirtz."
"Not for a while, anyhow," she said.
Then she slid across the seat as close to me as she could get.
"You like this perfume, Rex? It's called sea spray."
I liked it. We sort of got calmed down and squared away after a while and didn't talk about much of anything while we drove out to Long Island. We went to a place run by a retired warrant paymaster I knew when he was a storekeeper second on the Oklahoma. They have good food and good drinks and a pretty fair dance band there. The place is right down on the beach, and we got a table where we could see the ocean rolling in and hear the waves swish against the sand. We just kind of made conversation for a while, and then I casually asked her why she worked for an old geezer like Wirtz.
"He's a pretty nice guy, Rex. Really, he is. It's no strain working for him, except during this last week or so he's been as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. But that's because of what happened to your sister. He believes the police think he had something to do with it."
"Did he?"
"Honestly, Rex, I don't see how he could. All he does is receive the orders from the ships, have them trucked to his warehouse, and then deliver the whiskey and stuff to the customers. If anybody poisoned the whiskey, it could have been done in Ireland, aboard the ship, at the pier, on the way to the warehouse, in the warehouse, or on the way to the customer. Mr. Wirtz would be the last man to be able to do it. He never even sees the stuff."
"I believe you, Debbie. Let's dance." Dancing with Debbie was something you had to do to believe it could be true. She was the perfect partner for me. She felt like she was part of me, from where her long thighs met mine up to where her cheek pressed against the corner of my mouth. There in that dim light with the soft music and the old Atlantic Ocean rolling up against the beach, we seemed to dance completely alone, uninhibited and unclothed. The music stopped and I could feel the little drops of moisture on my upper lip. "Let's go home, Debbie," I said.
"Easy, boy," she smiled. "Even Rome wasn't made in a day. Sit down and relax. I'd like another drink, gin and tonic."
The waiter brought the drinks. "I hear Wirtz is practically broke," I said then.
"Where'd you hear that?"
she wondered. "Guy in the restaurant across the street from your office."
"Don't look at me like that, Rex Howard. I don't keep the books. I just do the typing and take care of visitors like you."
"When are you going to start taking care of me, Debbie? Let's go home to your place and start right now, because I sure do need a lot of taking care of, honey."
"I said to relax, sailor."
She stuck out her little red tongue at me.
And it won't do you much good to ask me about Mr. Wirtz's business either, because I've only been working for him for about 2 months.
What'd you do before that? I asked, offering her a cigarette. She took it and waited for my match before she answered.
I went to opening nights and nightclubs all the time and saw a lot of people I didn't like and had too many cocktails at lunch with people who bored me and fought my husband most of the time.
I didn't know you had a husband.
Would you have cared if you had?
Her smile took the sting out of the remark.
He died just about 3 months ago, Rex. He drank himself to death. He had a lot of life insurance. I'm a fairly rich widow. Does that make any difference?
Debbie, I loved you for yourself alone, before I knew you had money. I said this lightly because I didn't want to get too serious with a dame who had picked me up from the street just about 4 hours before, and who hadn't tipped her hand yet. I said to myself the minute I saw you, that's the only girl in the world for you, Rex Howard. She can lie, steal, cheat, and even spy on you, and it won't even make a difference. That's exactly what I said, and you can ask anybody from here to Guantanamo Bay. They'll all say I said it.
I'm not spying on you, Rex. I bet Mr. Wirtz is still waiting for you in the Importers Club.
How's that again? She lowered her eyes.
After I called you with his message, I slid into my bathtub and was rubbing myself with soap under all those bubbles and stuff I dumped in the water, and all of a sudden I decided I was lonely and it was a shame to waste a guy like you on Caesar Wirtz. So I just got out and got dressed and kidnapped you.
She finished the gin and tonic.
Do you mind?
I didn't exactly know what the pitch was, but I didn't mind. You want another drink? I said.
Not here, she said. Let's go home.
We drove back into Manhattan along the Parkway and had the road practically to ourselves. There was one car behind us, but he was a gentleman. He kept his lights down and stayed so far back that he didn't bother us. It was a wonderful ride with Debbie snugly beside me, my arm around her and my hand resting lightly on her breast. We drove to the address she had given me in the East 70s.
I guess we have to put the car away, she said. I'm sorry, we should have driven to the parking lot first. I didn't think about it. It's just over on First Avenue, 1 block down.
Why don't I drive over and walk back? I suggested. You go on up and break out the ice, and by the time you're ready, I'll be there.
Okay, she agreed. It's 1 block down on First on the right-hand side. You can't miss it.
She leaned over and kissed me lightly on my upper lip.
Hurry back, Rex. I'll be ready.
I gave the convertible 4 bells and a jingle and wasted no time getting to the parking lot. The sleepy old man there seemed to know the car and said he'd take care of it. I was hurrying back to Debbie's place when a big guy suddenly stepped out of a doorway and asked me did I have a match. He had a cigarette in his hand. Sure, I said, backing down and coming to a stop. I put my hand in my pocket to get out some matches and he walloped me one on the jaw that knocked me staggering. I haven't been hit that hard since Killer Cole caught me while I was looking at a girl in the audience during the light heavyweight semifinals at Cavite in 1937. I was saved by the bell then, but there wasn't any bell this time. The guy hit me again while my hand was still in my pocket and I folded. I sort of remember another man coming out of the shadows, and when I woke up I was in a cellar. It smelled damp and moldy.
Throw some more water on him, Piggy,
the voice that had asked for a match said.
He's coming around.
A bucket of water slapped me in the face, and about half of it seemed to go up my nose. I started gagging and coughing and tried to get my hands up to my face, but they were tied. Finally, I caught my breath. What the hell goes on? I asked. What the hell did I ever do to you guys? God damn it, let me go, will you?
Not so fast, Buster,
the voice said. The place was almost completely dark, the only light coming from somewhere around a corner. I could make out 2 men, but I couldn't see their faces.
You got time for a little talk, don't you?
Untie my hands, you bastards, and I'll talk.
You think we should leave him call us bastards, Piggy?
The voice asked with a kind of sinister gentleness.
I think we should remember it, Smiley,
a gravelly voice answered.
After we talk, huh? We was wondering what you was doing today,
Smiley, who was the guy who hit me, said, and I guess he was saying it to me.
Why don't you tell us?
Do you have to knock me down and drag me in here to ask me that, you dumb bastards? I got up at about 700, went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth.
You heard him call us bastards again, didn't you? I sure did, Smiley. Dumb bastards was what he said. Go on, mister, keep talking.
Then I went out to the galley and made a pot of jamocha and fried some eggs.
He says galley and jamoke instead of kitchen and coffee, Smiley, Piggy said. He must be some kind of goddamn sailor.
Remember that, Smiley said. We don't like sailors one little bit, do we?
I hate sailors, Piggy said, rattling the rocks in his voice.
Keep talking, Smiley ordered. Knock off this crap about making breakfast. We ain't got all night to listen to you. Tell us, for instance, why you're up at Wirtz's saying you're going to go into the saloon business, which we know is a lie.
What the hell is it to you? I asked. Am I bothering you, you yellow son of a bitch? Let me get my hands on you, and I'll show you what the hell business I'm in. I got a kick in the ribs, and then another and another.
Kick him again, Piggy. Kick him. Kick him. Like this.
A vicious kick beside my right kidney made me arch my back in pain. Smiley was panting with sadistic excitement.
Don't knock him out, Piggy. I want to hurt him some more.
He bent over me.
Big mouth, ain't you? Big mouth snooper, that's you. Well, we don't like big mouth snoopers in this town, that's for sure. You understand?
Go to hell, I said. I never did have good sense.
So we're just going to teach you to mind your own business. You ain't no big shot. You ain't even a little shot. You're just a nosy snooper with a big mouth, ain't you?
Go to hell, I said. He rolled me over with his feet so that I lay with my face in a puddle of the water they had thrown on me. My hands were tied behind my back.
Hand me that piece of wire, Piggy,
I heard Smiley say.
What's the score?
1 just plain bastards.
That's 5.
1 dumb bastards.
That's 10, easy.
He called you a yellow son of a bitch, Smiley.
I don't like that. 25 would be about right, I think.
Why don't you make it 30? Piggy asked. Then he told us to go to hell twice.
That's 5 each or 10 more.
That makes 55. And 5 more for talking like a sailor makes 60. Don't you think you better gag him so nobody hears his screams on the street?
You got something to stuff in his mouth, Piggy?
I got a wad of old rags, Smiley.
I was rolled back and my face slapped.
Open your mouth!
Foul rags were jammed into it. Another rag was passed across my face and tied, and then I was rolled back on my face.
This hurts us more than it hurts you.
Smiley started laughing, and I could hear Piggy chuckling too.
But it's for your own good.
I heard a swishing sound coming down from the ceiling, and a streak of red-hot pain slashed across my shoulders. I tried to shout, but no noise came out.
1, Smiley said. Only 59 more to go.
Again, the terrible searing pain as the stiff piece of wire cut across my back, and I writhed and tried to roll away. Somebody sat on my legs to hold me down.
2, 3, 4.
I wished I could die and knew I wouldn't. I prayed and I cursed and I banged my head on the cellar floor and lost all count of the lashes. I lost all sense of everything except the terrible pain repeated over and over again on my back. There was never anything like that, and there was nothing I could do about it. The cords that held my wrists together cut into the skin as I strained to get loose, but I couldn't free myself. After a while I couldn't hear the counting, but I could hear Smiley and Piggy laughing and giggling as Smiley slowly cut me to pieces. And then, I guess I passed out. The light was still coming from around the corner when I opened my eyes again. I raised my head and would have cried out in pain except for the gag in my mouth. When I tried to move my shoulders, the terrible ache in my back was worse. Slowly, memory of what had happened returned. I tried my legs for size, and they seemed to be untied, so I got unsteadily to my feet. When I tried to walk, my head wouldn't work right, but seemed to be swimming off in a world of its own. You better take a couple of round turns and a half hitch on something, Rex, I said to myself, and snub yourself against the pier before you drift free. I stumbled toward the source of light, which turned out to be a dirty and battered old street lantern, and by its feeble beams I found a flight of steps leading upward. But I couldn't make it. My legs just wouldn't lift me. My hands were still tied behind me, but I managed to reach the jackknife in my hip pocket and cut the lashings my entertaining friends had put around my wrists. You should have seen those wrists, swollen and cut and angry purple in color. As the blood began to flow back into my hands at its regular rate, the pain in my arms became almost too much to bear. But when it was gone for good. I yanked the bandage off my face and spat out the gag. All this while I was still down. Then I turned and slowly made it up the steps on my hands and knees. I was in an old house that seemed deserted. The lantern was downstairs, and I wasn't going to go down and get it just to see the details of the place where I found myself. Somewhere there must be a door. Someone had brought me in, and there must be a way out. Eventually I found it and painfully made my way through a battered entry hall. I pushed a door open and bright sunlight slammed me in the eyes. When I remembered to look at my watch, I saw it was 10 o'clock in the morning, but the morning of what day I couldn't guess. I was an unholy mess. My jacket was gone. The front of my shirt was covered with mud and filth from the cellar floor. I put my hand against my back and it came back with flecks of caked black blood on it. There was still money in my pockets, but I was afraid to step out and hail a taxi. The driver would have taken one look and called the cops. Cops. Now my head began to clear up. I learned to breathe again, in spite of the pain of my kicked ribs and my torn back. I felt my way down to the cellar and got the lantern and found my jacket in a corner. Smiley and Piggy had splashed water on me, so there must be a faucet somewhere. I found it over by an old laundry tub, and I washed my hands and face as well as I could, then struggled into the jacket. Struggled is a mild word. Getting into that jacket was sheer and exquisite torture. It felt as though a million red-hot needles were jabbing into my back with every move I made. But I got to the door and stepped out onto the street. The house was deserted and a sign said for sale. 2 front windows were broken. For a moment I had the idea of going to Debbie's apartment, but something told me that I wouldn't be welcome, even if she happened to be home. There wasn't anything romantic about me, that was a certain bet. So I went down the street the other way and started looking for either a cop or a call box. I found the call box first. A gruff voice answered. "What do you want, Amotsky? You're early." "This is Rex Howard," I said, and I gave him the box number. "I got beat up last night, and I need help, please." "Who?" the voice said. "Where's Amotsky?" "I don't know Amotsky," I said. "Listen, please. I need help. I need a doctor." "Why didn't you say you need a doctor? There's one in the middle of the block, Dr. Fishbush. Go see him. What's the matter, you drunk?" "I can't make it to the middle of the block. I'm just hanging on here, and I'm going to fall over in a minute." I wasn't just saying that either. The city was beginning to go around in circles. "Please, send somebody to help me." I felt myself slip into the sidewalk. "Bear a hand, you sailors," I muttered, and passed out again. Next thing I knew, there was a guy in a white jacket and a good-looking dame in white, too, and they were looking at me, and we were all in a white room with white sheets and white beds that I could see out of the corner of my eye. The place smelled like sick bay, which is what we call the medical section aboard ship. The guy in the white jacket looked like a sawbone, so I smiled at him and said, "Hi, Doc." "Good morning, Mr. Howard," he smiled back. "Do you think you're going to live?" I shut my eyes again and tried to think. "Where am I?" I asked, opening just one eye this time. "Bellevue Hospital," he said cheerfully. "How long have I been here?" "This is your 3rd day." He certainly was jolly about it. "Is that good?" I asked. "Gave you a chance to heal, after we got the blood and dirt scrubbed off you, and threw your shirt and undershirt away. Do you feel like talking?" "I feel like eating," I said. "I feel like a double bourbon on the rocks and a double sirloin on the rare side. What kind of mess do you run here?" "I beg your pardon?" the nurse said. "Pardon me, ma'am. Sometimes I forget and talk sailor talk. A mess is the dining room where I come from." "We'll give you something to eat," the doctor said. "Meanwhile, there's a detective who has been waiting around here for 2 days to talk to you." "Hello, Rex," a familiar voice said. It was Eddie Zimmer. "What the hell'd you tangle with, Rocky Bottom? You look like you've been run around off the coast of Maine." "What happened to me, Eddie? Did you get those guys?" "What guys, Chief? What guys are you talking about?" "Those guys who gave me the business, Smiley and Piggy. Didn't I tell you?" And then I realized that he didn't know what I was talking about. Somehow or other, I had thought that everybody in New York must know by this time. "Just take your time, Chief," Eddie said gently. "We got all the time in the world." End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4. 2 days later, they discharged me, telling me to go home and take it easy. They didn't have to tell me. I read in books about these guys who get the hell beat out of them along about evening chow time, and before midnight their broken bones are knitted, a dentist has fitted them with new choppers, they drink a bottle of booze, get in 3 fistfights and half a dozen beds before morning, and go to work the next day. Not me. I'm a retired chief bosun's mate, United States Navy, and to me the word retired means just one thing: take it easy. I went to my apartment, stopping on the way to buy a basket full of sirloin steaks, and when I got there I took off all my clothes and tried to look at my back in the big mirror in the bathroom. Welts. That's all there was. Big purple welts with a row of scabs down the middle. The medics at Bellevue had counted them, 30 down one side and 30 down the other, diagonal, like a herringbone pattern. Wherever they crossed the skin had broken and bled. My back was still sore, but what the hell, I was going to live. Nothing had changed in the apartment. I put a big steak in the broiler and poured myself a double bourbon on the rocks. They wouldn't give me a drink in the sickbay, and started thinking, just to see if my brain would work. Eddie Zimmer hadn't known anything about the two guys who had taken me apart, and all I could give him was the names, Smiley and Piggy. Smiley I could describe as being about my size, but I really hadn't had a good look at him before he pounded me one in the jaw. I could describe Piggy's voice, but who was he talking to now? Eddie had told me that he was keeping an eye on Wirtz and Company and that a couple of police accountants had gone over his books with the finest of fine-tooth combs, and that nothing was wrong. Old Caesar was as jumpy as a recruit at his first inspection, but you can't throw a guy in jail for being nervous. To tell the truth, I wasn't the calmest and coolest guy in the city when I came out of that hospital. Not by a long shot, I wasn't. As for Debbie Ames, she told him I had taken her car to the parking lot and that she had expected me to return, but I never showed up. She figured I'd changed my mind, so after waiting an hour or more, she went to bed. Eddie had asked her if she wasn't worried about getting her car back, and she had said no. If I had wanted to take her car, she said, I could have it. Maybe I should have taken it and gone for a long ride, like to Miami. It would have been easier on my back. As far as finding out anything about Jan's murder, Eddie Zimmer admitted that they were up against a brick wall. Do you think this little accident of mine had any connection with it? I asked him. It must have. He pulled on his long chin and looked seriously at me. They told you to stay away from Wirtz, didn't they? The case of Tooley's Irish came from Wirtz, didn't it? But what the connection is between the beating you got and the death of your sister, I'll be darned if I know. But I'll tell you one thing, Rex, I'm going to find out. If I don't beat you to it, I told him. The way I figure it, he said, a smile in his gray eyes, you are no longer a kid, Rex. You are the former light heavyweight champion of the Pacific Fleet. You spend one day trying to make like a detective and the next 5 days in the hospital. Why don't you let us professionals do this job for you? We heal quicker. Well, as I said, I was thinking all this over and having a drink and keeping an eye on the steak when the telephone rang. It was Debbie. I'm afraid I sounded a little chilly. Maybe all her boyfriends got beat up. Rex, she said in her sexy voice. She breathed in when she said it. Where in the world have you been, darling? Where did you ever get to the other night? Whatever happened? Hospital, I said. I've been in Bellevue Hospital. What were you in Bellevue for, Rex? Why didn't you let me know so I could come and see you? Why in the world didn't you call me, darling? I've been worried and scared and couldn't find out anything. Are you all right now, Rex? I got the hell beat out of me on my way back to your place, I said. 2 guys worked me over. I woke up in Beat up, she repeated. Beat up? Why, Rex? Did they rob you or something? No, just warned me to mind my own business and stay away from Wirtz and Company. I took that to mean you, too. I learned pretty easily. Suddenly, I smelled something. Hold everything, I yelled. Ring the chief engineer. We're making black smoke. I dashed for the galley, but it was too late. The steak was a cinder. Debbie, I said, the end has come. I just ruined a great big sirloin steak while I was sitting here talking to you, damn it. The first damn steak I've seen since I went to the hospital. Come on up here, Rex. I'll cook you a steak, you poor guy. You need someone to take care of you, and I guess I'm elected. I'm not going out of this house tonight, Debbie, I said. I've got a reefer full of steaks, too. You come down here and I'll cook you one. How about that? I'll just have time to clean the broiler before you get here if you hurry. As soon as I get dressed, Rex. Is there anything I can bring? Quinine water, if you want any. And why bother to get dressed? You'll save time at both ends if you come the way you are now. She laughed and hung up. I added a little bourbon to the ice in my glass and went to work on the broiler. She got there in about half an hour with 6 bottles of quinine water, a head of lettuce, some Roquefort cheese, and perspiration on her forehead. What did you do? I asked. Run? But she looked good. The artificiality I'd noticed in her face at first was gone, and she seemed to have come alive since the last time I had seen her. I certainly did, she said. I ran down here as fast as I could.
Oh, Rex, don't just stand there looking like you were measuring me for a dress or something. I've been so worried about you. Oh, kiss me, darling, and never let me go again.
Then she was in my arms, with her hot, wet mouth melting into mine, and every part of her body seemed to seek for me as she twisted and pulled my head closer to hers.
There,
she said finally.
Don't you disappear for 5 days again. I couldn't stand it.
I took a long breath. I couldn't stand it either, Debbie. Then it was my turn, and I held her to me as fiercely as I could. When I kissed her, I tried to crush her lips against mine. I released one of my arms from around her waist and let my fingers caress her back and her side. My tongue touched hers, and again our bodies each sought the other as we stood there beside the door. How about a drink? I finally said.
How about the steak?
She answered.
I brought some lettuce because I never knew a man who kept lettuce on hand, and I like salads. And I brought some Roquefort cheese because I like it. That's the height of my personal sophistication. I'll fix everything if you make me a gin and tonic. Show me where the kitchen is, Rex.
We walked toward the galley.
Are all these pictures on the wall you? You must tell me about them after we eat.
But telling her about pictures taken years before didn't quite seem the thing to do. It took us a long time to get the steak started, what with drinks and kisses and finding out about each other. I was beginning to feel good again, and when I finally did finish my part of the steak and the rest of the chow Debbie whipped up, I was a new man. We got around to doing the dishes along about 11 o'clock. I had the last cup in one hand and the towel in the other when all of a sudden she turned and threw her arms around me and kissed me and dug her fingernails into my back. "Ouch!" I yelled and dropped the cup. "Damn!" She jumped.
What's the matter, darling? What happened?
"Sorry," I said. "You kind of tickled my back in one of the more ticklish parts."
"I forgot,"
she whispered, and her whisper was as soft and sweet as a fair breeze at sea.
"I'm sorry. Is it very sore, Rex? I didn't want to hurt you."
"Take a look," I said, and peeled off my shirt and my skivvy shirt. "Prettiest little old back you ever did see, isn't it?" She looked as I turned around, and I heard her breath suck in a little gasp.
"Oh, my God, Rex. I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't ever want to hurt you, darling."
She put her head against my chest as I turned back and started to cry. "You didn't hurt me, Debbie," I said. "Just tickled me a little." I kissed her wet eyelids. "Now stop crying."
"I don't want to hurt you, Rex," she repeated. "Just wait here a minute, dear."
She ran around the corner to the bathroom, and I heard the water running in the washstand as she washed her eyes. I went back to the galley and broke out some ice and made myself a small drink, then lit a cigarette as I waited for her to come back. I thought about putting my shirt back on and was reaching for it when she called.
"Come on in here and see me, Rex."
Her voice sounded like an angel calling to me, deep and throaty and soft and feminine.
"I'm all right now."
I doused my cigarette under the water in the sink and set my drink down on a counter. She wasn't in the living room. "Where'd you get to, Debbie?" Her voice came from the open door of the dark bedroom.
"I don't want to hurt you. Never, never, never. All I ever want to do is love you."
I walked across the blackness of the room and met her there, and she was ready for me, and I was ready for her. I guess both of us had known, maybe even before we ever saw each other, that sometime, somewhere, it would be like that. Finally, we slept, and then we awakened again, and she was restless and suddenly shy. I caressed her wonderful warm body gently and won her again.
"The lights are still burning somewhere outside,"
she said after a while, kissing me softly on the cheek. "The better to see you with, my dear."
"I don't like them anymore. I want to stay in the dark with you for a long, long time, and then we'll wake up in the morning and see each other. Only, I'll wake up first and be beautiful when you see me."
"You're beautiful now."
"Turn off the lights outside, darling, and bring me a drink. I'll go to sleep and dream about you, and when I wake up it will all come true."
"You want a drink?" I asked.
"You get one too," she said. "I want us to drink to us, now that I've finally found you."
I got up and went to the galley and mixed the drinks. According to my watch, it was almost 2 a.m. I turned out the lights and went back to the bedroom. She sat up in bed and took the drink I offered her.
"All I ever want to do is love you," she whispered,
and tapped the rim of her glass against the rim of mine. In a few minutes, it seemed, I heard her breathing steadily and slowly, and I got up and walked out to the living room. It was 2:30. Her handbag was lying there on the table beside the sofa, and I opened it and took out her keys. Then I quickly dressed myself, slipped a short-barreled Smith & Wesson .32 caliber revolver into my pocket, and quietly opened the door and stepped outside. The lock closed noiselessly behind me, but it didn't really matter whether it made any noise or not. The little bit of chloral hydrate I dropped in Debbie's drink would keep her sound asleep until 7 o'clock anyhow, and I would be back before that. A late cruising taxi took me across town within 3 blocks of Wirtz & Company, and I walked the rest of the way. The streets were pretty deserted, only now and then did I see a wanderer like myself. Debbie had just 3 keys on her ring, and one was the automobile key, so I didn't have to do too much fumbling around to get the door opened. The same key worked on the office door on the second deck. I stepped inside and closed it carefully behind me, then took out my little flashlight and poked a beam around the room. It hadn't changed since that last time I was there. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I didn't think it would be in Debbie's office. The other office, Wirtz's, was through a door, and I sent a flashlight beam that way and then followed it. There was nothing much in the office, just a desk and a couple of chairs and some file cabinets. There was another door to one side that turned out to be an empty coat closet, just big enough for one coat. I closed the door and started looking through the file drawers. The telephone rang, and I practically jumped through the overhead. My watch said it was exactly 3 o'clock. For a minute I was tempted to pick up the telephone and find out what the call was about, but then I quickly changed my mind. Anyone who would call exactly at 3 must be calling on schedule, it seemed to me. I carefully closed the file drawers and looked for a place to hide. Old man Wirtz didn't give me much time to look. I heard his key in the lock while the phone was still ringing and barely had time to wedge into the coat closet before he had the outer door opened. He grabbed for the phone on Debbie's desk, and I could just see him outlined against the window in the faint light from a street lamp.
"Hello," he said. "Hello? Yes, I got your note. I got it right here. She is? Coggy, she doesn't know a thing. I think it was the wrong thing to do. All right, if you say so. Monday? I have to leave word. I'm running a business, man."
He hung up the telephone, and I pulled the closet door shut to the tiniest crack, but he didn't come into his own office, nor did he turn on the light. He muttered something to himself a couple of times, paced back and forth in the outer office, took a piece of paper from his pocket and tore it up and threw it in the wastebasket. Then he pounded his fists against his head in a gesture of despair, opened the door, and went out. I could hear him walking slowly down the stairs. When I figured he was clear, I rescued the scraps of torn paper from the wastebasket and carefully put them in my pocket. Then I left the office and the building and was back in my own apartment by 3:45. Debbie was still sleeping soundly when I crawled into bed beside her, and in a couple of minutes I was sound asleep too. The sun was streaming in the bedroom window when I was awakened by the smell of coffee and somebody blowing a thin stream of warm breath in my ear. That makes quite an alarm clock.
"Wake up, you sleepyhead," Debbie said. "Open your big blue eyes, sailor, and look at me."
She was standing beside me with the coffee in her hand, wearing an old silk dress gown I had bought in Shanghai years ago. She sure did look good in it. There was a sparkle in her eyes and a wonderful warm smile on her wide red mouth. She kissed me gently. "You're beautiful," I said. "Absolutely and perfectly beautiful. Don't ever go away and don't ever change."
"I told you I'd get up first. You're a lazybones. It's almost 8 o'clock. I've been up for an hour. Here's some coffee for you."
She sat down on the bed beside me. "Put the coffee right there on that little table," I said, "and give me a kiss." She leaned over to kiss me as I lay there in the bed, and as our lips met, the dressing gown parted. I closed my arms around her. It was Sunday, and after we had had breakfast, along about 11 o'clock, we got our car from the parking lot and went driving around Manhattan. It's no use to try to drive out of New York on a Sunday. The traffic is murder. The trick is to drive through Central Park or sneak down Lower Broadway to the deserted financial district like we did. Nobody bothers you. You don't mind if the lights do change to red. It's peaceful and quiet down there. We were talking about things, and finally I mentioned the one thing that was uppermost in my mind. "Did you ever hear of anybody named Coggy?" I asked.
"Who?"
The question was so natural and casual that I couldn't suspect a thing. "Coggy," I repeated.
"Never heard of him. Why? Who is he, if it is a he?"
"I don't know," I said. "I just heard your boss mention the name at about 5 minutes after 3 this morning."
"That's odd. You... what?"
She turned to me with her eyes wide with amazement, and then she laughed.
"Come again, Rex?" For a moment I thought you said you heard my boss mention some name at 5 minutes after 3 this morning.
That's what I said.
Were there 3 of us in bed, and why didn't somebody tell me? I'd have got up and mixed some drinks while you two were talking. What's this all about, anyhow? Let me in on it.
I was up in his office listening to him talk to somebody who called him on the phone at exactly 3 o'clock. The man who called him was named Coggy, I think.
How did you get into the office?
The fun had left her voice. With your keys?
And how did you get in and out of bed without waking me? I'm a light sleeper. Don't tell me. Let me guess.
She interrupted as I started to answer.
I had a funny feeling when I got up this morning that I was groggier than a couple of drinks would ever make me. What did you put in that last one I had?
Chloral hydrate, I admitted. Just a drop. Her mouth formed a hard line across her face.
What else did you do after you knocked me out? Rape me? You sound like the kind of guy who would get a kick out of something like that.
Come off it, Debbie, I said. I just didn't want you to wake up and find me gone and get worried. Now calm down and we'll drive up to the park and have a drink.
You can drive up to the park and have a drink. Maybe you can get some stupid girl like me to have one with you. Then you can slip her a Mickey and get into bed with her if that's your idea of a good time. It doesn't sound like fun to me. And tell her to count the money in her purse before she goes home.
Aw, now, you don't mean that, honey. Come on, give me that big smile and tell me that you forgive me.
No, Rex, she said slowly. I'll get off here. I don't think I like you very much anymore. I thought last night happened because we were kind of meant for each other. I thought you were a square guy, not the kind of bum who would make love to a girl just so he could steal her office keys. I sure looked stupid on that play, didn't I? Debbie the patsy, Debbie the sucker with the stars in her eyes. Stop the car and let me out. I can't stand it here any longer.
I slowed down. Look, Debbie, you got me all wrong. I meant everything last night and this morning. It was the most wonderful thing in the world, and you're the most wonderful girl I ever knew. Don't walk out on me, darling. I'm sorry.
You're sorry, all right.
She opened the door and stepped out.
About the sorriest bastard I've met for a long time.
She turned away and ran down into the subway. Debbie, I called. Debbie! But I knew it was no use. I'd loused things up but good. I drove back uptown and put her car in the parking lot where it belonged. Then I walked down to 51st Street to see if maybe Eddie Zimmer, the detective, was in the 17th Squad room. He was. You look like you didn't have a friend in the world, Chief, was his greeting. What happened? You get a set of sea duty orders? I wish I would, I said. I wish I could get the hell out of this goddamn dirty town and just watch saltwater sliding down a ship's side again. It gets you, doesn't it? You never get over it. How's your back? It doesn't bother me. You ever heard of anybody called Coggy? Coggy? He looked at me questioningly. Did you say Coggy? That's right. Where'd you ever hear of him? He asked. Well, I began. I got hold of some keys to Wirtz's office, and last night I was kind of restless and couldn't sleep. So I went up to the office just to look around. That's against the law, Rex, and you know it damn well, he growled. Besides, what the hell could you find snooping around in the dark that 2 trained accountants haven't been able to find? It seemed like a good idea at the time, I said. Anyhow, while I was there, the phone started ringing, and old man Wirtz came running up and answered it. I heard him say, Coggy, she doesn't know a thing. So what? A man answers his own phone in his own office and says that some female doesn't know a thing. Jeepers, Chief, there must be 1,000,000 guys make that same remark about some dame every day. He smiled. Of course, about half the guys who say it are probably wrong. I thought it might be a tip you could use, Eddie. Then, after the old man hung up, he tore up a piece of paper and threw it in the wastebasket. I picked it up and brought it with me. Here it is. We got lots of scraps of paper in our own wastebaskets, Eddie said. I don't see why we need any more. He started smoothing out the 24 pieces of paper and fitting them together on his desk. This really does it, Rex. I think you finally located Judge Crater and maybe even Charlie Ross. What does it say? I asked eagerly, leaning over for a better look. It says, we'll call you at your office at 3 a.m. Sunday. Be there. C. That C must stand for Coggy, I suggested. Rex, he said, patting me gently on the arm. You've had a tough time. Why don't you get a little rest? He picked up the scraps of paper and dumped them into his wastebasket. I'll be off duty in about 4 hours, and I'll meet you and buy you a drink. How about that? I gather you don't care much for the information I just brought down here.
I honestly can't see that it's worth a damn.
What do you know that's any better? For example, who killed my sister? And where is Joe Gillian? Foolish questions, maybe, but what the hell are you cops doing? I banged my fist on the desk. Tell me something, man. Tell me something before I go crazy. That was my sister who fell dead in Cunahan's saloon. She may be just another number in your goddamn files to you, but she was my kid's sister. I want the son of a bitch who killed her, and I want his neck right here in my hand.
We're doing everything we can, Chief, Eddie said. These things take time, but this one will break all of a sudden. I just have a feeling.
You got any kind of feeling about those two bums who nearly broke my back?
No, but we think...
You sit here and think, I growled. I got no time to wear calluses on my duff thinking. God damn it, I'll run this thing down myself. I got a detective's license, I might as well use it.
Be careful about breaking and entering, Rex, or you'll lose that ticket.
Be careful about thinking, Eddie, I snapped, or you might lose some sack time. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording's in the public domain. Chapter 5. Me and my big mouth. I didn't have any idea what to do next. I sent 3 dozen roses to Debbie, and when I got home, I called her up. When she heard my voice, there was a bang and the line went dead. I gathered she didn't want to talk to me. Eddie Zimmer was absolutely right. All I had was a scrap of conversation that might mean anything and probably meant nothing. But Eddie hadn't seen Caesar Wirtz beating himself over the head in despair. I decided I better go back and talk to Wirtz, preferably outside his office. I wasn't quite up to facing Debbie. There was a Caesar Wirtz listed in the telephone book, but he didn't answer. I called the Importers Club, but he wasn't there, and that exhausted my ingenuity. There wasn't anything left for me to do except wait for Monday morning, so I sat in the apartment feeling sorry for myself until it was time to go to bed. Bed was kind of a lonely place, too. The next morning, I was in the restaurant across from Wirtz and Company at 8 o'clock, drinking coffee and munching some sad donuts and watching The Office and Street for Caesar. Debbie came walking down the street at 8:45. At 9 sharp, a taxi pulled up to the door, and Mr. Wirtz jumped out and ran up the stairs. The taxi pulled away. Nuts, I said. I missed him. Then I remembered that the last time I wanted to see him, he had left his office and come into the restaurant to escape me. Maybe it would happen again. I called, and Debbie answered. I'm coming up to see Mr. Wirtz, I said quickly. This is Rex Howard. I'll be there in 15 minutes. That was all. In 5 minutes, she came walking across the street and into the restaurant.
Just like I thought, she said. Sitting right here waiting to catch Mr. Wirtz, you sneak.
Look, Debbie, I said, catching her hand. Let me explain. I've got to talk to Mr. Wirtz. He's got to tell me.
Don't try to explain to me in here, she said, pulling her hand away. Come on outside.
She turned on her heel and walked quickly out the door. I handed the waiter $1 and followed her. She was hurrying down the street. Debbie, I said. Debbie, wait a minute. I ran and caught up to her. Hold fast. I don't want Mr. Wirtz to get away.
I won't talk to you where you can see us from the window, she said, and I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. Make up your mind, me or Wirtz.
You, Debbie, I said. Always you. Darling, you don't know how badly I feel about what I did. I didn't mean...
That's all over now, Rex. Thanks for bringing my car back, though. I just thought you'd like to know that I asked Mr. Wirtz who Coggy was.
What did he say?
He turned white, and I thought he was going to faint. Then he said, "Where did you ever hear that name?" I told him somebody had asked me if he knew anybody by that name, that was all. Then he came running out to my desk and looked in the wastebasket and started yelling that it was gone. "Somebody took it," he shouted. "My God, they'll kill me for this." Do you know what he was talking about, Rex?
Yes, I said. He threw a note into the wastebasket. I took it out.
I thought so. He thinks I took it. You've sure made me look good. I just wanted you to know.
Her tone chilled me. Thanks, I said. Now, if you don't mind, I think I'll go back and talk to Mr. Wirtz. I'll tell him I took his note, if that'll do you any good.
You won't find him there, she said. He's gone. He was just inside the door waiting for me to get you out of sight. He's off on a business trip, he told me, and doesn't know when he'll come back.
I'll come back to the office anyhow, if you don't mind, Debbie. I want to tell you how...
I told you it was all over, Rex. Please don't come back to the office with me. I don't think I could take it.
She walked rapidly away. I felt like hell. A couple of buildings down the avenue, there was a cigar store with a telephone sign on the front. I went in and called Eddie Zimmer. "I thought I'd find you in," I said. "Don't you ever get out and work?" Without giving him time to answer, I went on. "You might be interested to know that when Caesar Wirtz's secretary asked him who Coggy was, he practically fainted. Then he went and looked in the wastebasket for the scraps of the note I gave you, and when he found they were gone, he started yelling that somebody'd kill him for it. Right after that, he dashed out of the office saying he was going on a business trip and didn't know when he'd be back." I paused for a breath. "Interesting," Eddie said. "Maybe we'd better keep an eye on Mr. Wirtz. Did he say where he was going?" "He didn't talk to me. Debbie, his secretary, told me all this." "I wondered where you were getting your dope from. Go ask her if she has any idea where he went." "Ask her yourself," I said. "She isn't feeling very kindly toward me." "She must have lots of company all over the world," he said. "I wish I had a nickel for all the dames you've loved and left." "Go to hell," I said, and hung up. Zimmer was beginning to make me a little sore. All I wanted was a little sympathy, and all I was getting was a lot of guff. I tried to call Wirtz at his home, but nobody answered. Then I walked down the street in the direction Wirtz must have taken if he had left his office on foot, until I came to a parking lot. "Mr. Caesar Wirtz keep his car here?" I asked the attendant. He was an old guy with a weather-beaten face. He peered at me questioningly.
"Ain't you the 1st Division Master-at-Arms on the old Black Hawk before the war? My name's Pete Brubaker. I went out as a shipfitter first. I remember you."
"Pete!" I grabbed him by the hand. "Sure, I remember you. You made me a Monal metal cigarette box. I still have it down at the apartment. What the hell are you doing here?"
"You still got that old box. I run this here parking lot. A guy like me with a wife can't live on the pension they give her first class. Not these days. But we make out all right. What are you doing? Your name's Rex Howard, ain't it? What are you doing?"
"Living here in New York, working with factories on security stuff and things like that. Did you say Mr. Wirtz keeps his car here?"
"Yeah, he just left. Terrible hurry, too. I don't know where he's in such a sweat about. Why don't you come around and have chow with the old lady and me, Howard? We don't see much of the old gang anymore. There ain't many Black Hawk sailors left around these parts, you know that?"
I could have stayed and talked to him for 3 days, but I didn't. Brubaker didn't expect me to either. That's the way it goes. You sail in and see some old shipmate, and then you sail away again. I was in a hurry to cast off my lines and get traveling, even though nobody had given me a course yet. So first I had some lunch, and then I headed for home. What with one thing and another, including cleaning up the place and sending my shirts and the towels and linen out to the laundry, it was about 5 o'clock before I got a chance to settle down. I had just lit a cigarette and was reading the evening paper when the telephone rang. It was Debbie. "Hello," I said, happier than I thought I would ever be to hear a voice. "I've been sitting here and wondering if it would do me any good to call you."
"Rex," she interrupted, "didn't you call me about 20 minutes ago?"
"No," I said. "I didn't. Why?"
"Somebody called." She sounded worried. "And said he was Rex Howard and was coming right up to see me. I said I didn't want to see you, and he said it was terribly important, and he wouldn't stay. Then I got to thinking about it, and it didn't sound exactly like you. Didn't you call, really?"
"No," I said again. "I didn't call. But I'd like nothing better in all the world than to come up and tell you how sorry—"
"Rex," she whispered. "Somebody's putting a key in my door lock. Rex, I'm scared."
"Hang up and call the cops," I said. "I'll be right up." I grabbed my revolver and dropped it in my jacket pocket and hit the outside hallway on a run. There was a taxi on the street below, and he wasted no time getting me up to Debbie's apartment building. I rang her apartment and waited, but there was no answering buzz to open the door. I pushed half a dozen other buttons, and finally somebody pushed the door latch buzzer for me, and I went in and ran up to the 3rd deck. I knocked on Debbie's door. There was no answer. I knocked again. I took the knob in my hand and turned it, and the door was locked. There was nothing left to do, so I bumped 190 pounds of tough old bosun's mate against the door until it came open. It only took one bump. This was the first time I had ever been in Debbie's apartment. It would probably be the last. Somebody had strangled Debbie, and she was dead. All I had to do was look at her, with the foam at her nostrils and mouth and the blank stare in her eyes, to know there was nothing I could do. The telephone was on its stand. I dropped a handkerchief over it to preserve any fingerprints that might be there, and dialed the 17th Detective Squad. Much to my surprise, Eddie Zimmer answered. I was beginning to get the idea that maybe he worked 24 hours a day, even if he never left his desk. "Eddie," I said, "this is Rex. Somebody's murdered Debbie." "Who is Debbie?" he asked, not unreasonably. "Debbie Ames, Wirtz's secretary." "How do you know?" "I just came into her apartment and found her dead on the deck. She's been strangled." "You sure she's dead?" "I know goddamn well she's dead." "Where are you?" I gave him the address and the apartment number, and he said, "Stay right where you are and don't touch a damn thing. That's not in my area, but I'll let the right guys know and I'll be there with them. See you in about 6 or 7 minutes." I smoked cigarettes in the hall outside the apartment until the police came. I couldn't stand being inside alone with Debbie dead. I'd have been talking to her if I'd stayed in there. The cops came off the elevator with Eddie Zimmer in front. He looked at me and I nodded toward the door. "It was locked when I got here and I had to put my shoulder to it to get in," I told him. "Remind me to ask you why you felt you had to break in," Zimmer said. "Although I know you have some logical-sounding reason or other." He and the 3 cops with him went in the door ahead of me.
"It looks like he was right, Eddie," one of the cops said. "She sure as hell is dead, and it looks to me like she was strangled."
"When's the ambulance getting here?" another cop wondered. "Them damn guys is always late."
"Nothing they can do," Zimmer said, "except take her away after homicide guys get finished taking their pretty little pictures. Gee, she was a good-looking dame, wasn't she? How'd you get to know her, Chief?" "I went up to Wirtz's office to see if he could tell me anything about the poison whiskey my sister got," I explained. "She was working there as a secretary. I had a date with her the night those 2 guys, Smiley and Piggy, beat me half to death. I suppose you've caught them by now?" "Don't change the subject," Zimmer said. He was pretty smart at that. "What were you doing here tonight? You didn't by chance just happen to strangle her, did you?" "Don't get me mad, Eddie. I told you once that murder makes me mad, especially when girls get murdered. I liked this girl. She liked me. We spent Saturday and Sunday at my apartment, which you would probably find out anyhow if I didn't tell you. We had a little argument on Sunday, and she got mad and went home. She called me about an hour ago and said somebody had called her and said he was me. Whoever it was, he was coming over. She said it didn't sound like me, and..." "Wait a minute, Rex," Eddie said. "Slow down. I'm trying to write this down." "She said it didn't sound exactly like me and wanted to know if I had called. I told her no, and then she said somebody was turning a key in her door lock. I told her to call the cops and hurried up here as fast as I could. That's the way I found her."
"Yeah," one of the other cops says. "But how do we know you didn't kill her? You had an argument. You said..."
I stood up and lit a cigarette to keep my hands from shaking. I was so mad. "God damn it, Eddie, you better tell these recruits to pipe down or I'm going to have a little happy hour with them, back on the fantail." "Sit down, Chief," he said. "Nobody's going to do anything except find out who killed this girl. Why do you think anyone would kill her anyhow? You got any ideas besides wanting to poke somebody in the jaw?" "She was in on that coggy business with her boss," I said. "He sure tore out of town in a hurry. Maybe she didn't get the word to leave. Maybe they got her before she had time to get out." "What do you mean, they?" "You got me," I said. "Whoever's behind all this killing and beating and putting poison in bottles of booze. You guys ought to know. You're supposed to be working on the case. You've got 2 murders to solve now, haven't you? If you hadn't been sitting on your fat behinds all week, you might have saved this one. Maybe this kid would still be alive. Maybe..." "Stow it!" Zimmer snapped, his skinny frame tightening up like a spring and his gray eyes going black. "Just knock it off, Howard. Maybe if you'd kept your nose out of the cops' business, this kid here would still be alive. Try thinking about it that way for a while, will you?" "I'm sorry," I said, me and my big mouth.
"Who is this coggy he's talking about, Eddie?"
one of the other cops asked.
"Is that the guy who's..."
"You wouldn't know who he was," Zimmer cut him off. "Who's that getting out of the elevator?" It was the men from homicide and the medics. They took over in their usual professional way, and in a short time I saw Debbie Ames for the last time, just before they pulled the blanket over her and took her away. "We got to go over and talk to the assistant DA about this, Rex," Eddie Zimmer said as we were leaving the apartment. "You come with me. You may not know it, but you're going to find yourself under suspicion in this one. Don't get itchy." "Why?" I asked. "Why would anybody think I killed her?" "I could probably think of a dozen different reasons," he said. "But I won't try. Look at it from my point of view for a minute. You've been playing around with the girl. You had a fight. You came to her apartment and broke down the door. This kind of thing is always happening around New York. Usually it's the guy who's in the spot you're in who killed her. Wait until you read all about it in the papers tomorrow." You really think I'm in a jam?
I know you are. Want my advice, Chief? Call up a good lawyer if you know one. Tell him to come up to the 19th Precinct.
Where can I make a call from? He pulled his car over to the curb.
This drugstore's as good a place as any. Don't feel insulted if I go in with you, just so you don't walk out the back door.
He was giving me a real break. All of a sudden, I found that I kind of liked Eddie Zimmer. I put in a call to Charlie Maddox, who had been the legal officer at Treasure Island when I was out there about 5 years before. He was practicing in New York now and had helped me get my detective's license and my gun permit, and had helped me set up in business. He was home. Charlie, I said, I'm in a jam. I'm with a cop now, on my way to the 19th Precinct. Can you come up and give me a hand? What's the trouble, Rex? Can it wait until morning? It's murder, I said. I'll be there, Chief. Did you say the 19th Precinct? That's right. I lit a cigarette and walked out with Eddie. Maddox got to the station house about 5 minutes after I arrived. The questioning was going hot and heavy by that time, and he really had to get in and pitch all the legal fastballs and curves in the book to keep them from throwing me in the pokey right then and there. Finally, after a lot of jawing and telephoning and dashing around town in a taxi, he turned up with a writ from some judge that put me in my lawyer's custody for an appearance the next morning. We rode down to my apartment together, and he came up for a drink. You got yourself in a real spot this time, haven't you? He asked, as he settled back with a glass of bourbon in his hand. I'd be in a worse one if it wasn't for you, I guess. I sure owe you a big one for this. I took the gun out of my pocket and tossed it in the desk drawer. Where in the hell did you get that? He asked. Had it in my pocket all along. You mean those cops never even searched you? They must have forgotten it. I smiled. You must have an honest look in your big red face, or else a guardian angel is riding on your shoulders. He said, You didn't kill Deborah Ames, did you? I forgot to ask. No, I didn't. I felt pretty hard for that girl, Charlie. She was something pretty special. I might even have wanted to marry her if she'd have had me. But I didn't kill her. I didn't kill her, I repeated. But I'll goddamn well kill the guy who did if I ever get my hands on him. Good thing you have a lawyer, that's all I have to say. He stood up and reached for his hat. Be down at my office at 9:15 tomorrow, Rex, and we'll take it from there and see what happens. Good night, Charlie. I walked to the door with him. Thanks a hell of a lot. Keep an anchor ready for letting go, he advised. We may find ourselves in pretty tricky water before we get moored to the dock. He had been gone for about an hour, and it was nearly 1 o'clock and time for me to go to bed, when somebody rang my doorbell. Who's there? I called. Who is it? The bell rang again and again. I took the revolver out of the drawer and stepped quietly over to one side of the door. Who is it? There was a muffled answer. I made sure the chain was on, and then I yanked the door open as far as the chain would let it go, and flattened myself against the wall, the gun ready in my hand. Come off it, Chief, a familiar voice said. This is Eddie Zimmer. Let me see your face, Eddie. I'm a little jumpy tonight. It was Eddie, all right. I put the gun in my pocket. Hell, I said. Don't you ever sleep? What do you want now? They got a body they think is your brother-in-law in a vacant lot up in the Bronx, he said. Do you want to ride up with me and take a look at him? My brother-in-law? Joseph Gillian. Somebody shot him through the head, the Bronx cops tell me. He had a wedding license in his pocket that says he married Janice Howard in Hot Springs about 3 weeks ago. You want to come with me? Sure, I said. This is the first brother-in-law I ever had. Why was he shot? Do they know? They don't think it was suicide. We walked out of the apartment together and went down and got in his car. As we hurried north, I asked him a question that had been bothering me. Why are you so closed-mouthed about this coggy business, Eddie? What's there, anyhow? Nothing that I know of, Rex. Don't give me that 7th pay grade stuff. I heard you shut that young cop up when he started to say something tonight. You aren't fooling me. All right, he said. I'll tell you. Somewhere on the New York waterfront, there's an operator they call Coggy. That's all I know about him. He's a thief on a big scale. What kind of thief? Liquor thief, mostly. Steals liquor coming in on ships from abroad. Steals it right off the docks, or else hijacks it after they're unloaded. Sells it through dishonest wholesalers. The racket's worth about $1 million a year, and Coggy runs it, or so I hear. Sells it to Wirtz and Company, maybe? Maybe. Who put the poison in Tooley's Irish? I wish to hell I knew. Coggy? I asked. Maybe, he said. Where is the son of a bitch?
If I knew, I'd go and get him, Rex. Right now I'm still hunting. Most of the liquor thefts happen over on the North River, around Pier 90.
I'll go over and find him for you.
You keep the hell out of it.
We could see a red light blinking ahead.
This must be where they found your brother-in-law, Eddie said.
He pulled up and stopped the car.
Where's the body?
He asked the cop who was keeping the small crowd back. He flashed his badge.
Zimmer, 17th Squad.
Right back there, the cop said. We walked back. There was a body lying on a stretcher.
This may be your brother-in-law, Chief, Eddie said. What does he look like to you?
He looks like Caesar Wirtz to me, I said. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6.
By God, Eddie Zimmer swore. It is Caesar Wirtz. Are you sure he isn't your brother-in-law? He might have married your sister under another name.
It doesn't seem possible to me, I said. Jan told me her husband was 37 years old and was a better-looking guy than I am.
That doesn't describe Wirtz, that's a cinch. He must be at least 60.
He turned to one of the cops who was standing near.
You say this guy has papers with the name of Joseph Gillian on him?
Yeah, we got a billfold with an Arkansas driver's license made out to Joseph Gillian, and a marriage license for Joseph Gillian and Janice Howard. A handkerchief in his pocket has a G initial on it. Funny thing, though, no laundry marks on his clothes that we can find. Maybe when we get him undressed we can do better.
Thanks, Eddie told him. Then he raised his voice. Well, I guess that's Joe Gillian, all right. I don't see how it could be anybody else but Joe Gillian.
I wonder if maybe he was losing his mind.
Come on, Chief, he said, taking me by the arm. We might as well shove off. Nothing we can do here.
We started walking back to his car. You blow your stack or something? I asked. You know that's not Joe Gillian.
Sure I know, but somebody went to a lot of trouble to make us think it was Joe Gillian, so it might be smart to play along for a while. I'll see that all the stories in the papers say that it was Gillian who was killed. Then in a couple of weeks, or less if we're lucky, we'll have somebody make another identification, and it'll turn out to be Caesar Wirtz.
Maybe Wirtz has friends who will wonder where he is.
Wirtz doesn't have any family. I happen to know that. You told me he was going away on a trip, didn't you?
I wonder where his car is, I said.
We'll find it abandoned someplace unless it's been stolen and repainted.
Zimmer lit a cigarette as we drove across the bridge and got back into Manhattan.
You know, this case is beginning to shape up. It's forming a pattern, and somebody is mighty scared.
What do you mean?
Well, look at it this way, Chief. Your sister gets poisoned. That's an accident. Couldn't be any other way. Then you get beat up as a warning to keep your nose out of the whole affair. That was a mistake.
You mean those guys intended to beat up somebody else? I asked.
No, they intended to beat you up, but beating you was a mistake. If nobody had bothered you at all, you'd have gone away of your own accord and nothing would have happened. But they got you right smack bang in the middle, and then they began to get scared.
Scared of what?
Scared of what people might know. Something was rotten in Wirtz and Company. Old man Wirtz knew what it was, and so he was killed to keep him from talking. Either Debbie Ames knew where the rottenness was, or somebody thought she did, which was just as bad, so she got killed. Now they killed everybody who could blab except for just one person.
Who's that?
You. My guess is they'll try to kill you next. You'd be a whole lot better off in jail than running around loose. Why don't you let me lock you up, Rex? I'm not kidding.
I can take care of myself, Eddie, I said. Where does Joe Gillian come into the picture?
We don't exactly know, but we're beginning to think he's mixed up with the racket somehow or other. He may be in the dope business. He may be a booze smuggler. We're getting a little bit on him now and then, mostly from Hot Springs, and it adds up. Our best bet now is dope. Maybe he's hot all of a sudden and scared to show himself.
How come his licenses were in Wirtz's pockets?
That's no strain. If a guy wants to lose himself, all he has to do is pass a couple of identity cards around to the boys, with a simple request that they be planted on a stiff. Sooner or later, Joe Gillian turns up dead, and Bill Smith, or whatever his square handle is still very much alive.
And how about Coggy?
I'd like to talk about Coggy, he said. I'd just like to sit down with him and have a good heart-to-heart talk.
And what are you going to do while you're waiting for him to drop by with nothing but conversation on his mind?
You want to know what I'm going to do, Chief? He slowed the car and stopped for a red light.
I'm going to send a gang of guys over to Wirtz and Company warehouse first thing in the morning and check every case of whiskey or gin or whatever they have all the way back to the grain it was made from. I'm going to know when it was loaded aboard ship, when and where it was unloaded, and the name of every man who handled it. And maybe I can find out how much of it's stolen cargo. And then maybe I can find out who stole it. That sounds like a hell of a lot of work, I said. That's how police work is, Rex. Finding the needles in the haystacks, and 9 times out of 10 the needles you find aren't the ones you want. Here's where you live. Let's go up. No, you don't need to come with me. The hell I don't. I told you you're the last one on the list, and it's my job to keep you from getting rubbed off. And I'll see you in your sack before I say goodnight. Nobody was in my apartment. Eddie left, and I locked the door and checked the chain. And when I went to bed, I locked the bedroom door and kept my gun handy. But nothing happened. And when the sun came up in the morning, I was hale, hearty, and safe. There isn't much to tell about the hearing at 9 o'clock. The police had evidently put their heads together and decided not to press any charges against me. Charlie Maddox, my lawyer, talked with the assistant district attorney, and then came back and told me I could shove off. They say they don't have enough evidence to hold you, Rex. Thanks, Charlie, I said. I don't know what I would have done without you. You'd be in jail, he said. The only thing that kept you out is that you were smart enough to call me. Just one little thing. What's that? I asked. Your bill? No, don't worry about my bill. But if I were you, I wouldn't suddenly decide to leave town without checking with the cops. They might prefer to have you handy. I'm staying here until this whole thing is cleaned up, I said. You couldn't get me out of town on a bet. Smart guy, he said. Good luck. We walked outside together, and he jumped in a cab to go back to his office. I started walking, going no place in particular. Some of the things Eddie Zimmer had told me that night before were still sorting themselves out in my head. One was the little item of being on the list for killing. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for someone to come and kill me, that was certain. Another item was the information about liquor being stolen up around Pier 90. And the third thing I was thinking about was Coggy. All this deep brain work finally stirred itself into the bright idea that I should go around town asking for Coggy, which would put me right out in the open where anybody who wanted to kill me could find me. Out in the open, I thought, I would be safer than backed into a corner. Maybe I could meet Coggy halfway and head on. I went back to my apartment and checked the door carefully before I put my key in the lock, to make sure it hadn't been opened while I was away. Everything was okay. I went to the bottom bureau drawer, opened a box, and unwrapped a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver with a 3.5-inch barrel. I didn't want any little .32. I wanted something that would pack a punch, and the Magnum was my baby. The New York waterfront was sort of out of my territory. I'd never done any security work for shipping firms and didn't exactly know where or how to start. A map of New York showed me where Pier 90 was, and a quick look in the telephone book told me that the Waterfront Commission had something they called an Employment Information Center on West 56th Street, right up from Pier 96. That seemed like a good place to start. A bus took me uptown, and I walked west on 56th Street, past a taxi garage on one side and a big automobile repair shop on the other, until I came to a set of 2 double doors and a sign that said it was the place I was looking for. I went inside and found I was in a bare, low-ceilinged room that might have been an old stable. At the far end was a counter that ran the whole way across the room, and I walked up and leaned against it. On the other side of the counter, to my left, was a glassed-in office. A man was sitting at a desk looking at the morning paper. I judged he was the man in charge and didn't disturb him. Right in front of me was a table with 3 people sitting around it drinking coffee. The clock on the wall behind them said 10:20. There were 3 large blackboards on the wall, too. Each had a headline lettered across the top that said, Hatch Gang, available date, blank. The date was written in blank space with chalk. There was a lot of stuff on the blackboard that I didn't understand. At the far right, all the way at the end of the counter, a man in a dirty red sweatshirt was standing with his head resting on his arms, which were folded on the counter. He seemed to be sleeping, and I thought maybe he was the boy who got paid for keeping the deck clean. Then I looked at him again and saw he was wearing a big black pistol in a shiny holster, and had a white police whistle hanging from his belt. He was a guard. Nobody paid any attention to me until I coughed loudly a couple of times. Then one of the coffee drinkers got up, came over, and gave me a fishy look, and asked if I wanted anything. I told him I was a private detective and was trying to locate a man known as Coggy. Wait a minute, he said, and walked into the office and said something to the man who was reading the paper. Then he came back to me. What was it you wanted? My name is Rex Howard, I repeated. I'm a private detective, and I'm looking for a waterfront character called Coggy. Did you ever hear of him? "Just a minute," he said, and walked back into the office and talked to the man there. Then he came back. "Mr. Mulligan will be with you in a minute." He went back to his coffee drinking. In 4.5 minutes, by the clock on the wall, Mr. Mulligan came out of the office. I gave him my best smile, told him who I was and what I wanted. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't give you that information." "Well," I said, "I'd like to get a job as a longshoreman. Can you tell me what I have to do or where I have to go?" "I'm afraid I can't answer that question," he said. For a place that called itself an information center, it was a darn poor spot to get an answer. I finally gave up in disgust and walked out. I turned toward the waterfront itself, went into the first saloon I came to, and ordered a beer. "You ever hear of a guy known as Coggy?" I asked the bartender. "Who?" he said. "There was a deckhand fell off a railroad tug about 7 months ago and drowned. They called him Foggy on account of how he was so thick. But that ain't the one you want, is it?" I thanked him and nursed the beer for a while. 2 roughly dressed men wandered in to have a beer. They said they didn't know any Coggy either. The same answer came up everywhere I went. Saloons, diners, guards on the docks, longshoremen knocking off for lunch. I even met a fellow who had been with me on the Boxer, a hard-shelled old gunner's mate named Juan Carmentini. We gave each other the big hello. He was working on the docks. "What do you do down here, Rex?" he asked. "You look for work here, too?" "No," I said. "I'm looking for a guy named Coggy. You ever hear of him?" "Coggy, you say? No. What do you want with him?" "I want to talk to him. Come across the street and I'll buy you a drink." "Hell, Carmen, it must have been almost 15 years since I last saw you. How have you been?" "Fine, Rex, fine. Everything's okay with Juan. Good job, good wife, 6 bambinos." We walked across the street into a bar, and he ordered whiskey with a beer on the side. I was satisfied with beer alone. Yes, everything's fine. How have you been, Rex? Where you go after you leave the old Boxer? What a bucket, huh?" He was talking fast. "Back to tin cans. Then I put in a hitch on the beach in Frisco, and then I went back to sea on a transport until I retired." "What do you do for work now, huh?" "I'm a private cop," I began. Juan swallowed his whiskey, gulped the beer down in a great hurry, and turned away. "Thanks, Rex," he said quickly. "Thanks. I gotta get back to work." And he was through the door and out of my sight before I could give the bartender the money I owed him for the drinks. It was along about 5 o'clock when I decided to call it a day. I had been in every place along the waterfront between 45th Street and Pier 99. Nobody knew anything about Coggy, or if they did, they weren't telling me. But everybody knew I was looking for Coggy. I had made sure of that. Now my groundwork was laid. I stopped to watch the unloading of a British freighter at Pier 91. And then I recognized the boss on the forward hatch. It was my old friend Smiley, the man who had given me 60 bloody purple stripes across my back. All of a sudden, I feel good. "Say," I said to the pier guard, "isn't that old Smiley up there on the forward hatch?" "Smiley Street," he said. "Sure, that's him." "I'll be darned," I went on. "Good old Smiley. I haven't seen him in a month of Sundays. What time does he knock off work on this job?" "Oh, they ought to be finished up there in another hour or 2. You want me to tell him you're here?" "No," I said. "I'll be back. I have to see a man, but I'll be back. You haven't seen Smiley's old pal Piggy, have you?" "Oh, he loaded his truck out of here yesterday to take a trip to Rochester. He ought to be back tonight or tomorrow. You a friend of his, too?" "Yeah." I offered him a cigarette, took one myself. "I used to play around with both of those guys. I'm glad to find where they're hanging out. Take it easy." "Same to you." I walked away, making sure that Smiley couldn't see me, practically tingling with excitement. In 2 hours, the guard had said, in 2 hours he would surely be finished with the unloading and would walk across the street and I'd be waiting for him. Juan Carmentini came across the sidewalk toward me, his eyes on the concrete. I stopped, expecting him to speak to me. I called him by name, but he kept walking steadily on. As he passed, I heard him whisper, "Look out, Rex. Look out, Rex. Look out, Rex." I knew enough not to run after him and asked him what he was talking about. The word was around, and somebody was plotting to get me. My friend was warning me to go, but I had business and had to stay. I started looking for a place where I could wait and watch for Smiley to walk off the pier, but where I'd at least have my stern protected in case anybody was planning to sneak in on me. The place I found was in a crummy little restaurant at a table in the front, where I could sit in the corner and look out the window at the entrance to Pier 91. There were some dusty fly-specked curtains at the window, so nobody was likely to spot me from outside. The restaurant was mostly a saloon with a long dark bar stretching back to the kitchen door. Beside the kitchen door were two other doors, one marked ladies and the other gents. "What can I get for you?" the bartender called to me as I sat down. "You got a cup of coffee?" We were the only two people in the room. "I guess so," he said, and disappeared through the kitchen door. He came back in half a minute or so with a cup in his hand and put it on the table in front of me. "You want anything else?" "No, thanks. This'll be fine. Don't you ever have any more customers than this?" We'll fill up when they finish working that ship across the way. The whole gang will come busting in here for a quick one before they go home. That's a dime for the coffee." I gave him the dime and stirred the sugar into the weak stuff he called coffee. I didn't know whether I wanted to take on Smiley and 2 or 3 hatch gangs all at once or not. The spoon made a monotonous noise as I kept stirring the sugar long after it had dissolved. "You waiting for somebody?" the bartender asked. "Yeah," I told him. "Anybody I know?" he persisted. I don't think so." I drank half the coffee. "If I knew who he was, I might be able to tell you if he was going to be here or not." "I don't know myself whether he'll be here. He may not come this way at all." "You a cop or something?" he wanted to know. "Do I look like a cop? Take a look at my feet. Are they flat?" I pushed my leg toward him. You never can tell," he muttered. "There ain't going to be any trouble in here, is there?" "I don't think there'll be any trouble at all," I assured him. "I'm just waiting for a friend of mine." "Oh," he said, "for a friend. Why didn't you say so in the first place? Have some more coffee?" "No, thanks." I looked at my watch. It had been an hour and a half since I had seen Smiley. I peered through the window. It was beginning to get dark. Across the street they were rigging in the booms on the freighter, and I knew the unloading was over. The hair on the back of my neck began to tickle. I got up and walked out of the restaurant. I couldn't sit there in that chair for another minute with the curious bartender looking at me, or I would have blown a gasket. Anyhow, the street was dark enough for protection by this time. I was leaning against one end of a parked and empty truck when the gang started to stream off Pier 91. Big men and little men, men in rough clothes and Sharpies, all laughing and shouting, and most of them swinging their big longshoremen's hooks with the wicked pointed ends as they hurried along. Some of them walked to the bus stop and waited there. More started walking across town. A few had their own cars, which soon filled up with their friends. Most of them seemed to be heading for the bar that I had just left. It was in this group that I spotted Smiley. He was as I remembered him, my size and husky. He was wearing an undershirt, and the muscles in his chest and arms bunched as he walked along. He and the gang with him, about 18 or 20 of them, passed the other end of the truck behind which I was standing, and went into the restaurant. I watched them line up at the bar while I made up my mind what to do and how to do it. Smiley solved the problem for me. He shouted his order at the busy bartender and then headed for the door marked Gents. As he opened that door, I opened the front door and walked into the bar room. Nobody paid any attention to me as I went back and into the Gents' room. There was a hook on the inside to latch the door, and I dropped the hook into its eye. Smiley was washing his hands and face in the washstand. He looked into the mirror as I came in, and at first he didn't seem to recognize the reflection that he saw. "Smiley," I said softly. "Remember me?" "Just a minute," he said. "I got soap in my eye." "It's me, Smiley," I said. "Me, Rex Howard. The guy with 60 cuts across his back. Turn around, you son of a bitch, and get your teeth knocked down your throat." He swung around with a knife in his hand, and no more soap in his eye than I had. He knew how to handle a knife, too, and the first thing I knew he had sliced a hole in the light sport jacket I was wearing, which wasn't the way I had planned things at all. Instead of fisticuffs, we were playing for real. Well, I'd been in and out of Sasebo, Japan during the Korean action, and I learned everything the Japanese judo guys could teach me, and a lot of other dirty tricks besides. Smiley ducked into a crouch to get away from a blow I purposefully threw wild at his head and started to come up toward my guts with the knife. I banged him under his jaw with my knee and knocked his head back so hard I thought his neck would snap. At the same time, I grabbed his knife-holding hand at the wrist and gave it a quick twist. The knife clattered to the deck and a couple of bones in his wrist crunched. I knew it must have hurt him like hell, but all he did was grunt. I clubbed him across the nose with the side of my left hand and smashed it all over his face. The blood started to run down into his mouth, and he spat it out against the wall, his bright eyes glowing hatred and pain. "Fight, you bastard!" I snapped at him. "Fight or fall down on the deck and let me kick your ribs in, and stomp your kidneys to a pulp." His breath kind of whistled through the wreckage of his nose. He backed up against the wall as I crowded toward him, And then suddenly he pushed himself out and hurled his full 200 pounds at me in a mighty tackle. I sidestepped, kneeing him in the ribs and smashing the heel of my hand into the small of his back as he went by. He fell on the floor. I kicked him in the ribs. He groaned, writhed, and lay still. I thought I had knocked him out. But there was fight left in him yet. He hadn't died for me. He had died for his knife. Although he had taken some terrible punishment as he went to the floor, he had the knife and I didn't realize it. He slowly pulled himself to his feet, the knife held back against his arm where I couldn't see it, and staggered to the sink and reached for the water faucet. I thought he was going to quit and be sick or something. Suddenly he turned in that quick pivot with the knife flashing from my midsection. He was out to disembowel me, and he damn near did it too. I felt a red-hot flash across my middle and pulled back as the knife glanced off the revolver in the holster on my belt, on the left side just under my jacket. This time I kicked his shin with all my might. He couldn't keep from bending down when the pain hit him. I fetched him up straight again with a knee in the face and smashed him with 3 solid punches under the heart, which left him limp and gasping. The knife was still in his hand, and I knocked it out for the second time. I measured his bloody face carefully and clubbed him across the mouth with the edge of my hand. I felt his front teeth going into the calloused skin as they came through his lips. Another hard smash to the jaw sent him staggering backward. His feet slipped on the tiled floor and he went down, hitting his head on the washstand as he fell. That knocked him out like a light. I went over to the sink, pulled on the roller towel, cut a piece of it off with his own knife, and gagged him. As I finished fastening the piece of the towel in his mouth, somebody started pounding on the door. "Hey, you guys! Open up and let somebody in, will you?" "Be out in just a minute," I called. I looked at myself in the mirror. There wasn't a mark on my face. My coat was cut, my shirt was slashed, and there were a couple of bloody stains on the shirt, but he had done little more than scratch me. I wasn't even breathing hard. I took his knife and broke the blade, kicked him in the ribs again, took the hook off the door, and walked out, closing it carefully behind me. There was a big guy waiting outside. He started to say something to me, but he must have seen something in my eyes that shut him up quick. He waited politely until I passed him, and then he opened the door and stepped in. I walked quickly toward the street door. All of a sudden, I heard a voice behind me call out, "God damn, he's killed him! Stop that guy!" I kept going toward the door, but I knew that everybody was looking at me, and some of them were probably coming my way. I whirled with my hand on my holstered pistol. "Just hold fast," I said. "Smiley isn't dead. If he asks what happened, tell him he's lucky. The next time I see him, it'll be worse." And I backed out of the door and ran around the corner. I ran half a block and nobody was following me. I walked to the corner and turned it, and as I passed a bar, Juan Carmentini came out. He didn't say anything to me, and I didn't say anything to him, but I followed him to a bus stop. When he got on a southbound bus, I got on too. When he got off, I got off. He walked across town. I walked across town. He stopped and sat on the steps of an old brownstone house in the Chelsea section, and I sat down beside him. "You looking for trouble, Rex?" he asked, lighting a brown cigarette. "More or less," I said. "I just beat the hell out of a hatch boss known as Smiley Street. You ever heard of him?" "I noticed Smiley. You in trouble, you mix with him, Rex." "I'm in trouble then, Carmen. I just about killed him. Who is he?" "Works for Coggy. Whiskey stealing." "How do they do it, Carmen?" "Easy, Smiley. He's hatch boss. Checkers. They're scared of him. They don't want to get beat up, get houses burned, kids killed. Smiley, he gives them a little sign when something come out of that hold he wants. Checkers never see it come out. Write it off his breakage, maybe. Whoosh, it go in thin air like smoke." "Where does it go?"
Into truck. Coggy's truck. Or maybe everything on the up and up, only somebody puts a little mark on the truck. Same day guy with gun gets in truck, driver gets out. Whoosh, whole truckload go in thin air like smoke."
"Who does it, just Coggy and Smiley?"
"Everybody in it, Rex. Everybody on the docks. Everybody knows, and nobody says nothing. Guy's gotta live. Look at me, Rex. Wife, 6 kids. So I say to somebody what's with the stealing, who takes care of my wife and kids, Rex. They never see me no more. I talk like that. Whoosh."
He drew his finger across his throat.
"I talk too much. Good night, Rex."
"Good night, Juan. Take it easy." I walked across town until I found a taxi to take me home, and all the while I remembered the way Juan said, "Whoosh." End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7. The telephone was ringing when I got to my apartment. It was Eddie Zimmer from the 17th Precinct.
"What you been doing all day, Chief?"
he asked, kind of offhandedly. I smelled a rat. "Walking around," I said, "talking to people."
"Maybe you've been talking too much, Rex. Everybody in this town knows that a big tow-headed guy with a red face and blue eyes is looking for Coggy. What are you going to do if you find him?"
"Strangle him. What else do you know?"
"A little bird told me that a fellow by the name of Smiley Street went into the John in a restaurant, and a big tow-headed guy with a red face and blue eyes went in after him. In about 10 minutes, the tow-headed guy with the red face and blue eyes came out without a scratch on him, not even breathing hard. This fella Smiley Street is still in the John, with a busted nose, a dislocated jaw, 5 broken ribs, numerous cuts, and contusions. What do you know about that?"
"What did he do?" I asked. "Fall? It's a good thing the tow-headed guy was there to keep him from getting hurt worse, wasn't it?"
"You could look at it that way, I guess. Look, Rex, take it easy or you're going to get killed. You're messing around with something that's too hot for you to handle."
"I'll take a chance," I said. "Anything on your mind?"
"They're after you, Chief. Watch your whites, because the hot stuff is going to start coming through."
"What'd you find at Wirtz's warehouse?" I asked.
"Say, I'm glad you mentioned that. Darn near forgot to tell you. We found 5 more cases of Tooley's Irish. They had their original distiller's numbers on them, and we started tracing them back."
"Find anything?"
"Yeah, they were part of a 100-case truckload that was hijacked last winter. We haven't been able to find how Wirtz got them into his warehouse without them showing up in his books, but he did it."
"Any of them poisoned?"
3 bottles out of 5 cases. That isn't too bad, is it?"
"No," I said. "Won't kill more than 3 people, probably. A thing like that is enough to drive a man out of business." "Say," I ventured, "maybe somebody was trying to drive Wirtz out of business."
"Now you're beginning to use your head, Chief. You're starting to think like a cop. Keep it up and maybe we'll be able to use you one of these days."
When he'd gone, I put some iodine on the little cut across my belly, shaved and changed my clothes, and went out. I left the cut jacket at a tailor's to be rewoven, and then I walked uptown to a restaurant owned by a retired admiral and his wife. The Filipino who used to cook for the admiral when he had his own flagship runs the galley in this restaurant, and I guess he doesn't drag down any more on the side than he used to. I was coxswain of the gig when the admiral was a cruise skipper, and we've always gotten along pretty well. I kind of hang out at his restaurant when I have nothing better to do. The roast beef is good and the booze is reasonable. The Filipino hates my guts because he knows that I know he's dragging down on the old man by collecting kickbacks on all the chow he buys. So I walked in, and the admiral was sitting behind the cash register counting his money, and I gave him a snappy salute, and we chewed the fat for a while, and then I ate a huge chow. I was hungry after my mild workout with Mr. Smiley Street. It was a good thing Piggy hadn't been around at the same time. If I had taken on the 2 of them at once, I'd have worked up enough appetite to eat the admiral out of bunkers and boats. I was smoking a cigarette and having a last cup of coffee when the Filipino came in with a joe pot.
"Hello, Chief," he said. "How about some hot jamok, fresh made?"
"Pour it in," I said, pushing my cup and saucer toward him. "It couldn't be any worse than this Manila Bay mud I've been drinking. How's your bank account? Still growing?"
"I have no money," he said, pouring the coffee. "Why you always make joke of me, Chief?"
"Don't give me that stuff. You'll be able to buy this joint soon." He walked off, and I drank the coffee and got up to leave. There was the usual line of good-night chatter with the admiral while I paid my check, and then I started to walk home. All of a sudden I felt woozy and knew that somebody had slipped me a Mickey. Everything Eddie Zimmer had warned me about came back to me. They had got to me, just as he told me they would, and I was a dead pigeon if I didn't do something in a hurry. I knew that the best thing to do was keep walking and try not to go to sleep, but I was so damn sleepy I didn't know how I'd manage it. It was impossible to stay awake. I was sleepy, so sleepy. So very sleepy. Somebody took me by the arm as I staggered along, and I was powerless to resist.
"Can I help you, sir?" a man's voice asked. "Would you like to have a taxi?"
I managed to mumble that I would, and he guided me into a car and slammed the door. My eyes were closed when he helped me in, and I slumped back on the seat. There was just enough strength left in my arms to grind the window down for some fresh air. It was wonderful to be in the taxi, and I knew that pretty soon I would be safe in my own bed again. I'd get that Filipino later for doping my Java. Right now all I knew or cared about was that the taxi was taking me home to bed. Some little part of my brain that was fighting the drug eventually got the idea that nobody had told the taxi driver where to go, but he certainly was going somewhere. This idea took a long time to seep through. I fought one eye half open with great effort and took a look around. It wasn't the taxi I was in, it was a plain, ordinary, everyday sedan. We weren't going downtown, we were going uptown. The eyelid fell like a leaden apron. I knew I could never open it again. But at the same time, some little gland somewhere in my body started pumping, and I got mad enough at that damn Filipino cook to keep breathing in the good old oxygen as fast as I could. Finally, the car slowed down and came to a stop. I pushed the other eye open a little, but it was so dark I couldn't see a thing. Somebody opened the door and asked, "Is he out?" And another voice said, "Like a light." Then somebody took hold of me by the shoulders and dragged me out of the car, and then somebody else took my legs and they carried me away. I could tell when we went into a building of some kind by the different smell of the air. Then there was the sound of elevator doors opening, and I felt that I was being carried into an elevator cage. "Look out for that damn thing," the person at my shoulder said. "This elevator's all shot. It stops when you want it to go. It goes when you want it to stop. The damn doors don't work right. You gotta be careful of it every minute." They must have got it working because pretty soon they carried me out. I couldn't get an eye open to see where I was going, but every now and then the guy at my feet would have to shuffle me around a little so he could open a door or close one. They should have had a cart. It would have been easier on all of us. Finally, they dumped me on a sofa or bed of some kind. A new man's voice said, "Throw a blanket over him and let him sleep it off." A woman's voice said, "He's so ugly, he's almost handsome, isn't he?" The man said, "Get the hell out of here, Marie. This is none of your business. Forget that you ever saw this guy." And then somebody threw a blanket over me and I couldn't stay awake any longer. It was wonderful to go to sleep. My watch said it was 10 o'clock when I woke up, but whether that was morning or night, I couldn't tell. The room was dark, my head ached, but not too badly. I threw off the blanket and sat up on the couch and figured I was going to live, for a little while at least. There were some cigarettes in my pocket and my matches. In fact, everything that I had started out with seemed to be untouched. I struck a match and found a wall switch and turned on a light. There was a door in the room and I opened it. A man was sitting in a chair just outside. "Hello," he said. "You up so soon? How about a little coffee? I got a thermos bottle of it right here." "Where the hell am I?" I asked, accepting his invitation and pouring myself a slug of mud. It tasted good and my head began to feel almost normal. "We'll work that out as soon as you feel up to it," he said. "There's a man here who wants to see you, wants to talk to you." "Who is it?" I asked. "You don't know?" He raised his eyebrows. "You were looking for him all over the place yesterday, I heard." "You don't mean Coggy?" "Who else? You wanted to see him, didn't you?" The guy laughed. His laugh didn't sound like there was anything funny on his mind. You want to see him now?" "Might as well." I shrugged my shoulders. "Which way?" "That way," he pointed. "Just start walking ahead of me, and I'll tell you when to turn. And don't forget, I'm right behind you with a cannon in my hand." We walked down a short hall which was kind of worn out and dusty, and then my guide told me to stop and knock on a door. I knocked, and a voice said, "Come in." It was the same voice I had heard talking to the woman he had called Marie just before I went to sleep. A smooth-faced guy, dark and Italian-looking, was sitting with his feet up on an old desk. The room was somewhere in a loft building, I guessed, and wasn't very big, maybe 15 feet square. There was one window, but the glass was opaque, and I couldn't see a thing through it. There was a horrible old carpet on the floor, and an unshaded light bulb hung down from a battered and dirt-streaked ceiling. A couple of chairs stood in the corners and around the desk, and, in addition to the man with his feet up, there was one other person sitting in the corner. It was shadowy there, and I couldn't see his face. He did have a big nickel-plated revolver in his lap, though. I could see that. "Sit down, Mr. Howard," the man behind the desk said. He had deep black eyes that bored right into you when he looked at you. "I understand you were looking for me yesterday." "Are you the guy they call Coggy?" I asked. "That's what some people call me," he said. "It'll do. What'd you have on your mind? Nothing funny, I hope? Either of these two guys here will shoot you dead if you make a fast play. This is a good shooting gallery. The noise doesn't get outside." I lit a cigarette. "I was thinking about killing you, Coggy," I told him. His expression never changed. "The way I have it figured, you're the guy who killed my sister, who had me beat up, and who killed Debbie Ames. I kind of liked those people. You probably killed Caesar Wirtz, too, but I'm not worried about him. If he hadn't been a crook, he'd have never got that bad whiskey, and my sister would still be alive. The hell with Wirtz. But goddamn you, Coggy, whatever your name is, for Jan and Debbie. I guess I played my hand out, but if I ever get a chance to kill you, I will.
That's straight enough, he said. I've been thinking about killing you, too. You're giving me too much trouble.
I'm giving you trouble, I jeered. You should have been to my sister's funeral, you murdering son of a bitch.
I didn't have anything to do with her getting killed, he said calmly.
I don't believe you. That whiskey Wirtz was selling was part of a truckload that was hijacked last winter.
What makes you think I had anything to do with it?
What was old man Wirtz so scared about when he was talking to you at 3 o'clock in the morning? I asked.
How the hell do you know Wirtz was talking to me?
I was in his office in the coat closet. I heard what he said, and I got the note you sent him, the one he tore up and threw in the wastebasket.
You got that note?
The cops have it now.
Okay, Howard, he told me. Don't come around here shooting off your face about me killing Debbie Ames. You killed her. You got her asking about me, didn't you? You stole the note that Wirtz thought she took. You killed her, you snooping bum.
You got a crooked brain if I ever saw one, Coggy, I snarled.
You want me to let him have it right now? The man in the corner asked. He talks too damn much.
So do you, Coggy said. If he gave that note to the cops, this place may be getting hot. I don't want to stay here much longer, and I don't want any blood around the place after we go. Take care of him. We'll figure out what to do with him later.
You're about my size, Coggy. I'll take you on man-to-man. Fists, knives, or pistols, I suggested.
Get out, he said. You're wasting my time.
You heard what the man said,
the man in the shadow growled.
Get up and get going toward the door.
I didn't know how many minutes I'd left in my life, but I wasn't going to waste any of them arguing. I opened the door and stepped out with the other gunmen at a discreet distance behind me. There was no place for me to run or duck. All I could do was walk straight ahead. We came to the room where I'd spent the night.
Go on in,
my follower said. What time of day is it? I asked. Morning or night?
Almost noon, he said. Relax and enjoy yourself. We won't be going out of here until it gets darker. I never did know why the boss liked this place. It's too damn public.
How am I going to get it? I wondered. You going to starve me to death?
Ha, he said. That's a good one. Starve you to death. Why, you want something to eat?
Sure, I want something to eat.
You got any money?
I reached into my pocket and got my billfold and took out $5. This ought to buy the best in the house, I told him. Give me some roast beef on rye, 2 of them, and 2 pints of milk.
Want a quart of milk, do?
No, I said. When I drink out of quart bottles, I always get milk up my nose. 2 pints is what I want.
You're the boss, he said. Get in the room while I lock the door. You can drop the money on the floor.
He hadn't come closer than 10 feet all the time we were talking.
In the room, and pull the door shut behind you, Mac.
It was a heavy door with heavy hinges and a solid-sounding lock, and when it was shut, I knew I was behind it to stay. The room itself had obviously been built as a storage space, and it was as solid as a bank vault. I was in it, and that was that. There wasn't any use in setting fire to the bed or short-circuiting the electrical system, or anything else that I could think of. All I could do was try to get my guard close enough to get a hand or a foot on him, and pray that I wouldn't make too much noise while I was doing it. If the milk came in bottles, they would be good weapons, either for throwing or cutting. I could throw cartons, too. I smoked 3 cigarettes while I was thinking this over and waiting for my chow, and then I had to stop. The ventilation wasn't good, and the room was getting so full of smoke that I couldn't see. There was a knock on my door and the sound of a key in the lock.
Take it easy, my guard's voice said. Count up to 10 before you push it open or you're shot. The stuff is out here in the hall.
He had retreated to a safe distance and was sitting in the chair where I had first seen him, his right hand dangling down at his side with a Luger pistol in it.
Your change is under the sandwiches, he said.
Well, I was going to let you keep it. I looked at him. I'm beginning to think that I won't need it. There were 2 sandwiches on a paper plate on the deck, and 2 pint bottles of milk.
You might want some supper,
he suggested. He got to thinking that one over and started smiling.
Or even tea this afternoon.
I unwrapped one of the sandwiches and began eating it, standing there in the hall with my back to the wall. I opened 1 pint bottle of milk, took a drink, and put the bottle back on the floor. I scratched the back of my head. He kept watching me with the Luger dangling from his hand. I took another bite from the sandwich, picked up the bottle of milk, drank from it, and then scratched the back of my head while I still had the milk bottle in my hand. He still watched me, and the Luger still dangled. "You ever in the Navy?" I asked him. "Nope, Army." He tilted back in his chair. "Guess I still am in the Army. I left before they could discharge me." "Why'd you do that?" "Well, they was actually going to court-martial me. That's why I left." "Probably the Army still has a reward out for you." I picked up the fresh sandwich. "As soon as I get out of here, I'm liable to turn you in and collect it." I picked up the milk bottle, the unopened one. "That's a hot one," he laughed. "I ain't worried." He should have been. My right hand with the full bottle in it went back as if to scratch my head, and then I threw it and hit him squarely in the middle of his face, right between the eyes. He never even got his hands up. I was across the 10 feet that separated us and had my fingers around his throat before he could make a sound. The Luger dropped to the deck. I grabbed it and stuck it under my belt. One look at my guard's face showed me he would have trouble patching up his face. I dragged him into the room where I had been and shut the door. He could stay there until I could call the Army and start collecting the reward for turning in a deserter. But in the meantime, there were other things I had to do. Coggy was first. I checked the safety on the Luger and ran softly down the hall to the door of the room where he had been, turned the knob and kicked it open. The room was empty. I cursed and started checking other rooms. Most of them were locked, but those that were unlocked were empty too. The noise of an elevator motor caught my attention, and I turned toward a door under a dirty dim red light. The noise of the motor stopped, the door slid open, and a man stepped out. He saw me and swung a pistol out of an armpit holder. He snapped a shot over my head as I fired at him. "Look out, Coggy!" he yelled. My shot caught him in the shoulder and knocked him up against the door frame as the outside sliding door slowly closed. He tried to raise his gun to take another shot at me, but the door pinned him fast with such force that he dropped the pistol on the deck. At the same time, I saw the elevator start to go down. Suddenly, the man let out a terrible scream. The top half of the elevator cage was closing down on the lower half of his body. I ran and tried to open the outer sliding door, but it was jammed fast beyond my strength. I remembered what someone had said the night before. You gotta be careful of it every minute. The screams continued, shriller than anything I had ever heard in my life. Then they stopped, and the quiet was worse than the screaming had been. I took the man's arm and pulled. He came out, and the sliding door slipped all the way shut. There wasn't any use wasting time on him, so I tried a couple more doors until I found one leading to the stairs and started running down to the bottom. When I got there, Coggy was gone. There wasn't anybody else around that I could find. The janitor wasn't in his room, but I did manage to find a telephone and call the 17th Detective Squad. Eddie Zimmer was there as usual. "Eddie," I shouted. "Eddie, come the hell up here and get me. Coggy got away, but I got one of them locked in a room, and the other one got chopped in half in the elevator. Damn it, man, hurry."
"Easy, Chief. Slow down to 1/3 ahead, and everything will be all right. Just where are you, first of all?"
I don't know. They slipped me a Mickey last night, and when I woke up I was here with Coggy. It's a loft."
"What's the number of the telephone you're using?"
He snapped. I told him and heard him repeat it to somebody else.
"Stay where you are till we get there."
Then his voice softened a little.
"Are you all right, Rex?"
"Yeah, I'm okay, but you better have a strong stomach when you come in."
"Are you safe?"
"I got a gun. You better sing out when you come in, 'cause I'm a little trigger-happy."
"All right," he said. "I've got the address now. I'll be right up. But there'll probably be several squad cars around the place before I get there. Don't do anything rash. Don't shoot anybody wearing a badge."
I hung up and went out to the elevator and found the nearest door to the street. It was just a usual kind of street in a warehouse and small factory district. I couldn't see the street sign on the corner from the doorway. There was a good amount of traffic, and I wondered how Coggy, covered with blood, could have gotten away. For all I knew, he might still be in the building. That idea gave me the jumps, and I turned around and faced back into the building looking for cover. I didn't want Coggy to see me first. A voice from outside called,
"Hey, Chief! Chief Howard!"
And I recognized Eddie's voice and called back. "Come on in. So far as I know, the place is clear, but Coggy may be somewhere around. This is a lonely damn lash-up. It's good to have company." Eddie came in with 4 detectives. They all had guns in their hands and their badges pinned to their outer clothes.
"This place is surrounded, and there's cops on the roof. What's the story?"
"Jesus, Mary and Joseph,"
one of the cops said as we came around the corner to the elevator.
"It's the legs of a man."
Another cop went over in the corner and threw up. Quickly I told Eddie what had happened. He turned to the cop who had puked in the corner.
"Go find out and put in a call, and have somebody call out that Filipino cook in the Admiral's restaurant. Go on, Chief. What's next?"
They drove me up here, and 2 men carried me in. I couldn't get my eyes open. I heard voices, but not too well, so I'm not too sure whether the men who brought me in are the same ones that were here this morning or not.
Where are they now? Is this one of them?
Yeah, there's another guy who's suffering from his face being full of pieces of milk bottle. We better walk up. I don't trust that elevator.
My God, Eddie said. You're a cool one, all right. What do you have in your veins, ice water?
Salt water, I said. Stop kidding. I'm in a state of shock. I'll go to pieces in about an hour and want to sleep for a week, just like after a battle. How do you react?
I shake, he admitted. I shake for about 2 hours, steady. Hey, Sam, he said to one of the cops. Let's get some men together and start up the stairs. Enough so we can leave one on each floor. If any brass shows up, tell them I've gone up to... how far do we have to go up, Rex?
4 or 5. I didn't count when I was running down. It was 4, which was next to the top. The upper half of the guard's body was still lying where I'd pulled it.
Nothing we can do for this one, Eddie Zimmer said. Did you say there's another?
In the room down this way. I slammed the door shut, and I don't think he could get out. I took his gun away from him. He may have another, for all I know, but I don't think he can see to shoot it straight. We walked up to the door, and from the outside we could hear the sounds of someone moaning. Eddie banged on the door with the flat of his hand.
This is the law, he shouted. We're coming in. You can't get away, so play it smart, mister. Don't try anything. We're coming in.
He turned the latch and kicked the door open. The other guard was lying on the floor, his face and eyes covered with blood.
Jesus, Eddie said. One of you guys better go and get the medics.
I'll go, a young detective said. I need fresh air. And then suddenly the entire building began to fill up with cops. There were cops in uniform and cops in civilian clothes. There were rookie cops and cops with inspector shields. There were doctors and district attorneys. And they were all talking to me at once. A man in a white jacket came up to Eddie Zimmer. We're going to take this guy that got hit in the eyes down to the hospital now, he said. You can't talk anyhow. He's gone completely off his rocker.
You find anything that might tell us who he is, Doc?
This wallet was in his pocket. Got some money and a hotel credit card in it.
What's the name on the card? Did you look?
Yeah. It's Joseph Gillian. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 8. About a dozen cops turned and looked at me. They knew who Joseph Gillian was just as well as I did. I leaned against the wall. One of the cops turned to another and whispered in a loud voice, "That's his own brother-in-law." "I thought his brother-in-law was shot up in the Bronx a couple of nights ago." "Maybe his sister was married more than once," the first cop said. "Let me out of here," I said. "I'm tired."
"Afraid you can't go yet, Chief,"
Eddie Zimmer said, glancing to a lieutenant for confirmation.
"We need some more dope about Coggy. Is that all there is to his name?"
"That's all I ever heard."
"What does he look like?"
Good-looking Italian type."
"How tall?"
He was sitting down when I saw him.
"Would you know him if you saw him again?"
"I'd know him if I just saw his eyes."
"We'll want you to describe him to an artist so we can get a picture of him drawn up," Eddie said. "Do you have any idea where he went?"
He was in the elevator with the guy who got chopped in half, I said. At least the guy yelled, "Look out, Coggy," as I shot at him. Coggy must have been in the elevator. Maybe they had been out for some lunch.
"Somebody must have seen him leaving the building. He sure must have been covered with blood."
"Maybe he's still in the building," I suggested. "We're searching it inch by inch now," a tall inspector said. "The janitor came back from lunch and we're using his keys."
"Does the janitor know the guys we got?" somebody asked.
"The rooms up here were rented to the Cog Corporation. The janitor doesn't know what they did. They never got much mail." "Bet you a sawbuck they weren't a legal corporation," an assistant district attorney said. Nobody took him up. They finally let me go at about 5:30. A police car drove me home, and a sergeant came up to the apartment with me to check the joint before I moved in. "I'd stay here if I was you," he warned me. "I'd just stay here until we catch that Coggy guy. You ought to be able to stand it for a couple of days." "The next couple of days I'm spending right in that little old sack of mine," I told him, catching up on my shut-eye. He shoved off, and I checked all the locks behind him. I was sleepy as my shock wore off, but I was hungry and thirsty, too. I can't remember that I ever did get around to eating anything. A couple of stiff shots of bourbon, and I was so sleepy that I went to sleep sitting up in a chair. I was still there the next morning, sitting slumped down and stiff and creaky. It was the telephone that woke me up. Eddie Zimmer was calling.
"You still in the rack, Chief?"
he asked.
"You ought to be about slept out by now."
A smart sailor gets all the sleep he can when he can, I reminded him. You never can tell when you might tie into something on the beach and never get any sleep at all. What's new this morning?
"Nothing much. We didn't find Coggy. Not hide nor hair of him. Not even a fingerprint that was any good to us. We tried to trace who it was that rented the rooms in the first place, and it wasn't any of those three. The janitor collected the rents in cash."
How's my brother-in-law, the one with no eyes?
"We're checking his fingerprints now, and also the guy who got cut in half."
That brother-in-law of mine told me he was over the hill from the army. When you find out who he is, see if there's a deserter's reward out for him. If there is, I want it.
"Wouldn't you like to cut a couple of pounds of skin off him, Rex?"
Nope. I just don't like deserters. I want the reward, and I hope the Army court-martials him and throws him in the brig for the next 30 years. I'm not the least bit sorry for the son of a bitch. He would have killed me last night if I hadn't got him first. That's the chance you take in his business. What else do you know?
"Nothing much. I guess you know you're a sitting duck for Coggy. He's probably pretty mad at you this morning."
Nuts, I said.
"He might have someone take a shot at you almost any time."
I don't think he's much of a guy for pot-shotting around the streets. I think he likes things done pretty neat, without much noise or commotion. I'll take my chances.
"I'd like to give you a bodyguard, Rex."
That'll be the day, I hooted. When the Chief Master-at-Arms of the Saratoga and the Chief Master-at-Arms at Treasure Island needs a bodyguard, that'll be the day they carry me out in a wagon. I never needed a bodyguard when a couple thousand sailors were trying to get my fanny in a bite. Why should I need one now?
"Those sailors weren't trying to kill you, Chief."
I'll take my chances. I'll take coffee only from the hands of my friends from now on. What does the Filipino say, by the way?
"Nothing. He doesn't know anything."
Check his bank accounts against his income tax returns. That will get him talking. When you find out how much he's cheated the government out of, let me know so I can claim that reward, too. Now I gotta make myself some breakfast. Come on down and have a cup of joe with me.
"What if I could, Chief, but I got work to do."
Bet I find Coggy before you do.
"I hope you don't," he said. "Goodbye."
I wasn't planning to go right out and look for Coggy. What I wanted to do was rest and catch up on some business deals I had neglected during the past couple of weeks. My bankroll wasn't getting as fat as I liked to see it, which meant that I had to go to work. My mail had been piling up, and I hadn't even been opening it, let alone answering it. Now I started to catch up, and it took me the rest of the day, most of it on the telephone, to make appointments that would keep me busy for some time to come. Keep me busy, and keep the wolf from the door. That night I packed the little .32 in my pocket and was wondering where to go for chow when I remembered Pete Brubaker, the old shipfitter who ran the parking lot up in the 50s. He had wanted me to come to chow with him and his wife, and I thought maybe I'd give him a call. I looked in the classified directory under parking lots until I located that one and gave it a ring. Old Pete answered and seemed glad enough to hear from me again. Said he had been reading about me in the paper, which wasn't unlikely because I was on a lot of front pages. His wife was off at some kind of church affair that night. I asked him to come down to the apartment, but he was working late because of one of his helpers. His night man was on leave. We finally settled that I was to come to his place 2 nights from then for a big feed. His wife, he said, ran a pretty fair mess. So that left me without any orders, and I took a run over to 3rd Avenue, just to look around and see if there was any trouble I could get into. Not real trouble, you understand, just fooling around kind of trouble. The place I got into was a pretty high-class joint with a long bar where people were sitting on fancy, squashy stools, drinking whiskey on the rocks at $1 a slug. In the back was a room full of booths and tables and smoke, and a beat-up old type playing a piano. There was also a girl who came out and sang now and then, but she stood beside the guy at the piano, and there was so much smoke around the place that I couldn't get a good look at her. She had red hair and a thick lower lip that hung down when she sang. There wasn't anything wrong with the way she was built. I went back to my drink. Pretty soon I got talking to a man who had been a lieutenant in the Coast Guard during the war, and to his wife, and we were all telling sea stories. The bartender had a son who had been on the Boxer and was sure the kid would know who I was. That was a nice connection to make because my drinks got a little bit bigger. The 4 of us were batting the breeze when a girl came over to the bar and sat down beside me.
"Give me a Coke, Tommy," she said to the bartender. "Gosh, but I am tired."
I looked her way just to see who it was. It was the red-headed singer. "Hi," I said. "I'm glad you came out of that smoke screen so us folks in the front room can see you. You look as pretty as you sing."
"Thanks."
she said. There wasn't any life in her voice. She sipped at her Coke, and I went back to talking to the lieutenant. I told the story about the captain who had the wooden anchor and 10 fathom of wooden chain made, and he told about the time he had tried to take command of the Kowloon ferry in a high gale and ended up in a British brig. That called for another round of drinks. Then I told a story about a sailor, a friend of mine, who was trying to get next to this girl he met somewhere in Italy and ended up in bed with her and in the same room with her parents, her big brother, and 2 cousins. This one even got a chuckle from the redhead beside me. But then she got up and walked away. "When's she gonna sing again?" I asked Tommy. He looked at his watch. "Tomorrow, I guess. She's finished for tonight. Darn near time to close up the joint." "She here every night?" I asked. "She's been here for a month." "What does she do besides singing here?" If you find out," he said, "you might let me know." We closed the place up and all went home. The next morning I was up early and went out to Long Island City to consult with some people about a fairly big job. It called for a good deal of organization, and I had to hire some reliable people for them and train the people when I got them hired. I couldn't do it all in one day, of course. There was a lot of paperwork connected with it, and I cooked my own supper at home while I was pushing the pencil around. The next day there was more work, and that evening I took a bus up to Pete Brubaker's apartment and met his wife. She was a pleasant woman, and she had been cute and pretty when he had married her in Long Beach when they were both just out of high school. They had 2 boys who were grown and married and had children of their own. Of course, I had to look at all the photographs, and I guess sailors' families collect more darn photographs than any other people in the world. But then they knock around the world so much that they're always hungry for a home and roots somewhere, and their family photographs help in their loneliness. Nell Brubaker served a good chow, too, and I had an enjoyable evening. Of course, they asked me a million questions about the murders and all the stuff I was mixed up in. Pete was especially interested because he had known Wirtz and knew Debbie by sight. The Brubakers also lived just about a block and a half from the loft building where I had my brief encounter with Coggy and his 2 henchmen. I had to tell them all about that, but I was gentleman enough to leave out most of the gory details. We got to talking about the Navy before the war and the days on the Black Hawk, which was reputed to have 9 decks and a straw bottom. The straw bottom because she leaked so much. The Black Hawk stayed with the Asiatic Squadron, making their repairs and taking care of their mechanical troubles, and became a legend among all the tenders of the fleet. It was usually said that all Black Hawk sailors were a little crazy, and there may have been more than a grain of truth in the saying. It was well after midnight when I said goodbye to Pete and Nell, and as I walked down the ladder I got the idea that it would be interesting to see the loft building. The police guard would still be there, I was sure, and maybe I could fan the air with him for a while and see if he knew anything that I didn't know. It wasn't far, only a block and a half. The night was warm, but not uncomfortably so. The sky was clear and the stars were out. There didn't seem to be any cop around the building when I got there, but lights were on inside and the door wasn't locked. I walked in. Somebody had cleaned up around the elevator and repainted the inside of the cage, which made it look better than the last time I had seen it. I stepped in the elevator and pushed the button to close the door and got to the top deck. No sooner did I step out than the door shut behind me and the elevator started down. Evidently somebody else had pushed the control. But if there was a bell or a buzzer, it hadn't rung. I guess it was the cop on duty. The floor I was on didn't look familiar to me. Then I remembered that Coggy's hangout had not been on the top deck but on the one below. I knew someone was using the elevator, so I took the stairs and walked down to the next deck. The elevator came up and stopped just a moment or 2 after I arrived. I expected to see a cop walk out. Who should it be but Smiley, and another man whom I hoped was Piggy. "Gentlemen," I said happily, pulling out my .32 revolver and wishing it was the Magnum. "What a pleasure to meet you again. Give us a smile, Smiley, so I can see what's left of your pretty white teeth. And keep those hands out where I can see them, before you get yourselves shot in the kneecaps, lads." Smiley called me an unprintable name. "Who's your friend, Smiley?" I asked him. "My name's Pode," the well-remembered voice with the rocks and gravel in it said. "You got nothing on me. What is this, a stick-up?" "Aye, Piggy," I said. "I remember meeting you. Don't you remember me, the night your toothless friend here used a piece of wire across my back 60 times? This is our big chance to try it all over again." "Put down the gun," he said, "and put up your dukes. I'll take you on any time, Buster." He was about 5 feet 10 inches tall and a full half fathom across the shoulders. It would be a fair match. "Don't make me laugh," I said. "Each of you guys has a shiv or a gun on you. All I have to do is put mine away and both of you are on me together.
and I'm dead. I'll fight you fair, Pode said. I'll beat you to a pulp, too.
Keep Smiley out of it, I demanded.
The hell with keeping me out of, Smiley yelled. Let's take him, Piggy. Let's kill the son of a bitch.
He put his head down, gave a roar, and charged toward me. He was so mad he didn't care whether I shot him or not. Oh, I shot him all right, just like I said I would, right through the kneecap. He stumbled and pitched on his face. I jumped back against the wall in case Piggy was coming in on me at the same time, but Piggy was smart. His hands were still up and he hadn't moved.
You had that one coming to you, Smiley, he said, without an ounce of sympathy in his voice. If you had done like I said, I'd have beaten this guy down, and then you could have had a chance at him. Now you got a busted knee. You'll never walk straight again, you poor sap.
I'll fight you if you get him out of the way, I said to Pode. But don't make any bad moves. I'll shoot you just as quick as I shot him. I began to wonder where the cop on duty was and why he hadn't heard my shot and come running. Piggy reached over and grabbed Smiley and lifted him from the floor with no more effort than it would have taken to lift a child. He carried him across the deck and put him in the elevator cage. Then he pushed the door-closing button and stepped out with his back toward me.
I'm dropping my gun, he said.
An automatic clattered to the deck.
I'm taking off my coat.
He wriggled out of his jacket and threw it in the corner, but he still kept his hands up. Then he turned around.
I hear you're pretty tough. How tough are you without a gun in your hand?
Roll up your sleeve so I can make sure you don't have a knife strapped to your arm, I ordered.
What do you think I am, a sneak? I don't fight with knives.
He rolled up his sleeves. His arms were clear. I took off my coat, loosened my collar, put my revolver on the deck, and gave it a kick. Pode watched it go, and his eyes lit up. He charged toward me with his left cocked up in front of his face and his right hand swinging. It was easy. I stepped inside the right, blocking it with my left, and hit him under the heart with my own right. He stopped and lowered his guard, and I caught him with a left and a right to the chin that knocked him back 2 feet. He shook his head and charged in again, but I drove him back, clubbing him on the sides of his jaw to keep from breaking my knuckles. He staggered away from me, and I sank a punch into his midsection that knocked him against the elevator door. The elevator started to go down. I thought I had him licked, but he came back, crafty hatred in his beady black eyes. This time he managed to get in close, in spite of the punishment I inflicted on him as he came, and wrapped his bear-like arms around me. With a roar that echoed through the halls of that old lofty building, he lifted me from my feet and threw me down on the deck, and then dove for my throat. All thought of a fair fight was gone from his mind. Maybe I had knocked it out. I grabbed his fingers as they closed around my neck and got one in each hand. They popped like little firecrackers as I bent them back and broke them. When he screamed and loosened his grip, I pulled his hands loose and rolled over on my belly. He rolled over with me, and with my one hand I clubbed him behind the ear and he went limp. I got to my knees and then to my feet and rubbed my neck. It had only been a minute, but it was close enough. He was stirring on the floor, groaning and rubbing the side and back of his head. "You're lucky I didn't kill you, Piggy," I told him. "You better learn to fight, either fair or dirty, before you try it again. You ever try to choke me again, and I'll do worse than break your fingers." A thought flashed through my mind. "You didn't strangle Debbie Ames, did you?"
"Nah," he said. "I didn't."
I had a hunch he was lying. "Get up," I said, "and get out of here unless you want to fight some more."
"I can't," he said. "You broke my mitts, you son of a bitch. I'll get you when they heal, don't worry."
He looked at the elevator.
"Where's Smiley? Where'd he go?"
He was on his knees by now.
"What's that noise?"
It sounded like someone hammering, and it was coming out of the elevator shaft. "Oh, that elevator sticks," I said. "It's probably stuck with Smiley in it, and he's pounding to get out. What are you guys doing here, anyhow?"
"We came to see a guy," he said.
"If you came to see Coggy, you got here too late. He left in a hurry a couple of days ago. One of his pals got caught in that same elevator and got cut in half. Another one got hit with a milk bottle. He's blind now."
"Did you do it?"
he asked. He was on his feet now, staggering toward his coat. "I helped," I said. All of a sudden he swayed and toppled forward, and I reached out to grab him. He grabbed me instead and pulled me down with one hand while he reached for his gun on the floor with the other. My hand went for his gun at the same time, and there we lay, wrestling each other with a gun between us. He had my wrist in an iron grip, and I couldn't get any leverage to break it. He was getting the better of me on the gun deal, too, because he was stronger than I am. Little by little, he twisted the gun out of my grip. His hand was around the barrel, so I suddenly let go. He couldn't shoot me with the gun in that position, but he could club me, and he did, right across the forehead over my eye. The stars flew around inside my head, but before he could club me again, I jabbed him in the throat. That took the fight out of him. I rolled away, breaking the grip on my wrist, and I took his gun with me. He had both hands at his own throat now, struggling to get his breath. I took his coat and ripped it into strips and tied his feet together, and then his hands. He didn't struggle. All the fight had gone out of him. All I could do was gasp for breath. I pushed all the buttons but couldn't get the elevator to work, so I collected my coat and the 2 guns and walked down. There still wasn't any cop anywhere around, and the janitor didn't answer when I beat on his door, so I went outside. It was as dark as the inside of a sea bag, and I had no idea where to get a cop. I fired 3 shots in the air and settled back to wait. It didn't take long. A prowl car came wheeling around the corner on 2 wheels and skidded to a stop. 2 cops jumped out with their guns in their hands. "You hear anyone shooting around here?" one of them asked. "Yeah," I said. "I was shooting." "You? What the hell for? Stick your hands out at your sides where we can see 'em." "I was trying to get a cop." "You got 2. What'd you want a cop for?" "I got 2 guys you may be looking for," I said. "One is stuck in the elevator with a bullet hole in his knee. The other is up on the 4th deck, tied up. The one tied up may be the guy who strangled Deborah Ames. And if that's so, you got a good pinch. The commissioner might promote you to detective." "And who the hell are you?" "I know this guy," the other cop said. "He's Rex Howard. He was in that big powwow in this building a couple of days ago." "That's right," I said. "Do me a favor and get the 17th Squad on the radio and tell them to tell Eddie Zimmer that I'm here." "We can't call them direct," he said. "I'll get our desk to get in touch with them, though." The other cop and I waited a couple of minutes until the cop who was using the radio came back. "Roger," he said. "There's another car on the way. Who's going up, or shall we wait for help?" "I'll go up," I said. "I don't think Piggy could get away, but I don't trust him alone too long. One of you guys could come with me." We went up the steps together. Piggy was still there. He was still having trouble with his breathing. The elevator was still stuck, but the hammering had stopped. Then some more cops came in and took a lot of statements from me and asked me a million questions. One of these days I'm going to stop getting into situations. I'm just damn tired of answering questions, that's all. The elevator was stuck, but good. Smiley wasn't making any noise. The emergency squad finally came and pried one of the outer doors of the shaft open above the stalled car. "Gee," somebody said. "What's that smell? Gasoline?" "Carbon tet," somebody answered. "Wonder how the hell it got into this elevator shaft." That question answered itself when they finally got into the car. The emergency squad people were wearing gas masks by then. Smiley had tried to batter his way out of the stalled car with the only loose object he could find, a fire extinguisher filled with carbon tetrachloride. He had broken the extinguisher wide open, and the concentrated carbon tet fumes killed him. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. "I'm gonna throw you in jail, Rex," Eddie Zimmer told me the next morning. He had come down to the apartment before I finished shaving. "Just as sure as God made little green apples, I'm gonna throw you in jail." "What for?" I washed the lather off my face and slapped a handful of bay rum across it. "What have I done now?" "Is there any good reason why you had to go walking into that damn building last night?" "The door was open, the lights were on, and I was there. You can't ask for a better reason than that. Come out in the galley and have a slug of mud." "Don't care if I do," he admitted. There were big hollows under his eyes, and he had lost a good 2 pounds since I had first seen him, just after Janice died, and he couldn't afford it. He looked dog-tired, the poor cop. I poured 2 big cups full of coffee and passed him the cream and sugar. "Instead of me going to jail, Eddie, why don't you just come down here and stay? You look like you needed a rest more than I do." "That's for damn sure," he smiled. "You don't think I'm doing much work, do you?" "At first I didn't," I told him. "But now I've kind of changed my mind. Where were you last night, though? I didn't see you up at the loft building." "Running down a lead on your latest brother-in-law. His name isn't Joe Gillian. You were right about him being on the lam from the Army. You'll get your reward, I guess." "You get him to talk?" "Nothing you can make sense of, Chief. He just blabbers, off his nut. The docs don't know whether he'll ever come around or not. I'm trying to find out what he's been doing since he left the Army. And maybe get a line on Coggy that way." "Did you get anything out of Piggy? That guy I was wrestling with last night?" "Not a thing. He says he was just going along with his friend Smiley, and Smiley wanted to drop into that building to see a man. Everything that happened was a big surprise to him." How does he explain the fact that he was packing a rod? I asked.
He says Smiley gave it to him to carry. Eddie finished his first cup of joe, and I poured him another. He doesn't seem to have any police record that we can find. He can't talk too much either.
Why not?
The doctor's got a tube in his throat. He's got something busted in his windpipe. Without the tube, he'd die.
That's good, I said. What else do you know? How about some bacon and eggs? I'll have them whipped up in a couple of minutes.
No thanks, Chief. I gotta go. I'm working on a couple of angles in this case now that look like they would surprise a lot of people. Thanks for the coffee.
Before you go, I said, tell me just one thing. Where was the cop in that building last night? For a while there, I needed him.
We pulled him out, Eddie said. We wanted to leave the place wide open so maybe some of Coggy's friends would walk in. We didn't expect a parade. And remember this, Rex Howard. The next time you walk into any place you don't have any business to be, or hit anybody at all, or shoot anybody, I'm going to throw you in jail.
Maybe I should get lost.
You should.
His hand was on the doorknob.
But then who would get rid of all these bums for us?
I finished my breakfast and put on a tie and a coat and went out to call on clients. It took me all day. That evening, I had some chow at a little restaurant near the apartment and then bought the newspapers and went up to my room to read them. The headlines on the second page of the first paper I read gave me a jolt. Strangler identified. Saw hospital patient and Hall's surprise witness tells cops. The story went on to tell that a man in Debbie Ames's apartment building had seen another man come out of Debbie's door at just about the time she was supposed to have been killed. This man, who lived in another apartment, had been visiting a female friend on the floor where Debbie lived. He had just been sticking his head out his friend's door to see if the coast was clear when Debbie's door had opened and a man walked out. Now the witness, after keeping his mouth closed for a long time because he didn't want his wife to know he had been off the reservation, had gone to the cops and told them what he'd seen. He described the guy, and the police let him look at a lot of pictures, including one of Piggy Pode that they had taken and slipped into the collection. He picked Piggy out immediately. Then they took him to Bellevue and let him look at Piggy when Piggy was full of sedatives and fast asleep, and he swore Piggy was the guy. I read the story and began fidgeting to get over to Bellevue myself and get my hands on Pode again. But I knew that if I did, Eddie Zimmer would have me in jail for sure. Instead, I finished the papers and walked over to the nightclub on 3rd Avenue where I had been a couple of nights before. This time I paid some attention to the sign out front, which had an almost full-size picture of the red-headed singer in scanty attire. Her name was Marie O'Connell, the sign said, and she was billed as exciting and sultry. What I needed was a little sultry singing, so I went in and sat down at the bar. The bartender recognized me and wanted to talk.
"Say," he said, "I didn't spot you when you were in here the other night, Mr. Howard. Gee, I'm sorry. I seen your name and your picture in all the papers. I should have known you. What are you drinking?"
"Bourbon on the rocks," I said. "You don't need to apologize. I don't particularly want people to recognize me. I haven't done anything except watch my sister fall over dead in a saloon."
"Oh, that was a tough one," he said, putting a glass full of whiskey on the bar in front of me. "But you were also in a big fight last night, I read. The one guy confessed he croaked the other girl, too, didn't he?"
"The way I read it in my paper, somebody said they saw him coming out of the girl's apartment. He hasn't confessed to anything yet, so far as I know."
"And how about the guy who got cut in half in the elevator, huh? That must have been something to see."
Just then, some other people came in and sat down at the bar, and the bartender had to move away and serve them. A good thing, too. I'd gone into the place for a little peace and quiet and sultry singing, and all I was getting was a bent ear. Now the nightclub began to fill up, and the piano player started to string his chords together. In about 20 minutes, Marie O'Connell came out and sang for a while. There wasn't as much smoke in the room as there would be later, so I could get a better look at her. Her most prominent feature was her wide red mouth with the heavy lower lip, which wasn't unattractive at all. It kind of got me, somehow or other. I got to wondering what it would be like to kiss a girl with a lip like that. She had eyes, brown ones. She had a straight nose that might have been a little long, but not too much. It went well with her long body and her slim legs. The pale blue dress she was wearing was high in the back and had long sleeves, but it was open down the front to the valley between her full breasts. The skirt fitted tightly around her flat midship section and down to her knees where it flared out a little. She was quite a dish. She sang pretty sultry, too, just as advertised. The bartender came over and took my glass and refilled it. "Is that Marie O'Connell?" I asked him.
That's what she calls herself," he said. "She might be Minnie Ovalinski, for all I know. She's a queer one."
"What do you mean?"
Oh, she comes here and sings and then goes and never gives any of us the time of day. Hello, she says when she comes in. Good night, she says when she leaves.
What's wrong with that? I asked. Sounds like a good way to keep out of trouble.
You'd think she'd be civil to customers. It ain't good for business.
I'd like to meet her, I said.
She'll be over to get a Coke when she finishes singing, he said. That's all she ever drinks, Coke.
Sure enough, she came over. I'd been saving the seat beside me by keeping my hand on it in spite of the dirty looks I got from some of the customers, and it was the only place left for her to sit. Hello, Marie, I smiled. I didn't get much of a chance to talk to you the last time I was in here. Too many people. I came back alone tonight just to hear you sing. She gave me a flat, uninterested look. I certainly like to watch you sing, I went on, as well as listen to you. You look kind of like a girl I met once in Rome after the war. She was studying for the opera. I think she was shorter than you. You never sang in Rome, did you?
Was that the girl who took you to bed with her whole family?
There was the beginning of a smile on her face. Oh, no, I assured her. That was 2 other people. I wasn't even there. I shook my head sadly. I guess it wasn't you.
I know who you are, she said suddenly. You're Rex Howard, aren't you? The guy whose sister got poisoned.
I'm the guy. Can I buy you a drink?
You can buy me a Coke, she said. Tommy, bring me a Coke and put it on Mr. Howard's bill. Your girlfriend got killed too, didn't she?
Yes, I said. She did. The bartender filled my glass, put the Coke down in front of her, and raised his eyebrows at me.
Did she love you very much?
The singer asked.
Were you good to her?
We didn't know each other very long, I said.
I'll bet you were good to her. Ugly guys like you are usually good to girls. You must be lonely now.
Yes, I said. I am. That's why I sit around in places like this. I'm glad you came over. I'm not as lonely now as I was when I came in.
Well, I have to go now, she said abruptly. She slipped off the stool. Thanks for the Coke.
Will you be back? I didn't want her to go. Her soft, serious kind of talk had kind of gotten under my skin. She gave me funny shivers up and down my back when she asked me whether I'd been good to Debbie.
I may be back,
she said, and walked away. Tommy, the bartender, came over and took the empty Coke glass away.
You win first prize, Mr. Howard, he said. That's the most she's talked to anybody at the bar since she's been here. You better look out.
Give me another drink, I said. I'm going in and sit down at a table. It was an hour before she came out to sing again, and she didn't see me at first. Finally, I caught her eye, but she didn't smile or look my way again until she had finished her last song. Then she came over and sat down.
Why did you come in here? She asked.
I thought you might come and sit down with me without the bartender looking down our throats.
Why should you want me to sit down with you?
Because I'm lonely, and because I've never seen a girl just like you, and because your lower lip makes me want to kiss you.
Would you want me to go home with you and go to bed with you?
Sometime, I said. Not right away, not tonight.
Not ever, Rex,
she said, looking at me with her deep brown eyes that seemed to have so little in them.
I don't think ever. I couldn't be sure that you'd be good to me. I'm not the kind of girl you're used to.
There's no hurry, I told her, reaching for her hand and holding it lightly in mine. Could I take you to dinner sometime and to a show or something?
I work nights, singing.
She smiled a little. Lunch?
Maybe. Maybe next week. We'll see.
She took her hand away. How do I find you? I asked. Do you have a telephone?
You'll see me around if you're in here. I'm not going anywhere else for a while. Good night now, Rex. I have to go.
Coming back, Marie?
I'll be back to sing again, but that's all. Good night.
There was something strange about the whole setup, and I didn't even begin to get it. There was no use sitting alone at the table anymore, so I got up and went back to the bar and got a fresh drink.
You are the champ, Mr. Howard, Tommy said. She's never sat down at a table before.
Where does she live, Tommy? I asked her. What's her telephone number? I pushed a $10 bill across the bar. He pushed it back.
I can't take your money, Mr. Howard. Lots of guys come in here and sit here and ask me that, and I just don't know. I can't even find out. Not even the manager of this joint has her phone number. And he don't like people to ask him about it. If you want to find out where she lives, you might try following her. But I bet it wouldn't work.
Why? What makes you say that?
Well, there was a detective that used to hang around here. He got a big lech for her and tried to follow her home. She went into some big apartment house, he told me, and just seemed to vanish into thin air. Another drink, Mr. Howard?
Yeah, I said. Give me one for the road. I drank it and paid my bill and went home, all mixed up. Maybe I was just lonely. Maybe this Marie O'Connell had something for me. Whatever it was, it didn't show in her eyes. That blank look she had, even when she was talking seriously, kinda haunted me. I'd have given anything to see those eyes light up just once. She was a queer one, like the bartender said. I knew I was going to see her some more if it was the last thing I did. The next couple of days were full of work. I didn't hear from Eddie Zimmer and didn't try to get in touch with him either. He had mentioned some surprising angles he was working on, and I wasn't going to bother him until he wanted me to know what they were. In the weeks since Janice died, I had slowly acquired a lot of respect for Eddie and the way he worked. It might take him a long time, but he'd surely get there. Evenings, I went around and listened to Marie sing. Sometimes we'd have a drink and a Coke at the bar. Sometimes she'd sit at a table and talk to me, maybe 20 minutes, but not much longer. I never knew what was going on in her mind behind her eyes. One Friday evening, I was sitting at the table waiting for her to come over and join me when she finished singing. I was smoking a cigarette as usual, and when she finally sat down across from me, my hand crept across hers. "How's it going tonight, Marie?" I asked her. "You want a Coke?"
I'm sick of Cokes. I hate this place. I hate New York.
"Where do you want to go?" I wondered. "Why don't you quit and work someplace else?"
I can't quit,
she said.
I've got a contract. If I quit, I'd never be able to get a job again. My kind of singing doesn't go over that well. I can't pick and choose.
"How much longer do you have here?"
God only knows, Rex. As long as my agent can keep me here, I guess. Years and years and years, it seems. Don't feel badly about it.
She smiled her little smile. "Why don't you just get out for the day? Let me take you to lunch." She leaned across the table.
Take me away tomorrow, Rex. Take me away all day. Somewhere out in the country where I won't have to smell New York or sit in a nightclub or look at all these horrible people. Will you do that?
"What time can you leave?" I asked eagerly. "Where will I meet you? We'll go for a ride, and I'll take lunch, and we won't have to put up with anybody but just us." For a moment, I thought there might be a light in those eyes of hers, but I was wrong.
I'll meet you on the corner of 2nd Avenue and 23rd Street at 8:30,
she said. "Bring in a bathing suit," I said. "We may get to a place where we can go swimming. I'll bring everything else. We'll have the most wonderful day we ever had." She smiled again.
You're awfully good to me, Rex. I like you. Good night now.
I had to hurry to get squared away by 8:30. First, I rented a car, and then I got on the telephone, trying to find friends who had places in the country they weren't using. That was a tough one, but I finally made it. A fellow by the name of Higgins, Stan Higgins, who had been a junior division officer on the Brooklyn when I first knew him, an executive officer on the Daily later, came through. "Come on over, Chief," he urged when he found out who was calling him. "Big party over here. Come on over and have a drink." "Can't make it, Commander," I said. "I'm trying to find a place in the country." "I have a place in the country," he said. "I know, that's why I'm calling you. You going to be up there tomorrow?" "Hell no," he said. "We got to stay in town for a wedding." "Would you mind if I dropped in with a friend and used your barbecue pit to cook my own steak?" "Not at all, Chief, not at all. Help yourself. Who is his friend?" "Girl I know, Commander. Wants to take a ride in the country." "You just take a ride up to our place, Chief. Use the swimming pool and everything else. Hey, Virginia," he called to his wife. "Where's the bathhouse key? Up in the country or here?" There was a pause. "It's under the mat of the front door, Howard. You know how to get up there?" "I was up there last summer, remember? I can find it. Thanks a hell of a lot, Commander." "There's blankets hanging in the garage," he said. "If you insist on a soft bed with sheets, break the door of the house down." "No, you've got me all wrong, Commander," I protested. "The hell I do. Good night, Chief. Sorry you can't come up for a drink." I was standing on the corner of 2nd Avenue and 23rd Street when she got out of her taxi. I made a note of the taxi number. She walked across the street toward me, and she looked very different from when she was singing at night. Softer somehow, and more like a normal human being. She was dressed in a going-to-the-country type of dress, white fluffy stuff with red and green polka dots on it. There was a fancy matching handkerchief around her chair, and she carried a big red patent leather bag. The car I had rented was parked at the corner, and I opened the door for her to get in. She looked in the back.
My gosh, Rex, what in the world do you have back there? We aren't going away for a month, you know. I have to be at work this evening.
"Just a few things," I said. "Charcoal, beer, a bottle of whiskey, Coke for you, an icebox full of ice, plus the beer and the Coke and a sirloin steak and butter and stuff. I also have spuds for bacon and salt and pepper and Lettuce for salad and salad dressing, and towels and bathrobes and sandals and suntan lotion. You name it, I've got it.
You're a nice guy, Rex. I'd like you. Be good to me.
I didn't get this being good to her stuff. She was a strange girl, and though she wasn't the same kind of girl that day as she was at night, she was still strange. We drove up into northern Connecticut. The countryside was green and beautiful, and she talked enthusiastically about it. Finally, we started to drive down the long lane that led to Stan Higgins' place, and she turned anxiously toward me.
Where are we going now, Rex? Whose house is this? Do they know I'm coming?
It's all right, I said. The place belongs to an old friend of mine.
I don't want to see anybody else, Rex. Turn around and go out, please.
There won't be anybody here but us, darling. It was the first time I had called her that. The people who own it have to stay in New York this weekend. We'll be all alone.
You didn't tell them I was coming, did you?
I wouldn't be likely to do that, I said. I'm not known to have a flapping lip.
I'm glad, she said. I'm glad there won't be anybody else here but just us, Rex. Just you and me.
The lane twisted around through the trees, and all of a sudden we came to the house, isolated from casual passers-by, and standing behind a wall of evergreens with a long view south across the Berkshire hills. It was enough to take your breath away if you weren't expecting it. Off on the east side of the house were the swimming pool and the barbecue. Like it, Marie? I asked, as I stopped the car in the driveway.
Oh, I love it, Rex. It's perfect. It's what I was wanting you to take me to, and I didn't know it.
Her hand crept into mine.
You're such a nice guy.
We got out and walked around. I found the key to the bathhouse under the mat, and she went in with her big patent leather bag. I took my swimming trunks out of the back of the car and followed her. The inside was divided into 2 sections, plainly marked for males and females. She must have changed in a terrible hurry because I heard her slam the door on her side and go running out before I had my shoes off. Then there was a splash in the pool, and she called,
Hurry up, Rex, it's wonderful.
There was more laughter in her voice than I had ever heard before. I came out of the bathhouse, and she was swimming on her back, gaily kicking and splashing and showing her even white teeth through a big smile. All of a sudden, she looked alive and beautiful. It was the first time I ever saw her that way. I dived in the pool and came up in front of her, and she was still on her back and kicked water in my face. I tried to grab her by one foot and pull her close to me, but she was quick as a fish in the water and kept away. I didn't try very hard, to tell the truth. It was fun to swim and dive and splash in the bright summer sun, and we still had the whole day ahead of us. Finally, I came up beside her and caught her by surprise as she looked the other way. My arms closed around her, and I pressed my mouth against those wide and wonderful lips that I had longed for since I first saw her. Nothing happened. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. Marie O'Connell was a strange girl. I kissed her in the swimming pool and nothing happened at all. I might as well have kissed the back of my own hand. I let her go. She laughed and swam away on her back, kicking water in my face. I didn't try to kiss her again. She was on one side of the pool and I was on the other, and she crawled out and sat down on the sunny side and draped a towel over her shoulders. I swam across, pulled myself out, and sat down beside her, shaking water out of my eyes. Having fun? I asked.
Oh, this is wonderful, Rex. Wouldn't it be nice to own a place like this? I can't think of anything more wonderful in all the world than just living like this all the time. Can you?
Not if you were around, I said. What would you like to drink? Beer? Coke?
A Coke would be nice, please. And Rex, if you have another towel, I could lie out here in the sun. Will you bring that too?
I got a beer for myself and the Coke and the towel for her and my cigarettes and went back to the side of the pool. She lay face downward on the towel, rising now and then to sip her Coke, but she still kept the other towel around her shoulders.
Tell me about yourself, Rex.
I'm just an old Navy type, that's all. I joined when I was 18 years old, and all I ever got, the Navy gave me. I served for 24 years, and I could have been a lieutenant commander if I'd taken a commission when it was offered to me, but I preferred being a chief. I've been everywhere in the world, I guess, and seen almost everything, but I never saw anything as wonderful or pretty as you lying there with your red hair in the sun.
Didn't you ever get married?
Only to the ocean. That's enough. I always figured to keep a man busy. It's the only wife I ever knew of that takes you back every time, no matter where you go or how long you stay away.
Don't you get lonely, Rex, being away from the sea?
I guess I'm lonely most of the time. I admitted. Here, let me take that empty Coke bottle before we break it and get glass all over the place. I reached across her back to get the bottle and managed to knock the towel off her shoulders as I did so. She grabbed at it, but not before I could see that she had been covering a huge black and purple bruise. What happened? I asked. Get hit by a truck?
I tipped over backwards in a chair, she said. Doesn't it look terrible? I'm so ashamed of it. I want to keep it covered all the time.
Don't feel bad about a little bitty bruise like that, I said. Take a look at this back of mine. I turned so she could see where I had been beaten. It wasn't as bad as it had been, but it was still black and yellow and scarred.
Oh,
she gasped, and her fingers reached out and touched my shoulder blade.
Oh, Rex, how did it happen?
I turned around again to answer her. She was sitting up now, one hand reaching out to touch my back, and deep in her eyes was a light such as I'd never seen before. A guy beat me with a piece of wire.
Did it hurt?
It hurt like hell. She leaned closer to me, stroking my back, and then she put her soft cheek against my shoulder. She was breathing so heavily I thought at first that she was crying. Wait a minute, I said. It isn't that bad. I'm going to live. I put my hand on her shoulder, and suddenly she threw her arms around me and was kissing me, hungrily and fiercely, and pulling me down beside her. She was almost passion incarnate, forcing her warm body against me, clawing at my back with her hands and moaning softly as I returned her kisses. Then it stopped as suddenly as it began. All at once it was gone. When I opened my eyes to learn what had happened, all I could see was the fire dying out in her eyes. Her arms relaxed. She rolled over on her side and looked at me with just the faintest trace of a smile. She didn't say a word. After a while, I sat up and lit a cigarette. Hungry? I asked. Want me to start up the fire?
I could eat a horse, she said. What are we waiting for?
She really had me hanging on the ropes at that point. I didn't know fore from aft, and was afraid to take a sounding because it might be deeper out than I had figured. You'd have thought the scene by the swimming pool had existed only in my imagination, and I would have agreed with you. Maybe I dreamed the whole thing. Maybe I went to sleep there in the sun and dreamed it. At any rate, the day went on just as if nothing had happened. I broiled a steak, baked some potatoes, mixed up a salad, and got out the Cokes and beer. She kept giving out with that serious talk of hers, as though she were trying to dig something out of me. But if I couldn't tell her what she was trying to find out, she didn't seem to mind. After we had eaten, we cleaned up the mess gear and policed the barbecue pit. Then we took showers in the bathhouse, got dried and dressed, and went for a walk. We walked down over the hill and through a wood and back along an old logging road. We didn't say much, but now and then our hands touched, and I'd have been happy if I had only been able to figure out those strange eyes of hers. And there was something else I couldn't figure. We drove back in plenty of time for her to change for her nightclub act, and as we came into Manhattan, I asked her if she wanted me to take her to the club. She said she wanted to go home first. I asked her where she lived, and she told me right off. Do you want me to drop you there?
Why, certainly, she said. Where else would you take me? To a subway station? Where do you usually take your dates?
But you wouldn't even tell me where you lived before.
Don't live in the past, she said.
She sure kept me guessing, but I drove to the front of her apartment house. Can I take you down to the joint when you're ready to go? I asked.
If you don't mind waiting while I fix my face and my nails. There isn't much for a man to do up there, but you could mix yourself a drink if you want one.
I told her that would be fine with me. In the lobby, she opened a mailbox that had the name O'Connell on it, and then we entered an elevator like a pair of respectable people and rode up to the 6th deck. She opened the door with a key, and we went in. There was a foyer, and to the right was one room, and to the left was another. She turned on a light in the foyer and led the way into the room at the right.
There you are, Mary O'Connell's parlor. There's a little excuse for a kitchen in that corner with some ice cubes in the refrigerator. There's a whiskey and glasses and things in the chest of drawers. Sit down on the sofa and look at the television and make yourself comfortable. Put your feet up if you feel like it. I'm going back and get fixed up.
I had a drink, smoked a couple of cigarettes, and looked at some magazines. After a while, she came back wearing a plain suit and carrying a hat box.
All ready? She asked. I hurried as much as I could.
Why do you want to rush so, Marie? I said gently. You got an hour and a half before you go on, and if you're late, they won't shoot you.
It takes a while to get there, she whispered.
10 minutes at most.
Sit down for a minute, darling.
You got me all mixed up. I'm spinning like a gyro compass. What goes on with us, anyhow?
What do you mean?
She said. I hate dames that ask me what I mean when they know damn well what I mean. You know, I said, looking at her. What about the kiss that didn't come off? And then the kisses that did? What happens now?
Oh, I wish I knew, Rex. Honestly, I do. You're a great big, wonderful, ugly, handsome guy. And I don't want to do what I know I'm doing. But I can't help it, Rex. You just have to take me the way I am. And maybe I can get out of it.
You're kind of fouled up, aren't you?
I'm so fouled up that I don't know if I'll ever get untied, Rex. You'll be better off if you leave me and never see me again.
I studied knots and how to untie them when I was a young sailor. I still know how. Just give me a chance to try. I smiled. I don't know what your trouble is, but I think you're worth saving.
Thanks, Rex. Let's go now. The public wants my sultry songs.
We drove down to the nightclub together, and I let her off at the front door. I drove to my apartment and took all the gear I had up to my place. Then I came down and took the car back to the rental agency and paid the bill. The evening had hardly started. I wasn't going to hear Marie sing for about 2 hours, so I decided to walk home, which would give me plenty of time to think. There was a lot to think about, and every bit had to do with the strange girl I was getting such a yen for. There had been a lot of girls in my life, and some of them were bums and some were angels. None of them ever had any reason to complain about the way I treated them. And while some may not have missed me as much as others after I was gone, there isn't one of them that I wouldn't be glad to see today. I think most of them would like to see me, too, except maybe they wouldn't want their husbands along. I've weathered better than a lot of husbands. But I didn't know what to do about Marie O'Connell. What I should have done was haul up my hook and tack out of the harbor. But, on the other hand, I was just curious enough to want to stay. Mixed-up thoughts were running through my head as I stuck my key in the lock and opened my apartment door. I reached for the light switch, and as I did so, the bright light in the living room went on. Standing in the middle of the living room floor with my own Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum pointed at my own midsection was a stocky guy with a bandage around his neck. The name I knew him by was Piggy Pode. He was standing in the middle of the room holding the pistol with both hands, and he was not the picture of health. In fact, he looked kind of pale and puny. "What the hell are you doing here, Peggy?" I demanded sharply. "You're not supposed to be out of the hospital. You better go back in a hurry." A noise that sounded like, came gurgling out of his throat, and I remembered they had put a tube in it so he could breathe. "What's that you say?" "Oh, you escaped, did you?" He nodded and smiled. I guess he was happy somebody managed to understand him. "What did you come here for?" "Kill you." I got that all right. He wanted to kill me. But he was still holding the gun in both hands, and the barrel had kind of dropped, so it wasn't pointing directly into my belly as it had been. "What do you want to kill me for, Piggy? What did I ever do to you?" He took one hand off the gun and touched his throat. "That was supposed to be a fair fight, don't you remember? You didn't get hit in the throat until after you tried to strangle me. Do you think it was fair to try to choke me or go for a gun?" He shook his head and looked kind of sheepish, as though I'd caught him stealing cookies. I took a step toward him and another. He raised the gun. I was looking out. He didn't have to warn me. The gun was pointing at my middle again, but his fingers hadn't tightened on the trigger. 6 more steps and I could chance it. My .32 was in the drawer of the table where I would never be able to get it. "Do you want a cigarette?" I said, pointing to a pack on the desk. "Oh," he said. He couldn't smoke. I could see why. "Do you mind if I have a cigarette? I kind of feel I need one. That gun's making me a little nervous." It was, too. He smiled and shook his head, indicating that it was all right for me to smoke. Getting the cigarette took me off to one side, but I ended up maybe a foot closer to him. He turned and watched me. "If you shoot me, they're going to catch you, and you'll burn for it, you know. They don't have anything on you now except assault, and I might let that drop." "What do you mean they're going to burn you anyhow? What for?" He put his hand up to his throat and clenched it. "Earl," he grunted. "You mean you choked the girl?" I felt myself go hot all over, and the back of my neck tightened like a bowstring. But he had the big gun in his hand. He shook his head, yes. "You mean you're sorry?" He shook his head, yes, again. "You won't feel any better if you kill me, will you?" I struck a match with a shaking hand and put it to the cigarette. "You don't feel very good, do you, Peggy? You're still sick, aren't you?" He looked sick. I took a step toward him, and another, and he just looked at the floor. One more step and I could have kicked the gun out of his hand and knocked him down. He beat me to it. He dropped the gun on the deck and staggered toward a chair. Instead of knocking him down, I caught him and held him up and guided him toward the chair. He looked at me and 2 big tears rolled down his cheeks, and he dropped his head into his hands. The first thing I did was pick up the Magnum and unload it, and I put it in the table drawer with the .32. He watched me. Then I went to the telephone and he started shaking his head. "What do you want me to do, Piggy? You can't stay here. I've got to turn you in. I'm going to call the hospital and they'll come take you away." He put his head down on his hands and started sobbing. I dialed Bellevue and asked them if Piggy Poe had escaped, and when they said he had, I told them who I was and where I was and asked them to come and get him. Suddenly Piggy stopped his deep sobbing and started coughing. He coughed violently, and then he fell on the deck and clawed convulsively at his throat. His lips and ears turned purple. In a few minutes his breathing stopped entirely and his body was limp. I felt his pulse and there was none. As far as I could see, Piggy Poe was dead. I smoked a couple more cigarettes while waiting for the people to come from the hospital. Finally, there was a knock on the door, and I opened it as far as the chain would allow. "Cops," a man in civilian clothes said, and showed me his shield. "You the guy what has Piggy Poe on his hands? Open up and we'll take care of him." "He's already been taken care of," I said, slipping the chain and letting in the cop and the 4 guys with him. "I don't think either the law or the doctors can help him now." One of the doctors leaned over Piggy and put a stethoscope against his chest. Then he took the bandage away from Piggy's neck and felt his throat. "Swallow the goddamn tube," he said to nobody in particular. "Silly damn thing to do. What happened?" "He was crying," I said. "We told him not to get excited," one of the other Bellevue men said. "He should have listened to us. Can we take him away, Maxie?" he asked the plainclothesman. "Just as soon as I get a statement," the cop said. He took out his little notebook and his pencil. "Tell me in your own words what happened, please." I groaned. "Do you mind stepping this way?" I asked. I went into the bathroom and stepped out of my clothes and into the shower. I walked down the corridor from the elevator and stuck the key in the lock and opened the door. The lights went on, and there was Piggy in the living room with a gun. By the time I finished, what with slowing down for his writing speed and answering questions, I was shaved and dressed and having a drink. I asked the cop if he would like to go out with me for chow, but he had to be getting back to Bellevue with the body and the medical boys. It was later than I thought. I got a little something to eat, then took my regular seat at the bar. Marie wasn't on, but the piano player was banging away. Tommy, the bartender, passed me a drink.
"Somebody called to see if you were here. I told him you weren't."
"Thanks," I said. "Did he leave any name?"
"No, he said he might call back later."
Marie finally came out to sing, and I was at the table waiting for her. By this time, the head waiter was keeping that table reserved for me, and meeting Marie there when she finished singing was a regular thing. "You were singing pretty wonderful tonight, darling. You look pretty wonderful, too."
"Don't say it if you don't mean it, Rex."
She sipped her Coke.
"Maybe I'm going to go away,"
she said thoughtfully. "What do you mean you're going to go away? Where are you going? Can I take you?" She shook her head.
"I don't mean it. I will never get away, I guess. I'm trapped, just plain trapped. I wish I could die, but I don't have the guts."
"What are you talking about, Marie? Didn't you have a good time today?"
"Oh, I had a wonderful time, Rex. The most wonderful time for as long as I can remember. You're the greatest guy in the world and the best for me there ever was. That's why I wish I could die before I do something horrible to you."
"Don't talk like that," I said. "Not here. You can tell me about it when I take you home tonight."
"I'm going home alone," she said. "I can't see you any more tonight."
"When then?" I knew better than to argue with her.
"I don't work tomorrow. It's Sunday. Call me at about 4 in the afternoon. Maybe we could have dinner. Do you have my telephone number?"
I wrote it down when I was there this afternoon.
"I hoped you would, Rex. Good night now. I have to go and get ready to sing again."
She touched her fingers to my hand and left. She was a very strange girl indeed. There wasn't much use for me to hang around, but I did just to hear her sing again. I was sitting at the bar with Tommy keeping the drinks coming, feeling lonely and wondering about the things Marie had said. When she finished, I paid the tab and walked out. The next morning I slept late, went out and got the papers and read them and wasted time until 4. Then I called her, and a strange thrill ran all through me when she answered. For a while I'd been afraid that maybe she wouldn't be there. But she was, and her voice sounded the same as ever. "Want to see me?" I asked.
if you want to see me.
You know I do, Marie. You said something about dinner. Where do you want to go and when?
You pick out a place, Rex. I'll like whatever you like. I'll go anywhere you say, as long as it's not big and noisy.
What time?
Any time you get here. We can always have a drink before we go. It's a nice day. We could walk wherever you want to go.
I'll be there soon, darling. Half an hour or 45 minutes.
I'll be here, she said. I won't go away.
It was about 5 o'clock when I rapped on her door and she opened it.
Hello, Rex, she said. I'm glad you came. I was lonely this afternoon.
I'd have come sooner if I'd known. I gave her a big smile. You don't need to be lonely now. Smile and look pretty. I'm here. Me, the man who is so nuts about you. She smiled and she did look pretty. She was wearing a light summer dress, all white, with a short-sleeved jacket, and she had more lipstick on than usual. I took another look at the lipstick and saw that her lip was swollen. What's the matter with your lip? I asked idly as I lit a cigarette. You walk into a door?
Oh, I bit it when I was eating my toast at breakfast, she said. Why don't you mix yourself a drink? I got some little things to eat with it.
The bottle of bourbon was still in the chest of drawers, where it had been the night before. She got the ice cubes from the refrigerator and broke out 2 glasses. Coke? I asked when I saw the second glass.
Give me a little scotch, she said. I'm tired of drinking Coke all the time.
We took our drinks and sat there in her apartment that was furnished just like thousands of other apartments where girls live alone. The television, the straight chair and the armchair, the sofa that can be converted into a bed if anybody ever comes, only nobody does. The green rug, the framed prints on the wall, the cocktail table with a copy of the New Yorker on it, the chest with linen and booze in it, and the silver tray with some figurines on top. The character of these apartments is the character of the person who lives in them. This apartment had a strange character, and I knew it. A strange girl lived there. Somewhere inside of me, the idea began to grow that tonight would settle things between us one way or another. It was just a hunch, but was a mighty strong one, and it kept building up. We had another drink, and we talked mostly about me and places I had been. I tried to tell her amusing stories about the sea and sailors I had known, and sometimes I got a smile and a little laugh. There hadn't been much whiskey in the bottle to begin with, and I soon finished it. Well, we better be going, I said. The bourbon's all gone.
There's another bottle, she said, in the bottom drawer. Open it and have another drink before you go. It's early, and I like to sit here and listen to you talk.
I don't need another drink.
I'm going to have one, she said. I only drink on Sundays when I'm not working, and another one won't hurt me.
Well, I said, never let it be said that Rex Howard would let a lady drink alone. I poured her a drink and then broke the seal on the new bottle of bourbon and refilled my own glass. So this chief machinist's mate that I was telling you about, I said, placing her drink in front of her and sitting down on the sofa to go on with my story, went back down to the engine room, and doggone if the fireman striker doesn't have 2 goats this time, both of them painted bright red. The chief lets out with a scream, spins around 3 times, bounces off the overhead, lands on his feet in front of the port throttle, and rings up emergency back full. I picked up my drink and rang up emergency back full myself. I had smelled that smell of bitter almonds before, and I knew exactly what it was. It was the same thing that had killed my sister Janice. It was cyanide. You're a cute kid, aren't you? I said. You goddamn murdering little bitch. Her face was chalky white. She sat in the chair on the other side of the cocktail table and looked down at the floor. Say something, I said. Damn it, Marie, say something, will you? What are you trying to kill me for? Don't tell me you don't know that bottle of booze was full of cyanide.
I knew,
she whispered. You knew? You knew, and you still talked me into taking a new drink that I didn't really want? What the hell are you trying to do, kill me?
Yes,
she said.
I had to kill you.
I stood up and stepped over to the cocktail table and looked down at her. Why? Why? Marie, I never did anything to you. Why would you want to kill me?
I can't tell you,
she murmured.
I had to kill you. Why don't you go now?
Go now? A blind black rage welled up inside me. I grabbed her by the sleeve of her jacket and yanked her to her feet. You try to kill me, goddammit, and then you tell me to go? You'll tell me why, you crazy murdering bitch, or I'll beat you to a pulp. Like this. And I slapped her across the face. Start talking, Marie, like you never talked before. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11. I slapped her again and raised a red welt across her face with my calloused hand. She tried to pull away and I jerked her back to me, tearing the jacket she was wearing. "Talk to me. Tell me why you did it. Say you're sorry if you can't say anything else." I took her by the throat, then let her go and slapped her across the mouth. A little trickle of blood ran down the side of her mouth. She licked it with her red tongue. Little beads of sweat stood out on her forehead. Somewhere back in her brain, a fire began to burn and glow out through the deep brown caverns of her eyes. Her head dropped down and her hands went to her mouth. I slapped her again. Why wouldn't she talk? I had to make her talk. She yanked her hands down from her face, tearing the front of her dress down to her waist. The light blazed in her eyes, and she threw her arms around me and started kissing me and kissing me, until my arms went around her and my lips parted and returned her sudden frenzied passion. "I love you, Rex," she panted. "Love you. Love you." She pulled me down on the sofa. "Hold me, Rex. Hold me." She dug her fingernails into my back as her hands clawed under my coat and ripped my shirt. I loosened my arms long enough to pull off my coat and fling it somewhere across the room. My shirt was in tatters by this time, and I could feel the blood on my back where she had opened up my half-healed cuts. "Hold me, Rex. Hold me." Her voice was the voice of passion itself. She bit my lower lip, and I cried out and kissed her savagely. "My darling," she murmured deep in her throat. "Love me, my darling. Love me." We must have been sleeping there on the sofa for a while, because the sun was almost gone when I opened my eyes and found her head nestled against my shoulder. Her eyes were closed, and she looked like an innocent sleeping child, with a little smile across her mouth. I touched the corner of her chin, and she looked at me with one eye and snuggled her head closer. "I love you, Rex Howard," she whispered, in the same tone she used when she was singing. "I'll love you forever, I know." I didn't know whether I could stand her kind of love forever or not, but I didn't say anything. "Shut your eyes," she said, "and let me go, Rex. I'll be back." I closed my arms tighter around her. "Stay here and tell me all about it, Marie. Tell me everything. I have to know." "I'll be back," she said. "I'll tell you then. I'll tell you everything. Now shut your eyes and let me go." A door closed at the other end of the apartment, and I opened my eyes. My coat was on the other side of the room, and I got it and took my cigarettes out of the pocket and lit one. Then I got the bottle of scotch, smelled it, and poured myself a stiff shot. I don't much care for scotch as a rule, but I figured it was better for me than the house brand of bourbon. The only thing that made sense to me was that Marie had to be hurt before she could be loved. There was a name for it, but I didn't remember what it was. That afternoon at the swimming pool, when she had seen how I had been hurt, it had almost been enough to take her. I wondered about the bruises on her back and her split lower lip. She came back to the living room wearing a silk bathrobe and sat down on the sofa. "Sit here beside me, Rex, and let me touch your hand. I don't know exactly how to start. Help me, darling." "Maybe you'd like to tell me why there's cyanide in my whiskey to begin with." "He made me do it, Rex. He made me. I have to do what he tells me." "Who was he?" "Giuseppe," she whispered, as if she was afraid of the very sounds she uttered. "Giuseppe Cogliano, the son of a bitch." It was the first time I had ever heard her talk like that. "Who is Giuseppe Cogliano?" "He's the devil," she said. "He's the very devil from hell, and I'm his whore, and I'm not fit to touch your shoes, Rex Howard. And yet I forced you to love me." There wasn't much I could say. I lit a cigarette. This Cogliano, I wondered. Did they call him Coggy? "Maybe some people do. I never call him anything except to myself, and then I curse him. I curse his father and his mother, and all the men and women who slept together to breed a thing like him. And yet, I'm no better than they are, for he comes to me and I take him, and I can't help myself." She broke off with a sob and buried her face in her hands. "Oh, God, forgive me for what I am." "Would you like a drink or something?" Old helpful Howard suggested. "No," she said, drying her eyes. "I'm all right now. I'll tell you about it. My father and mother live in Ohio," she said. "They're Greeks. My name really isn't O'Connell. They run a restaurant, and they're good, simple people. My brother was killed in the war in Italy. It nearly killed my parents. I came to New York 10 years ago, and I got a job as a girl in a chorus.
I didn't sing very well, but I was prettier than I am now. I was a good girl, but I used to have a lot of fun. I met Giuseppe Cogliano at a party with a lot of people and thought he was handsome. He was, too. He still is. He's charming, and most girls go for him and get into his bed when he wiggles a finger. But not me. He took me to all the big places around town and bought me expensive bracelets and rings and things, but he never mentioned buying me a ring for the third finger of my left hand, and he wasn't going to get me any other way. Then he went away. Actually, he was always going away and never saying where, but that was his business. I didn't know what he did, but he always had money. Nobody would tell me even if I knew who to ask, but I was Giuseppe's girl and didn't have many friends. This time he was gone for a month or so, and when he came back he called me up and said he wanted to see me. There wasn't anything unusual about that. I even went up to his apartment to see him. I'd often done it before. I wasn't scared of Giuseppe Cogliano. That's how much of a fool I was. He told me he had news for me. He had gone out to Ohio and found out all he could about my parents and where they came from. He found out that my father was in this country illegally. And that's where it started.
How do you mean? I asked.
He asked me what would happen if my father got sent back to Greece and my mother had to stay here, and I said it would kill both of them. He said he was going to do it, and I cried and begged him not to. I told him I would do anything, and he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Go back in the bedroom and get into bed."
She started crying again, weeping softly with her face turned away. "That son of a bitch," I said. "I'm going to kill him for sure."
It was terrible, Rex. When it was over, he kicked me and slapped me because I was unresponsive.
She burst into sobs again.
Afterward, because I tried to resist him, he'd always beat me again. Look at my lower lip, Rex. It'll be big and thick forever, but it wasn't always that way. I've never been able to wear low-backed evening dresses, except when he's been away for months, because I'm always bruised.
"You poor damn kid," was all I could say.
I'm ashamed to be a woman. Ashamed of my body, Rex, because of the things he's done to it. But he's got me changed, Rex. He's got me trained. I'm responsive enough now, I guess. I'm what they call a masochist.
She paused a moment, then went on.
He was here last night, Rex. We talked about you.
She pulled her robe more tightly around her.
Now you know all about me, Rex. I'm a gangster's whore, and a perverted one at that. Why don't you go away and leave me alone? I'm no damn good.
"What'll you do if I go?"
"I'll go along just the way I have," she said, "until my father dies. Then I'll kill Giuseppe, and they'll send me to prison. That's where I belong."
"What'll you do if I stay?"
"You won't stay," she said, "now that you know about me. I'm sorry I made you love me. You're the only other man I ever had. I wish I hadn't made you hit me first. I wish I could have loved you yesterday, Rex. I'm sorry."
"I'm not," I told her, and I meant it. "Tell me some more about Cogliano. When did he find out that you and I were—"
"Yesterday. He was out of town yesterday, and he came back and called me. I wasn't here, and he came looking for me. Then he found out who you were, somehow or other."
"Probably from the bartender," I said. "Or maybe he saw me. He had seen me before."
"You don't remember where I saw you first, do you?"
"Down at the club, when you sat beside me the first night I was there."
"Before that. I was in the offices he used to keep when they brought you in. You'd been knocked out with some kind of dope. I said you were so ugly you were almost handsome."
"Oh, I kind of remember that. Where did Coggy go after that?"
"I don't know. He just disappeared. I didn't see him again until last night. He was in a rage."
"What about?"
"About me and you. Mostly you. He said you had killed 4 of his best men and had all the police in New York looking for him besides. He said he should have killed you when he had a chance."
"Why didn't he?"
"I don't know, Rex. There's some reason why he can't kill you himself. He told me that. He told me he couldn't do it. He told me I had to kill you."
"When did he tell you that?" I asked.
"Last night when he left. He came back this morning with the whiskey and told me to serve it to you after you'd finished the other bottle. If you didn't drink it before you went out, I was to bring you back after dinner for a nightcap."
"Did he tell you what was in it?"
"No, but I guessed it was some kind of poison,"
she said calmly. The fire had gone out of her eyes again, and her conversation was perfectly matter-of-fact. Like I said, a strange girl. "It's the same kind of poison that killed my sister. Do you know where he got that bottle of whiskey? Did he poison it himself?"
Oh, he never tells me about what he does, Rex. He just told me to get you to drink it, but to be sure not to drink it myself.
And after I drank it, what was supposed to happen? I got up and lit a cigarette and poured myself a drink of scotch and started pacing back and forth across the deck. To my beautiful white body, I mean.
I was to call him, and he'd come.
All right, I said. Call him. Tell him to come. Tell him I drank the drink and I'm lying on the floor.
What if he tells the immigration men about my father? When he finds out you aren't dead, he'll do it, I know.
Marie, I said slowly, if you get him over here, I'll guarantee that he'll never mention your father to another living soul. I promise that.
I trust you, Rex,
she said in her strange way. She went over to the phone and dialed a number. I heard a voice answer, and then she said,
Giuseppe? He drank the drink. He's lying on the floor.
He said something, and then she hung up.
He said he'd be right over. I better go and get dressed. If he found me in a bathrobe with you here, he'd beat me again.
I just kind of stared at her as she turned her back and walked into the bedroom and closed the door. What I should have done was call the cops, of course, instead of thinking that I could take justice into my own hands. I should have also brought a gun with me when I came up to see Marie, but I hadn't. I hadn't even given any thought to what I was going to do if Coggy came in with 3 guys behind him. That wasn't too unlikely either. He couldn't very well carry my body out all by himself. But I did what I could. I emptied the drink I was supposed to get, but kept the bottle out where it would be handy. I checked the apartment door to make sure it was strong and had a good lock. It was, and it did. There was a bookcase beside the door. I moved it a couple of feet to give myself plenty of room. Marie was still in the bedroom when I heard the sound of a key in the lock. I should have remembered that he'd have his own key and wouldn't have to ring the bell. The door swung open while I approached it as quickly and quietly as I could. Luckily, the door opened toward me. "Marie!" he called sharply. "Marie!" She opened the bedroom door a crack.
"Hi, Joe," she said.
I must have made some little noise behind him, because he spun around and his right hand darted under the left side of his coat. He was too late. He got the gun out all right, but before he could bring it to bear on me, I had knocked it out of his hand, grabbed him by the forearm, and thrown him 6 feet into the living room. His right arm had an extra joint in it when he landed, too. He wouldn't use that flipper again. I picked up the pistol he had been carrying and stuck it under my belt. I was still stripped to the waist and covered with nothing except hair and a few old tattoos. "Hello, Coggy," I said coldly. "You're going to die soon, right in front of Marie and me. You got anything you want to say before you go?" "I gave you a break, Howard," he whimpered, all the fight gone out of him. He lay on the floor with a dull look in his eyes, holding on to his right arm with his left. "I could have killed you and I let you go. And what do you do to me?" "Broke your arm to begin with. As soon as I make sure this door is locked tight so we aren't bothered, I'm going to break your other one. Then I'm going to kill you as slowly and painfully as I know how. And I know how." I locked the door, put the chain on it, and pulled the bookcase across in front of it. "Get up, you rotten rat," I ordered, "and get into the living room. You know the way." Marie was standing at the bedroom door watching. "I can't," he cried. "My arm hurts too much. Get me a doctor, Marie. Get me a doctor, please." I laughed at him and grabbed him by his good arm and dragged him into the living room. He tried to kick me as I let go his arm. I caught him by the foot and cracked 3 little bones in his ankle. He screamed. I slapped him across the mouth, but not hard enough to break any of his teeth. That was something I could save for later. "Shut up," I said. "The more noise you make, the more I'm going to hurt you. You talk to me and I'll try to make it easier." He started to cry, great racking sobs that seemed about to tear him apart. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and he mumbled some words of prayer between his tears. Marie looked at him.
"Cry, you devil, cry! Cry as many tears as I have because of you. Cry every night for 10 long years like I have because of you. I will never cry again, Giuseppe Cogliano. Cry your own tears now, until you die." "I don't want to die," he moaned. "You're a coward, Coggy," I said. "You weren't afraid to kill, but you're afraid to die." "I never killed anybody," he begged. "I never did anything to you. You can't kill me." "Oh, yes, I can," I said. "Do you want to be strangled like Debbie Ames? Do you want to be shot between the eyes like old man Wirtz? Do you want me to beat you to death with a piece of wire like you almost did to me? Or," and I took the bottle of poisoned whiskey and poured a couple of ounces into a glass,
Are you man enough to drink the kind of drink you mix for my sister? You can go any way you want to, Coggy. Only make up your mind in a hurry."
"I didn't kill your sister. Oh, God, my arm hurts. It's killing me, Howard. Marie, how can you stand there and let me hurt like this?"
"Go back in the bedroom and get into bed," she told him. "Remember when you said that to me, Giuseppe? You hurt me worse than you're hurting now. I hope you're hurt forever."
"Howard, you can't do this to me. I tell you, I didn't kill your sister. If words hadn't been so crooked, she'd have never got that whiskey."
"Tell me more, Coggy," I said. "Tell me more."
"Do something for my arm, and I'll tell you."
He was trying to bargain, but he was in a bad position for it. I grabbed the little finger of his left hand and twisted it until it broke, holding my hand over his mouth to keep him from yelling. "Tell me some more," I said. "Tell me some more. You got lots of fingers." Just to make sure he got the idea, I held on to one. "And then you got toes."
"I tell you, it was Wirtz's fault. He was supposed to buy his liquor from me, but he got it from somebody else instead."
"Where did you get it in the first place?" I asked. "Don't tell me. I know. You stole it."
"I told Wirtz he'd get in trouble if he bought stolen stuff from anybody else, and he wouldn't believe me, so I arranged for him to steal some that had poison in it. Now I've told you, Howard. Do something for my arm, Howard. You promised you would."
He started groaning again. "This will fix you up," I said, offering him the glass of poisoned whiskey. "Same kind of stuff my sister drank. There's more if you want it. Why did you have to kill Debbie?"
"She found out about it. She would have told you. Anyhow, I didn't kill her. Piggy did."
He groaned and writhed on the floor. "But not until you told Piggy to do it. And anyhow, Piggy died last night."
"Please do something about my arm."
"Shut up," I said, "or I'll break it in another place. You and your broken arm. I've seen kids break their arms and not make as much fuss as you are. You're yeller, Coggy. Yeller through and through. You're a big shot when you got a lot of gunzels around to do your killing. But you're a dirty little yellow rat when you're in a jam. And you're in a jam now because I'm going to kill you in about 5 more minutes. How do you want it? How about a bullet in the belly? That hurts the most."
"You can't kill me,"
he whined.
"You can't kill me. The police will catch you and burn you for it."
"The hell I can't."
"Give me a chance to say my prayers,"
he begged.
"Prayers,"
Marie said.
"Your prayers. Pray for 10 long years, Giuseppe, and see if you can cancel out the prayers I've prayed to see you lying here like this. Go ahead and pray. I want to listen to it. I never heard the devil pray before."
He rolled on his side, moaning over and over again that I shouldn't kill him, that he hadn't done anything to me, that he had always treated Marie well, and that he didn't want to die. I never heard so much nonsense in my life. Finally, I rolled him over with my foot and propped him up against the edge of the sofa. "Shut up, rat," I said. "You've had all the time you're going to get, and more than you deserve. You should have been strangled at birth. Your time is up, chum." I pulled the pistol out of my belt and leveled it at his belly.
"Shoot him, Rex," Marie urged. "Send the devil back to hell where he came from."
Cogliano's eyes were wide with fear. He must have been seeing the souls of all the people who had died at his desire, and who were waiting for him now. His chin shook, and a little stream of spittle rolled down from the corner of his mouth and dropped on his coat lapel.
"You can't shoot me, Howard," he whispered. "You can't shoot me like this."
"The hell I can't." My finger tightened on the trigger.
"No, no," he begged. "I'm your brother, Howard. Your brother. You can't shoot me."
My fingers backed off the trigger. "What do you mean?" I barked. "Tell me what you mean, Cogliano."
"It's a trick," Marie said. "It's a trick, Rex. Shoot him. Don't let him live."
"You can't shoot your brother, Howard,"
Coggy said. He wiped the corner of his mouth.
"I'm your brother-in-law. I married your sister Janice in Hot Springs more than a month ago."
"And then your bad booze poisoned her. You say you're my brother-in-law, but you killed my sister."
"You think I wanted to kill her, you damn fool? Don't you think it broke my heart? What's the use of killing me, Howard, when I'm suffering more by being alive? Let me live and I'll go away. I'll leave town."
"He's lying to you, Rex. Don't believe him. It's a trick," Marie said.
"I swear I'll go away, Howard."
"So you're the guy who married my sister." I took a deep breath. A filthy crumb like you. The most wonderful girl in the world. And she had to fall for a lying, sniveling yellow rat. And then you managed to kill her. You wouldn't even send flowers to the funeral. You weren't even honest enough to use your square name. Where'd you get that Joseph Gillian handle, anyhow?
Cogliano, he said. Figure it out. Cogliano, he said. Figure it out. Gliano, Gillian. And you got me wrong, Howard. I love Janice. Why do you think I married her?
You don't know what love is, you murdering, foul-minded son of a bitch. The black rage was coming over me again, and I welcomed it. You're right, Joe Gillian. You are my brother, and I won't shoot you. A look of crafty hope flashed into his eyes. Behind me, Marie again urged me to shoot him. I tossed the pistol onto a chair. Brother, I'm going to tear you to pieces with my own bare hands. I dropped down on my knees and inched slowly across the room toward him with the sweat running down my face and my bare chest. My fingers reached out for his white face. I wanted to tear it apart and wipe the sneer from his mouth forever. It must have been something he saw in my eyes that scared him into the only courage he ever showed. His left hand with the little finger flapping uselessly reached out and grabbed the poison whiskey. He drank it in one gulp. He was dead before I stood up, and I was glad to see him go. I lit a cigarette and wiped my face with a piece of my torn shirt. Then I turned to Marie, who was looking down at Coggy's body on the floor. How do you feel, kid?
I have no feeling, Rex. No feeling at all. It's like I was somewhere in space with nothing behind me and nothing ahead.
She raised her face and looked at me.
What am I going to do now, Rex?
Come with me, I said. Come down to my place while I get a new shirt, and then we'll go and tell the police what happened. He won't get away.
You don't want me, Rex. You know what I am and what I've been. You're too good a guy to take a woman like me. A woman who has to be beaten before she can love you. But thanks for everything, Rex. Just stay with me until the police come and then go.
I'll send for them, I said. We better stay here until they come. Then I'll take you with me. I know a wonderful guy, Marie. A doctor. He can straighten you out and make you over again into a person who can laugh and live and love like other people.
Do you really think he could, Rex?
There was a new light in her eyes. Not the fire of passion, but the awakening of an interest in being alive.
I'd try it if you wanted me to. Maybe it would work out.
It'll work out, I promised. Now, I'd better call the cops. End of Chapter 11, and end of Murder Makes Me Mad by Ferguson Findley. Read by Ben Tucker.